The world was ending, people panicked, but the protagonist felt something strange. As he faced a creature, the feeling he had was one of peace, perhaps. But amidst his reverie, he realizes that this feeling was excitement. Before all these events, the protagonist didn't have an easy life. Even starting a conversation was difficult. He even tried some tips like maintaining eye contact and using body language. Everything runs through his mind as he wonders if the woman next to him is looking at him. The young woman then asks how the protagonist's weekend was, to which he responds that it was good, returning the question. The woman says that she and her husband tried to go fishing but were surprised by the weather. Jake is in the elevator again in silence and wonders what is wrong with him. Making friends seems like a very difficult task. Even after changing jobs to start over, he still hasn't made any progress. Jake is in a society that values social skills, so he doesn't know if he will ever fit in. To make matters worse, the only sport he has practiced since childhood is done alone, which in this case is archery. But this world is not made for people like him. Now Jake just sits for hours in the office as the day continues to pass. He feels like he is wasting his life in this city without family where almost no one knows his name. However, a blonde man arrives calling for the protagonist. After all, some of the employees are going out for lunch and ask if he wants to join. The blonde man is Adam, a natural leader completely opposite to the protagonist, but a nice guy. He doesn't mind starting a conversation when necessary, and this makes Jake's life easier. Normally, the protagonist wouldn't accept this invitation, but with Adam, things might not be so strange. So Jake accepts going to lunch with the other employees. He waits for the elevator with Adam and another man. A redhead named Caroline and another woman join them. Adam says it's lunchtime and he has the company card. Jake thinks Caroline is one of the few positive aspects of working there. The redhead says Adam will be fired if he continues to use the card frequently. She turns to Jake, saying it's strange to see him going to lunch with everyone. The protagonist thinks Caroline never says his name, most likely because she doesn't know it. It could also be because her attention is often elsewhere. At this moment, a super loud boom happens. In the elevator, people get scared while Adam asks for calm, saying it must be an electrical problem. But a new boom shakes everyone in the place. Adam tells Jake to press the emergency button. He quickly does so, but nothing happens. Then in the next moment, the lights go out while Adam asks about everyone's condition. At that moment, a system screen appears, informing the initialization of the introduction and tutorial of that world. This same message also appears in the sky for everyone to see. In what seems like another dimension, someone is interested in the Earth's initialization, because for him, it means more lambs to kill. In a completely white room, Jake wonders where he is. Then in front of him, a gray being welcomes him. Jake is startled by that appearance. The creature says it is an entity destined to introduce the new reality, but is on limited time. Initially, the protagonist doesn't understand this conversation, but soon he sees his own system window with his stats and statistics. The creature explains that there are some important details about this new reality. It also says that this universe is now part of a multiverse, and any further information will be provided when he needs to know. Jake doesn't know if this is incredible or absurd. The creature says it's time for classes. Several weapons appear, and Jake knows he needs to choose one. He understands that each of them has different status bonuses with proficiencies, but everything is quite self-explanatory. But soon Jake finds something that pleases him. The system informs that the archer class has been chosen. The creature announces the end of the introduction and that Jake will be teleported to the tutorial area known as the Great Forest. This place is full of dangers as well as perfect opportunities for beginners, with many creatures that can be slain to obtain tutorial points and acquire more powerful skills. There's also a chance of hunting a monster lord. The creature says the tutorial will last 64 days, with survivors being rewarded according to their tutorial points. Jake begins being teleported while feeling the adrenaline in his blood. This feeling of excitement makes him happy. Then he arrives in the Great Forest. There, all the elevator occupants are together in their new clothes, wondering where they are. Seeing his bow, Jake thinks this is not bad at all, and he sees how huge the forest is. Adam asks everyone to calm down because they are confused. At this moment, the ground begins to move. Adam asks everyone to stay calm because they are falling. The protagonist thinks he would have liked to know back then that it wasn't just the monsters that were hunting. Another group of people in the forest wonder if they are being followed. The leader asks for the person to show themselves. A young blonde appears apologizing because he was just looking for his team. The one in the group says he is just a kid and no one will attack. They ask where he last saw his group, and a young man responds that they were separated during a fight after they all fell. The leader says they could be anywhere now. He then invites the boy to stay with the group, so they can help him find his team. He accepts while thanking them. After all, he was very scared walking alone out there. In the forest, a woman from Jake's group asks what they should do, while another guy questions the alien's explanation about the new reality. Adam takes the lead and says they should take it one step at a time, and Jake thinks he was indeed born to lead. The blonde man continues saying they need shelter, water, and food. Jake thinks they are probably not the only survivors around. Soon that moment was perfect to learn about their skills and the system. Another good thing is that the team is well balanced. Meanwhile, an arrow is shot and hits the creature Adam was facing squarely. Jake was the one who fired in assistance. The protagonist thought luckily Caroline was a healer and had learned quickly. Night falls in the forest, now the group is around a campfire. Caroline talks about Jake being very good with the bow. He only thinks that now she knows his name. Someone arrives saying something about missing work, but will need their help when things get tough. Adam then approaches Jake, but the protagonist says he is not prepared because he is not good with words. Adam then says that in this new world, the old rules don't matter. Hours later during the first night watch, the woman with purple hair tells Jake that day she was going to have lunch with her husband and all this is crazy. Then she asks the protagonist if he has a girlfriend. He thinks not anymore. In college, he had two true friends, Andy and Madeline, where the boy was his roommate whom he could trust with his life. As for the girl, Jake was in love with her. This couple wasn't the sociable type, but enjoyed that solitude together. The protagonist thought those were the two happiest years of his life. But in fact, he was blind to what was happening right under his nose. Without knowing the story, the woman says it might be better for him to stay alone, but remembering her husband makes her anxious. Jake thinks he should say something, but she excuses herself and gets up for a walk. The protagonist ponders about Adam thinking of him as a leader and about Jonah who opened up to him while Caroline remembers his name. Maybe things are really different now. Then a scream is heard from the forest. Jake rushes out to check. 3 men are talking to Jonah and ask what her group is. The woman in fear says she doesn't know. The leader of the men says she chose this, and with a blow hits the woman's leg. After the scream comes a barrage of arrows. One of the men is hit in the neck. Another defends himself with his large axe. The leader points out from which direction the arrows came and orders his henchmen to get whoever is attacking. That axe guy advances, but finds no one and wonders where the archer went. From behind him, Jake emerges with an arrow in hand. The protagonist tries to stab the arrow into the man's neck, but his blow is blocked by the same. Then Jake is thrown away. The man advances with his axe. He attacks Jake with everything, but is stopped by the protagonist's bow. Jake thinks Jonah must be in pain and wonders where the other man is. Then he looks to the side. There was the leader coming with his hammer. But Jake realizes there is still another one besides him, and towards him also comes an arrow. The protagonist thinks he is really going to die, but at that moment, something happens to Jake. He feels time slow down, but it wasn't magic or a spell. Then the system shows that the primordial hunter bloodline has awakened. Jake knows it is pure instinct. He dodges the leader's hammer, grabs the arrow with his hand, and throws it in another direction, hitting the heart of the axeman. He can't believe he did all that, but already rushes towards a blade, and cuts the leader after that. Then several arrows come his way. He defends himself using the blade, and goes after the hidden archer. The man was in the forest vegetation. That guy even tries to go after Jake. He approaches, grabbing him by the clothes, and asks who the hell he is. The protagonist grabs one of his arrows, and attacks straight into the young man's eye, who falls to the ground without vision. Then Jake grabs another arrow, and now hits the young archer's chest, doing it a third time. Then the rest of the protagonist group arrives asking if they are okay. They wonder what happened when they see Jake on the ground next to the dead young man. Completely ecstatic, he says he won. Jake remembers his school days where there was a girl who was bullied. 3 boys made her cheat on the exam, otherwise she would be in trouble. No one would find out, she just had to pass the answers when the teacher wasn't looking. She says she could help them with their studies. One of them pushes the girl, saying that is a waste of time. Jake went after him just trying to help her. The boy asks what the hell he is doing. Jake hits him, but something happened. Because when it comes to good guys and villains, there was no difference because he ended up suspended along with the bully. In the present, Caroline asks if Jake is okay. He says he is fine after all that blood wasn't his. Meanwhile, the system shows that he gained tutorial points after eliminating those other survivors. Excited, he looks at the screen and sees a new skill, wondering what this bloodline is. Adam asks why the men attacked, and Jake says it must be because of the tutorial points, since he himself earned many fighting alone. They need to rethink the strategy to survive besides finding a place to hide. Adam thinks they should wait for the tutorial to end. Caroline calls for Jake and asks why Jonah was alone. He replies that the woman went out to get more space after feeling anxious. Caroline, irritated, says she is not well at all. She continues saying her healing can't fix Jonah's broken leg. Jake asks if he is to blame for this, and Adam intervenes, saying the protagonist saved that woman. However, he shouldn't have let her go alone and should have woken up the whole group. Jake apologizes, saying he needed to make a decision and just followed his instinct. Adam asks him to think more next time because they are humans, not beasts, plus Jonah could have died. Jake again apologizes. Caroline yells, asking what he would do if Jonah actually died. The group falls into complete silence after this. Jake gathers strength and then acts, telling Caroline to control herself. Because Jonah was only alive because of him. If he woke everyone up, no one knows what could have happened. After all, they were other humans, not animals, and asks if Adam would have the courage to take someone's life. He continues saying the world has changed with this. They must stop waiting for help like children and need to adapt to survive. Another man in the group then asks what they should do. Jake says they should level up to get through this. Do what the system asks and don't blame him for not adapting. In the morning, someone finally wakes up. It was Jake getting up and talking to Casper. The protagonist says he was waiting for him to wake up abandoned by everyone. Casper talks about it after all they thought and had a little talk. Then they decided to start carrying their own burdens. Jake thinks Casper was in research and development at his old job, and along with Adam was the person closest to him. The two bonded over the pathetic romantic lives they had, and apparently they were still close. Jake then sees Jonah. Casper says they couldn't save her legs, so they had to amputate at her own suggestion. But they are hopeful that once Caroline levels up, she can restore the lost limb, and Jake thinks she is too tough. That day, everyone gave their best. Jake said Bertram was one of the best warriors there, while Jonah used her magic well, and Caroline was the most impressive. What happened to Jonah indeed awakened something inside her. Even though some had potions, none of them helped with the woman's leg problem, and even without knowing how Caroline became a target. They didn't exchange a word after the incident at night. Jake wondered which of them would say something first. Maybe he should act as if nothing had happened, and that seemed like a good idea. An hour later, Casper asks Jake if he is sure about this training, and the archer confirms. That young man then prepares to launch a mudball. Jake thinks he should feel the attack coming by focusing and controlling his breathing, but he is hit squarely. Jake wonders why it is not working. Maybe his perception only works in real situations. Adam appears, saying they need to finish to look for shelter for the night. They find a cave that seems safe and protects against rain. Jake thinks this limits a possible ambush against the group, because just staying alert will keep everyone safe. Adam asks if he is still thinking about last night. Jake responds that he won't make the same mistake twice. The man apologizes for the criticism. After all, this archer didn't deserve it. Then he says he will go ahead and find a good place for them to stay inside the cave. Jake thinks that without Adam, maybe the group wouldn't have survived that first day. After all, he himself might not even be there if it weren't for the blonde man. Jake remembers Adam at work saying he asked for him on his team, and talks about taking him to lunch too. A noise echoes inside the cave. Jonah asks about the sound. Again, that noise comes out and everyone forms up. Rocks start falling from the cave ceiling. Jake says they need to get out of there. Adam orders everyone to run now. They move forward as the rocks continue to fall. Caroline lags behind and Jake calls for her. Larger rocks are over the woman. Jake then stops and turns. Then he sprints with all his speed. He manages to save Caroline from the collapsing rocks. The two barely fall to safety. However, they are separated from the rest of the group. Jake asks if the woman is okay. She replies yes. On the other side, Adam calls for the protagonist and asks if the duo can hear him. Caroline responds that they are there. Jake asks for silence. After all, that cave is very unstable. Besides, there could be other things hidden around. Caroline says it's not possible to move the rocks in the way. Bertrand wants to destroy the rocks on the other side, but Adam says it's better not to touch there. Jonah doesn't want to leave Jake or Caroline behind. Adam talks about other paths in the cave, so they should keep walking because they might find something. Jake knows there might not be another way out, but that is really the safest option. So he says he will go deeper to try to meet them halfway. But he thinks they still don't know what kind of beasts are in there. Even though he's fine, Jake wonders if he can protect Caroline. The woman turns, saying to Adam that they are fine, and they won't die in that cave. Jake really likes the woman's confidence. Realizing the dangerous situation, Adam asks if this was really a good idea, and Bertram says that duo might survive there better than they will. After all, even if Jake makes him uncomfortable, he is still the strongest in the group plus Caroline's healing. Then Adam questions about that little discomfort. Bertram says he agrees with Jake about needing to be stronger, but adds that Adam saw it too. Jake laughing in a pool of blood like a madman. But Adam says he barely survived that attack, so he can't blame a small strange behavior like that. Bertram continues saying tough times change people and Jake is now a loose cannon. However, Adam says he is his friend, so he will trust the protagonist. On the other side, the duo keeps walking in the cave. The healer notices Jake is hurt, but he says it probably happened when he threw himself. Caroline then volunteers to heal him. The protagonist then asks if she is not mad at him, but the woman says she won't let any of his wounds get infected just because they argued. Jake in his thoughts thinks he should remember the conversation classes to start a chat with Caroline. But before he can speak, the woman advises him to be more careful because even though he is strong, he is not invincible. Besides, they are still learning those spells and she won't be able to heal everything. Then Jake asks why Caroline chose to be a healer. She responds by asking why he chose to be an archer. Jake replies he chose the one he felt best with and could survive. She listens and begins to speak about her choice. Caroline says she didn't know much, but in the games she played, healer was always the least chosen. Jake takes the opportunity to get asked if she still plays but gets a negative answer. Caroline says her younger brother spent his childhood in the hospital, and as she couldn't see him for weeks, they ended up playing online games together. Jake then realizes he didn't know about her brother. She continues saying everyone asked her to play healer just because she was a girl. But at first she didn't like it and tried to be a fighter because she wanted to deal a lot of damage. But as soon as she started, she realized that class would hardly find a team. While as a healer, everyone was crazy after her. So she ends saying that it didn't matter the game, someone always needed her. And also talks about the protection received by healing regardless of the dangers faced. Caroline completes by saying she will survive. Jake recognizes her cleverness. Then the woman asks if he thought she was dumb or never thought much about it. Jake thinks he always had a crush on her but never stopped and really thought of her as a person. Caroline finishes bandaging the wound, saying he is good as new, and now they should keep walking. Further ahead, the duo finds two different paths. Caroline then asks what they should do. They hear noises from the walls. Jake just watches focused while Caroline calls for him. The protagonist asks if she felt something. He says his perception was not activated, however. It's like he could feel something right below the path. At that moment, there are several pairs of eyes watching. Jake concludes that there must be something terrifying, but he questions what feeling this is, because his instincts tell him to be careful, but another part of him is being drawn to it. So Jake calls Caroline to check it out. He says that regardless of what is there, it is strong, but they should think about the experience points. But Caroline won't do it because she just wants to find the rest of her friends. Jake says they don't know where the others are, they could even be down that path. The woman says that if a group isn't there, they will just end up going straight into some danger, besides the other path is in the direction they were last seen. But Jake says that only one of the tunnels guarantees XP, and that seems to be something desired by the tutorial. Caroline says that this is real life, his logic doesn't apply. The protagonist knows his idea isn't the best after all. His truth is that he is just looking for a new fight. Caroline continues, saying that it may be fun for Jake, but the others are just trying to survive. However, the protagonist questions if there is something wrong with wanting to be strong, because there they have the opportunity to be different and do things that would be impossible for a human before. He also questions if even with all this she just wants to survive. Caroline responds that some of them like how things were before. They didn't ask to be killers. Finally, she asks him to think about the group and stop being selfish. At that moment, new noises happen in the cave walls. Jake thinks he won't get anywhere like this, so he ends up agreeing with Caroline and going the safe way. She thanks him, so they keep walking. In the other group, Joanna wonders if the duo is okay and hopes they haven't been attacked. Casper says that with Jake there, everything should be fine. The only hard part is navigating through the cave. Even his perception being very good, he still has trouble seeing far there. Bertram realizes it's getting late and suggests to Adam that they camp before continuing the search. However, the leader wants to keep going. But the Hammer Warrior says they can continue searching in the morning, and asks Adam to think about Jonah too. Even though the woman says she is fine, Adam says they can't stop until that duo is safe. They soon continue through the darkness of the cave. Casper then asks if they heard something. Adam asks everyone to get ready. Bertram asks Casper if he can see something, but the boy says it's too dark. Steps are heard in the cave. Adam follows apprehensive in position. Those steps keep approaching, and Casper realizes it's fast. Soon after, he starts to see something approaching. Then with a lit torch, Adam calls for Caroline. The duo finally found the rest of the group. Caroline jumps going to Adam. Both are happy to be well. Bertram asks if there was any problem on the way. Jake starts to speak, stuttering, but Caroline cuts him off, saying there wasn't. It was just a lot of walking. Jake feels awkward after hearing that. Caroline then asks to find another cave to sleep in, preferably a less unstable one. But at that moment, Jonah sees something. She then attacks a small spider with her staff, and then apologizes for the noise. Casper says she shouldn't kill spiders because they are important to the ecosystem. He then picks one up in his hand and talks about the creature, then says he will take that spider out of there away from danger. He observes the creature a little more, then releases it. But he notices that there are many other spiders on the ceiling. Then Casper says there must be a nest for something like that, but also says spiders don't harm humans at the moment. But he doesn't notice a spider approaching his neck. Adam tries to run to save Casper, but the spider ends up biting the boy. Jake hears a noise and gets ready to draw his bow. At that moment, several spiders start to descend from the ceiling. Already in combat position, Joanna asks what they should do. Casper says he can't move. At that moment, several eyes appear from the darkness. Jake is startled to see, because a huge yellow spider appeared. Casper remains unable to move in front of the big creature. He is in panic, calling for his companions. At that moment, an arrow is shot and hits the big spider's mouth squarely. Adam runs, grabbing Casper by the arm. He throws the boy on his back and yells for everyone to run. Meanwhile, Jake keeps attacking the spider. At that moment, his group watches, while the protagonist keeps firing his arrows, but the spider now defends against the attack. The beast called Mammoth is at level 13. Jake is in a total state of excitement. Meanwhile, Casper and Bertram run. Caroline helps Joanna escape, and Adam advances quickly. Bertram soon says that everyone must get out now. Then Adam calls for Jake, who retrieves his bow after that, but apologizes to Adam while drawing his blade, because he won't waste this opportunity. The spider prepares to attack, but Jake advances, slashing at the great beast. He finally makes a cut on the monster's belly. Caroline says they can't wait for Jake, but Adam doesn't want to leave anyone behind. The spider soon hits the protagonist squarely. He is thrown with force, then crashes against the wall, with that rocks start to fall from the cave ceiling. Adam notices and gets worried. Jake gets up, saying that wasn't bad for a spider, and he thinks there's something bubbling inside him. Then the system informs that his primordial hunter bloodline has awakened. At that moment, his mood changes. Jake draws an arrow from his quiver. The spider remains ready to attack, But with his instinct active, the protagonist is prepared for anything. A giant rock starts to fall into place. Jake realizes that the cave is collapsing, but he doesn't intend to flee from this challenge, and thinks he is really a selfish guy. Then he remembers Caroline saying that not everyone hated their old lives, but that didn't apply to Jake. There, the protagonist thinks that just getting stronger is important, no matter what happens. Adam says the place will collapse if they don't have time for this, but soon realizes that Jake isn't listening to anything. Because the archer keeps fighting the giant spider, Jake realizes there will be an attack from the left, but with his instincts he manages to dodge, then anticipates a slow attack from behind. He thinks whether to dodge or block, but in the end he knows he must attack. He focuses while waiting for the right moment to strike. However, his attack hits someone's arm. Then Jake realizes something strange. A hand grabs him from behind and keeps pulling the archer. It was Adam waking him up to reality, asking Jake not to die for this. The archer just observes, but focuses on something after that. While the cave continues to collapse, the two run out. The spider remains inside the cave as the rocks fall. Outside, Jonah wonders where Adam and Jake are. Soon the two appear outside the cave. The healer notices that Adam is bleeding, and Jake says he cut their leader by mistake, thinking it was the spider. Caroline was about to question why the archer always seeks these fights, but is interrupted by Adam saying it's okay. But Bertram says being careless is one thing, but attacking a group member is different. They can't let this pass. Adam says it's just a scratch and Caroline can heal it. But Bertram starts saying that the group will never work if they're always worried about Jake's loss of control. Then the protagonist realizes that's how they see him. Even Caroline thinks of him as a killer. Bertram also says that situations like this will only get worse. Jake thinks they might be right, he could really be a risk factor for the group. Or maybe others are a risk for him. And he remembers that his concern for Jonah made him get hit in his blind spot. Also saving Caroline made him fall into that cave trap. And now Adam stopped him when he could have killed that giant spider. His thought is interrupted by a noise in the bush. Someone then calls for Jake. The protagonist points his arrow and asks who is hiding. A man then appears, introducing himself as Richard. He says he heard the sounds of rocks falling and decided to investigate. Also asks not to worry as he means no harm. Adam and Jake look at each other after this man's speech. The blonde man then says he doesn't want conflict either and is happy to finally find other humans. All other members of Richard's team seem to like the idea. He says his group and two more join together to face this tutorial, and talks about everyone meeting to unite because it ends up being a good idea overall. A young blonde man in Richard's group seems happy about this. The leader says he understands if they are reluctant to join, but uniting groups is more interesting for everyone. Squeezing behind Adam, Caroline seems uncomfortable. Richard then asks if she is a healer. Jake then realizes that the man is after Caroline, because healing classes are always sought after no matter where. Richard continues saying his healer died recently and they are running low on potions. Holding his sword, he says he doesn't need everyone, but those who want to go will be welcome. However, if the healer wants to go alone, it would be even better. Jake sweats cold hearing this, but still remains silent. Adam then asks what will happen if they say no. Richard responds saying he is a man of peace and likes to resolve things peacefully to keep everyone happy. But he doesn't have to do that, and adds that he will take the healer one way or another. Jake at that moment knows he needs to slow down and think. Everyone in his group is tired. He's the only one with enough energy to fight. Maybe he can take Richard with a surprise attack and wonders how many arrows would be needed. But he questions what he would do with the rest of the enemy group. Richard then says he won't harm Caroline after all, he needs her. In his thoughts, Jake knows that running away is not an option because they are in a larger group. At that moment, Adam calls for him and talks to everyone about agreeing to go with the other group, but Jonah doesn't like the way they look at them. Casper says Richard doesn't seem like a bad person because surviving without a healer in that place must be difficult. Adam then questions Caroline about this situation and the woman just doesn't want to fight. Jake doesn't like that his group is thinking about accepting this offer. Caroline says she trusts Adam's decision. So the leader talks about joining Richard's group, and Jake thinks that maybe this could be a good thing. He then asks Richard about his level. The man says he is level 9 and has others level 7 and above in his group, then asks who Jake is. The protagonist just thinks this is perfect, then says he is disappointed because he expected Richard to be stronger. He adds that his name is Go to Hell, and his level Go Screw Yourself. Adam asks what Jake is doing. Richard says he thought they were close to an agreement. Jake says not to worry because only he will not join after all, he has prey to hunt. But first he tells Richard to take care of his group, otherwise they will have to sort things out later, and asks if the man understood that, because he is not a predator in this whole scenario. Jake then draws his blade, and asks how fast Richard's archer could be. He continues asking if that man's ally would be faster than him cutting ahead. Richard doesn't like the situation very much. The protagonist turns to the group and says he will keep an eye on them. As he leaves, Jake thinks Caroline will be fine because they need her, and if they want the healer happy, they will have to protect Adam too. With all this at stake, Richard will think twice before doing anything to the others, which is good because Jake doesn't want to see them in danger. The protagonist hopes this really happens, but Adam asks Jake to wait, and Casper asks what all that was about. wanting to know if he is really leaving his group. Jake agrees after all he has other goals for the tutorial, but that the merger will be good for the group as they will have a better chance of surviving, and asks his companions not to worry about him. At that moment, someone asks Jake to wait. Adam then takes something from his bag, then hands over some potions while telling Jake to be careful. The protagonist is happy with this act, and finally thanks his friend, not only for the potions but everything up to that moment. Then the archer leaves his group behind. That young blonde from Richard's team seems to be walking somewhere too, but is stopped shortly after. Richard tells his archer that he knows what to do. The man agrees with his leader's request. Then that archer is in the forest saying that all this is a waste of time. But if they weren't really wanting to get close to the healer, he would have shot Jake in the back when he was leaving. A friend of the archer says the man might not even be at level 5. But at that moment, 2 arrows are launched. They hit the eyes of that man next to the archer. He and the rest of the small group wonder what that was. Then another arrow is launched, fatally hitting another companion while they wonder where the projectiles are coming from. At that moment, they run and scatter. Within the darkness of the forest, the archer and another man hide. They observe the entire area when some bushes start to move. The archer thinks he found the attacker and tells his ally to go ahead. The man advances searching. He looks for something on the ground, but realizes too late that Jake is behind him with a dagger, quickly preparing an attack on the man and fatally slashing that enemy. At that moment, the archer says he found him. He hits Jake with an arrow, but the protagonist just removes that projectile from his body and looks at the archer with great excitement. 2 more arrows are launched. Jake runs to hide behind the trees, thus not being hit by the enemy. Soon the protagonist starts observing. Meanwhile, that archer keeps hiding. An arrow begins to be drawn from the quiver. Jake prepares to launch an attack. The enemy archer thinks he has disappeared. However, Jake's arrow passes and breaks a branch that is about to hit Richard's archer, but that man defends with his arm. After that, he observes and searches where Jake could be, but the protagonist appears behind him with his dagger. Jake lands a blow from behind the man, falling on top of him, saying he can hear him. The last survivor of the group tells Jake to back off, but he stares at her menacingly. Back with the main group, Richard asks them to tell him more about Jake. Adam says there's not much to say, they just worked together before all this. But Richard said they seemed to be good friends at the farewell moment. Adam just says he was the manager of that office, so protecting his team was natural. Richard says he respects that and asks Adam not to think of him as a threat even though things got tense before. He also adds that no one will be mistreated in the camp because everyone must work together to survive. Adam asks about this camp. Richard says that's right because not all of the group are present, and then welcomes them to the base of operations. He says it's not much, but they grow every day. Caroline says it looks like a good place. There are other new people, and Casper thinks it's perfect when he sees a beautiful woman. Adam asks Caroline about the place. She says it's not a 5-star hotel, but it's much better than the cave. Richard says some of his men will show them where they will sleep, and asks everyone to get comfortable. Casper at this moment hears something and asks if everyone heard it too. There was the last survivor of the archers group running back. Richard calls for the guards. That young blonde man readies his weapon. Adam doesn't quite understand what is happening, but before they do anything, someone says that woman was one of them. She arrives calling for the leader. Richard asks where Nicholas and the rest of the squad are, and the woman replies that everyone is dead. At first, Richard thinks he was betrayed by Nicholas, and asks if his archer had killed everyone, but that woman says he is dead too. The leader understands nothing. The woman then says that Jake ambushed everyone in the squad sent. Richard questions if he killed everyone, how she could be alive. But that woman is whole only because Jake wanted to send a message to her camp leader. The protagonist said to the survivor that Nicholas fought well, and also that the previous message left was very serious. Richard angrily asks if Jake said anything else, but the woman just says that guy is not normal because he enjoyed it. According to the woman, Jake is a monster. In the forest, the protagonist looks for a place to rest and thinks he can now take a second look at the system notifications. On the screen, it showed his latest kills, and also that he is now level 7 with 1 free point to allocate. He realizes he leveled up a few times after the fights. With 3 free points in total, Jake thinks that stamina and vitality will be good in case losing knights becomes normal. However, perception might have better synergy with his bloodline ability, so he ends up adding the points to that attribute. On the status screen, the protagonist sees he has less than a third of his life remaining. He remembers the arrow he received and recognizes that archer as very good. Now without Caroline to heal, he will need to be even more careful. Jake remembers he still has the potions Adam gave him but needs to make them last. But coming out of his reverie, he realizes he is surrounded by hungry wolves. This was really a terrible moment to tell the truth. Back at the camp, that young blonde goes to talk to Caroline. He confirms the healer's name. The woman recognizes that young man as one of Richard's fighters. He apologizes if he scared her, but promises he is not one of the crazy guys and introduces himself as William. Caroline says he seems much younger than the rest. He says that's exactly why he needs to be tough because no one wants a 19-year-old on the team, then tries to show himself more intimidating. But he swears he is just a normal young man trying to survive. Hearing this, Caroline feels sorry, but the young man gives a malicious smile. Finally, a new day dawns, and with it many wolves are dead in the forest. A small rabbit approaches some leaves, but a hand comes out of the foliage. It was Jake, wondering how long he had been out. Soon he realizes it is morning, and also that he is all messy, but soon remembers he doesn't need to clean up if he is going to fight again. He thinks he is on his own now and needs to get to work. Soon he hunts one of those rabbits from before, then looks for a bird as prey. After that, he goes after a boar. Sometime later, he is killing a big lion. With this, Jake reaches level 10 in a single day. Looking up, he sees something shining in a tree and wonders what it is. Soon he sees it's not a trap because he didn't sense any danger. He thinks the only way to know is to go investigate. Then he starts climbing the tree, goes even higher looking for the shiny object. He soon finds a hole in the tree with a jewelry box. So Jake grabs the new object. With that, the system informs that in that box is a powerful and rare item. Jake doesn't understand how this could be created by the system. It would basically be a kind of loot then. Inside the box is a pair of enchanted bracelets that enhance all stealth attacks. Jake thinks this is indeed interesting and those extra stats are welcome. Then he realizes there is something else there. It's an upgrade token that can be used on any basic tutorial item. He thinks he can use it on his bow even though it is already quite useful. Then he ponders about upgrading his cloak, because if it could be repaired, it would be worth it. So the item is used to upgrade that cloak, now featuring cut protection and self-repair. Even though it's not as good as the bracelets, the enchantments are still okay. And even knowing that jewelry boxes are rare, Jake thinks he could find some more. He remembers that the giant spider's cave is very far. But if this is like video games, that place must be guarding something. But it won't be possible to go back there after the collapse. But looking to the horizon, Jake thinks there might be other caves around. Thus a few hours pass, and now he is in another place, though different from the first. Jake doesn't feel any danger related to creatures, but he feels there might be something special inside that cave. Smiling excitedly about facing a new adversity, he enters the cave carrying a torch in his hand. Inside there are some blue mushrooms. Jake spots one of them, and then sees a wooden door in the middle of nowhere. He realizes the rotting wood shows that it has been there for a long time. When suddenly a system message appears informing Jake that he has discovered a dungeon challenge. He meets the necessary requirements to enter, being level 10, not having a profession, and being in the top 5% in tutorial points. Already in the tunnel, Jake wonders what kind of place that is. Then the system again warns about the dungeon, and that he must survive all challenges, otherwise he will be penalized with death. Jake looks confused at the screen, and then notices that he gained a necklace out of nowhere. That amulet was given to those who entered the dungeon and also served as a small dimensional pouch. Jake thinks this necklace might be a clue about this challenge. Then that amulet begins to glow, leaving the protagonist without understanding anything. He thinks there must be something inside. Then a small blue creature appears. Jake asks what this is, and when he goes to look for his blade, he realizes it is gone, as well as all his weapons had actually disappeared. The blue imp lunges at him, attacking, but Jake realizes something. That little monster was pathetic. The little creature says it will show Jake, but he is just startled by the fact that the monster can talk. Taking a step, Jake ends up activating a button on the ground. Then a large spike comes out of the wall, going very fast towards the protagonist, who dodges, realizing that it is a trap. The spike ends up piercing deeply into the opposite wall. The monster says that was well done. Jake realizes something because where the spike hit began to erode, so he cannot be hit by that, and asks if this is some kind of deadly trap. The monster says he doesn't know. After all, he is just an idiot who was trapped in the necklace. Jake is surprised by this information, but the little creature says the protagonist has something bigger to worry about, because more spikes are coming towards him now. Jake knows he has to worry about the monster after getting out of the current situation, because now he just needs to reach the end of that corridor. Jake moves forward with speed, jumping and using the walls for support. The little monster says he didn't do too bad. Jake then asks if he will be followed around, but the imp says it's not like he has another place to go. Jake reaches a new place with several platforms that end at a door. The system warns that it is necessary to collect 5 silver mushrooms in this next room. Now Jake understands that it will really be useful to use the necklace's storage. He also notices that on the big wall there are many holes, but it's safe to say that some other acid spikes will fall when he goes to collect the mushrooms. The creature then says something about maybe Jake being able to use the holes to calculate the trajectories of the attacks to be able to take a less exposed path. And he thinks about the snake eating the mushrooms. Then what could the winged serpent eat? Soon he remembers that in the image there were only worshippers worshipping the creature. Jake says he doesn't like where this reasoning is going, so he makes a small cut on his hand and throws the blood on the drawing on the platform. It works, and Cecil says he hopes humans have a lot of blood. Jake just says it hurt a little, because there shouldn't be so much blood coming from such a small cut. Cecil informs him about a clear path where only 3 jumps are needed. Jake knows he can't stop now. He jumps again and continues on the platforms ahead, but he reaches a point where he slips on his own blood. With that, he starts to slide. Jake thinks the dagger did something to his body, and the blood loss is starting to take its toll. However, he just wants to keep moving. Jake makes another jump, now on a new platform. Another jump is made by the protagonist. At this moment, he feels something. His body seems to collapse. Cecil realizes he won't be able to finish the jump. Jake starts to fall towards the acid river, completely out of strength. But at the last moment, he manages to grab the edge. Using all his strength, Jake holds onto that ledge. Cecil tries to help, asking him to climb up because he is almost there. Jake thinks he knows that very well. However, his foot is already very close to the acid. He then uses his last strength to climb up, and finally begins to pull himself out of danger. But he still thinks he won't make it because the acid has dissolved his leg. In this desperate situation, the protagonist thinks he is really about to die. But he continues to struggle and crawl, because he doesn't want it all to end there. Cecil flies to his aid, and tries to pull Jake even though he's very heavy, but says he will manage to do it, while continuing to crawl towards the exit. He realizes his vision is starting to blur, and his body is showing signs it's going to shut down. He struggles not to think about that, and keeps making his maximum effort, just moving forward. Then the system informs him that he has reached the end of the room and his health has been fully restored. Cecil starts to wake Jake. The protagonist's body begins to be restored, and only then does he realize he is alive. Cecil jokes about Jake having died before. The protagonist also realizes that his body is back to normal without acid and with his clothes recovered. But Cecil soon wakes him up to reality because their time is running out, and only at this moment does Jake realize there is still the last room. He just asks for a minute to catch his breath. After all, he had practically died. That was the first time in the tutorial that Jake had faced death. He really likes fighting in danger and dodging fatal blows, but dying in acid alone in a cave like that, he can't accept it. Jake smiles as he says this to Cecil. But the imp understands him. After all, he was trapped for eternity in the necklace, thinking he would never see another living being. This gave new perspectives on things. Jake sees that this dungeon really sucks, so he won't let the place take his life. Soon the duo reaches the last room. This time, all the platforms are organized. Cecil talks about using the mushroom trick to cross again. However, Jake thinks this might be a mind game. The protagonist observes that the middle row has the third image, but it's only a wyvern with a mountain without more clues. He thinks about that beast roaring at the sky, maybe it's angry. But soon he realizes it's not quite that. Jake begins to remember himself some time ago. So he realizes that the creature wasn't angry, but rather it was roaring out of fear. And now Jake seems to know what to do. He starts walking forward. Cecil warns that the blue light is still active, and asks what Jake is doing while the human accelerates. He jumps with all his might, and ends up landing on the platform. Cecil, scared, refuses to watch the scene. But jumping again, Jake says that courage is his answer. After all, you must face fear. At this moment, Jake remembers that his old normal world was not made for people like him. Because against fear, you only need willpower. He continues to have flashbacks, while jumping across the platforms with courage, remembering when he left his group, but always forward against his fears, and with much courage. On the path he took, all the platforms fell after his jumps. The system informs that the third room has been completed, so Cecil celebrates. After that, all of Jake's stats and abilities were restored. He finally feels his body returning to normal. Cecil says Jake is indeed a madman. Now the system informs that the Hidden Courage challenge has been completed, thus unlocking a bonus room. Jake is surprised by this information. Soon the duo arrives in this bonus room where there don't seem to be any new challenges. There is only a large mural carved into a wall, and putting it all together, it seems to be something like a story being told. A snake ate many mushrooms. As it grew, it sprouted wings and flew across the sky. On these journeys, that snake devastated all the land below. Soon other creatures began to worship and follow such a winged being. It fought against increasingly stronger monsters until finally, the serpent became a wyvern, destroying everything it encountered, including its followers. After the destruction, the creature found itself alone at the top of the mountain, and continued roaring at the sky as the ages passed, until countless years later it finally ascended to the clouds, but no longer as a wyvern, but now as a dragon. Cecil talks about the creature even ending its own followers. The system informs that Jake has witnessed the will of a true dragon. Cecil asks if he understood the meaning of all this, but Jake also has no idea, but would love to fight that dragon someday. The duo continues through more corridors. Jake says he probably hasn't completely finished this dungeon. Cecil ends up bumping into his arm. The imp says that without the mushrooms, everything is very dark and doesn't understand how Jake can see there. But this is due to the human's perception points. However, Jake thinks that actually his bloodline ability helps even more in these situations. His perception sphere gets bigger when he is in danger, but now it feels like a small ray, like a passive skill. Jake wonders if Cecil might know more about this since he is much older, but he just decides to ask if the imp wants to go back to the necklace until they find light again. However, Cecil refuses to go back. Jake asks if inside the necklace is really bad. Cecil says the place itself is fine, and from there is also possible to see the hole outside. But once you enter, you can only leave when someone else lets you out. Finally, Cecil says he doesn't want to be abandoned for another millennium. Then Jake remembers he was trapped, and says he would never do that to the little creature. However, according to the imp, everyone says that. But at that moment, he finally finds light. Jake realizes this doesn't seem like something coming from a mushroom. When they arrive, he wonders what the hell this is. Cecil says the place looks like some kind of library. Jake starts walking through the new space observing, and realizes that those books are very old. He tries to pick up one of the items when a blue light prevents him. Jake understands that you won't be able to touch it. Cecil finds a bench with some writing items, but Jake can't touch these new discoveries either. He realizes it is a barrier, but no challenge had been shown yet. Soon Cecil finds a door and tells the protagonist. Jake sees that they just have to keep moving forward. The duo goes through the new part. However, there is a corridor with many other available doors, and Cecil thinks the dungeon has become repetitive. First, they find a bedroom, then they find a bathroom. In another door, there is a large garden. Further ahead, they find something like a science laboratory or a torture chamber. Cecil says they must be in an old house. Finally, the duo reaches the last door in the corridor. They begin to open it. It seems that this is indeed the challenge room, because there is another pedestal in the center of the place. Without a dagger this time, but something like an imprinted hand. Jake ponders that he must touch there. But Cecil, remembering the dagger event, thinks this is not a good idea. Jake then asks where the imp's sense of adventure is. He then brings his hand closer to the pedestal. At this moment, Jake feels something, because from under his hand a small spike comes out, and ends up piercing him. Cecil worries about the human. He removes his hand from the pedestal. Jake says the spike hit very quickly. This seemed very bad because his hand was bleeding and looked awful. Cecil then notices that a new pedestal is emerging. On this one, there is only a book. He notices that on the cover, there is the same snake from before. Jake says it might be related to the challenge. Then the system screen appears informing about the challenge, which is to become an alchemist of the malevolent viper and cure himself of the poison in 30 days, otherwise he will die. After all, that is the time he has before the poison deforms and kills him. Jake looks at his hand and realizes. The system also informs that rejecting this challenge will cure him, but he will lose everything he gained in the dungeon. Jake soon explains these options to Cecil. The imp asks what the human will do. Staring at his system, Jake says there is only one thing to do. After all, he didn't go into the dungeon to run from a challenge. Back in the Great Forest, someone observes 4 deer. It was Adam thinking that he and William arrived from the east. At that moment, the command is given so both advance. The deer notice the human's approach. Adam knows that to the south Bertram would be isolating the animals, thus cornering those deer to the west. Directly into the trap they set up the previous night. Adam calls for Casper at this moment. The boy pulls a rope with all his might. With that, he captures 3 deer with a trap, leaving one of the animals to escape from the net. Adam and Casper approach the captured animals. William rushes toward the fleeing deer. He throws 3 of his daggers, and 2 hit the animal directly. It falls dead on the forest floor. William celebrates that direct hit. However, Casper seems to have been injured too. William apologizes, saying he has terrible aim, but the boy says it was just superficial. The young wizard says that with this, they will have food for a week. Adam says everyone did a good job. Then he asks Lyra for help to finish off the trapped animals. An hour later, they take the prey, and Casper apologizes for not being able to catch them all. Adam says there's no need for that, after all they have more than enough for a hunt. Lyra asks if Casper is okay. The boy says he is fine and thinks it's better to take the game to that butcher. Arriving at the camp, Lyra says she will meet him shortly. Adam, seeing the conversation, says that things are moving fast between the two. Casper is startled and asks if this is too fast and hopes Lyra doesn't find him despicable. Then Adam tells him to relax, after all they are at the end of the world, so it's normal to speed things up. Casper asks if that's why the leader sneaks into Caroline's cabin every night. Adam is completely embarrassed after hearing this, but the boy reassures him that he won't tell anyone, even though probably everyone already knows about it. After that, Adam goes to the blacksmith's cabin. The man asks if his sword needs any repair, but Adam was there for Caroline. After all, Casper had been injured during that hunt and needed healing. The woman apologizes as she still needs to get armor for Richard. Adam then asks if the man is doing something. Caroline says that Richard always does everything to keep her on the main team. A while later, Adam says that Casper saw him visiting her at night. After all, the boy is stealthy, maybe even more than Jake. Caroline says that Adam always goes back to Jake, but it's necessary to move on. The man just worries about his friend. After all, since the separation, he never heard anything about his ex-archer. Caroline says that Jake is already grown up and can take care of himself. Adam wonders what he would be doing at that moment. Then the woman says it must be something stupid and dangerous. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, Jake tells Cecil he is tired of those mushrooms. The imp says that if he stops eating them, then maybe they won't always have to search for more. But Jake remembers that he unlocked an ability that allows him to learn about poisons by consuming them. Besides, it's not like there's any chicken around. Cecil says he is fine with his diet of moss and water, and says the protagonist should try it. The dude returns to that great library. Jake asks for a mana potion as he needs to recover before starting his preparation. Cecil asks if he can't just rest after all they dug for hours that day. At that moment, Jake feels a sharp pain. The protagonist says he needs to learn about alchemy soon, so he can make a healing potion. He starts grinding the ingredients until they turn into a paste, then injects mana into that mixture. Then comes the transmutation for the necessary attribute. And if everything goes well, that paste will turn red. But in the end, the mixture turns brown. Jake says that this was another ruined batch. Cecil asks him to calm down as it's only been a week of studies and he still has time. Jake says he has little knowledge to make potions and asks for another one to try again. Cecil says to wait some time because continuing like this will only be a waste. Jake again feels a sharp pain. Cecil runs asking if the human is okay. Then he realizes that the poison is getting worse because he is not well with almost half of his body covered. At the camp, Adam arrives asking if they sent for him. Richard thanks the man for arriving quickly. He goes on to say that a hunting party returned empty-handed, so they are short on meat. So Richard wants to send Adam along with others to hunt deeper in the forest. The blonde man asks if it will be outside the territory. Richard says yes, it's a little more dangerous, however it may be interesting. Adam thanks him but is not so sure about it. The leader says there's no need to worry, it won't be a deadly mission because he won't send any man to his death. Adam then says he wants to take Caroline since it's good to have a healer on the team. Richard doesn't think it's possible because he divides the teams very strictly. Adam understands and plans to go soon to gather his team for the mission. But before he leaves, Richard asks him for a favor, which is to leave Casper at the camp. Adam questions this request. Richard then says they spotted a broken fence and are afraid it might be another group of survivors circling the area, and since Casper is good with traps, he could reinforce that perimeter. Adam says he will talk to the boy. Later that day, Bertram gathers some animals and asks how many more badgers there should be. Lara says there should be 8 in total. Adam talks about the beasts being much harder there, as their number is much greater too. William comments that they earned a lot of tutorial points with this. Adam says the boy is drenched in blood and asks him to go wash up while they wrap up the animals. William just agrees to that. On the way to the river, that young man thinks that Adam and Richard are already annoying him. William continues pondering that the two are like NPCs, but that doesn't matter after all, he will soon leave their camp. At that moment, he hears something. William hides because he knows someone is nearby. A man asks for silence because they don't know if there is anyone around. A woman asks for calm because they will be quick. And a wizard appears saying he just needs to wash his wand. William, still hidden, realizes there is no healer there and wonders how many tutorial points that group would give. At that moment, a noise is heard in the bushes. The group leader asks who is there. William feels he needs to stay calm, after all he has done this same trick other times. The woman points an arrow asking him to come out slowly or she will shoot. William comes out apologizing, saying he got separated from his team after an attack. The archer asks if that is really true. The blonde boy thinks women always fall for this. But then an arrow is launched, stopping close to his head, leaving him puzzled. The archer says that no one there was born yesterday. The knight asks William to leave his items and slowly step back. That young trickster agrees to this request. The archer asks for haste, still pointing her weapon. The boy kneels with a smile and tries to reach for his wand. The archer notices this and shoots a new arrow at the boy, but he manages to throw himself and dodge. With the wand in hand, his daggers get ready. The knight defends against some with his shield and asks them to get the boy now. 2 more arrows fly in the attack, and again William dodges the projectiles. The team's wizard wonders what kind of magic that boy uses. Meanwhile, William thinks they are stronger than he imagined. The archer has the boy in her sights, but at that moment he thinks they are just not strong enough. Then one of his daggers pierces and kills the woman. She suffers in agony after his attack. The knight despairs and runs to the woman, but then 2 more daggers fly, chopping off the heads of the knight and the teen wizard. Sometime later, William sees his system screen sitting on the corpses. He realizes they were level 10 and 2 others level 9, so it was not a waste of time. At that moment, someone calls for William in the forest. The boy realizes he might be in trouble. It was Lyra asking if the young man was ready. William despairs because he is still among the corpses. The girl is in shock, asking what all that is. So that young man says she should just mind her own business. Then 5 minutes pass and William returns to the group. Adam says they sent Lyra to find him. The boy just replies that he didn't see the girl and assumes she might have gotten lost on the way. In the library, Cecil arrives with more mushrooms for Jake, but the imp doesn't find the human. Soon he finds Jake lying on the ground. Then shouting, Cecil calls for his friend, and soon begins to make an effort to wake him up. But the imp realizes that the poison must have exhausted his energies. But soon thanks God because Jake managed to make some healing potions. Then Cecil starts giving him one, and again tries to wake his friend. Jake wakes up asking what is happening. Cecil also doesn't know very well after all he already found him lying there. The protagonist says he is just exhausted. Seeing that there are hundreds of potions, Cecil then questions how many he made that morning. Jake says he was finally getting the hang of alchemy and will probably try to create poisons next time. However, his little monster friend asks him to rest a bit before continuing. But the request is denied after all. Jake is running out of time and needs more practice urgently. Cecil says there are still 2 weeks left, but if he continues at this pace, he might not even make it that far. However, he replies that he sounds just like his old colleagues at work. After all, they always tried to take the easiest paths, too afraid to challenge themselves. The little imp asks again for the human to relax. Jake criticizes this again, calling it a cowardly mindset. But then his alchemy pot is knocked over because Cecil doesn't believe in that either. All this potion is spilled on the ground. Jake says he didn't mean to offend. The imp confronts the human, saying he is not a coward. Finally, Jake apologizes, and Cecil leaves, saying whatever, but he should pick his own mushrooms next time. The next day, Cecil still doesn't return to the library, making Jake wonder if he should go and apologize. But he quickly changes his mind because the work needs to continue normally. Now he finally finished that introductory book on offensive alchemy along with his necrotic potion recipe. Knowing this, Jake thinks that making poisons is very similar to creating cures. Their biggest differences are when it comes to crushing the vitality of the necessary ingredients, and also amplifying the applicable properties to deal damage. Right after that, the system notifies him that he has successfully created a common necrotic potion. Happiness fills Jake, who calls for Cecil to share this moment of victory. But silence still fills the entire library. Then Jake calls again for his imp friend who disappeared a day ago. But everything remains silent in the place. Then Cecil appears, asking what the human wanted with him. All happy with his success, Jake says that on his first attempt he managed to make poison. Grumbling and very sarcastically, Cecil asks if he wants a cookie or something. At that moment, the protagonist realizes that his friend is still mad at him because of the previous argument. Then his system notifies a level up in the profession of the Malevolent Viper Alchemist, now reaching 24 with 2 more points free to allocate. Finally, a screen appears with all his stats as well as basic information, so Jake thinks he should put more points in wisdom. He also talks about alchemy finally paying off. A new system screen appears saying that his profession can evolve after all the requirements have been met. Jake doesn't understand any of this, but his blue friend thinks it's interesting. Now the system says that his talent for alchemy is unparalleled and then asks if he wants to evolve. At this moment comes the doubt if Jake can become an even stronger alchemist. He accepts, but even Cecil can't answer. Now a warning screen appears saying that delaying the evolution could cause adverse effects and he will no longer be able to acquire new points. At this moment, Jake realizes he never really had options. After accepting, he wonders what will happen now. Then the whole place starts shaking non-stop. Something is really happening at that moment. Cecil quickly asks if Jake did something for this to start so quickly. The next moment, the dew is enveloped in a green mist and that space begins to change. Soon they fall to the ground in a new place. Seeing all that immensity of what seems to be another dimension, Jake asks about all this, because even without knowing where he is, he doesn't feel any sign of danger nearby. But as he walks, he realizes something is coming, so he quickly turns around. Someone with very pale skin takes steps towards him. A young man with scales wonders about the dew in that place. Jake finds it strange that his bloodline did not activate and he did not feel any hostility. But he knows it is dangerous, so the creature asks if the dew did not hear him. Again asks why the two are there. Now Jake tries to calm down. After all, he is not in danger. Then he begins to talk about how he was becoming an alchemist and soon after fell into that place. The mysterious being seems to have understood well, then says it's a pleasure to meet him. After all, he was the malevolent viper Jake was talking about. But then that being tells everyone to go to hell. The protagonist questions that he doesn't look like a snake dragon. The viper talks about that. Soon his hands and legs transform, becoming scaly, then wings sprout very easily. Finally, Jake sees a majestic dragon right in front of him while the viper asks if this form is better. At that moment, Cecil says he can't believe he is actually in his presence, also saying he is one of the loyal servants of the viper. Seeing that the small creature claimed to be his servant, she must have preceded the very order itself. However, the young man stated that he was not his servant, he was only there to explore the dungeon. The viper was impressed that the young man was going through all of this. After all, he had built all those traps many years ago. Hearing this, the young man realized he was standing before the very designer. How curious. He asked what he thought about the part where one had to feed him things, or about the part where he made them learn about his history, only to be rewarded with a mural of him doing cool things. A rather narcissistic attitude, but the designer took that comment as a great compliment. Continuing the conversation, he asked if he was some kind of deity, and that is exactly what he is. Just keep leveling up and eventually he will receive his own dimension. It's a bit boring in the end, but being immortal is very nice. Having his own dimension seemed interesting, but the young man refused immortality. Ephemerality is what makes life interesting. To the designer, that logic made no sense at all. And even though he had that opinion, he said he liked it. Cecil bowed to the ground, apologizing to the viper for what his companion was doing. He didn't understand how Jake had the courage to talk to a god like that, as he was terrified just by being there. Even Jake himself couldn't answer, maybe because his willpower was strong, but the viper affirmed that's not how it works. Status changes some things, but the mind remains unaltered. Willpower helps endure immortality and its duration, but that's only possible if one already has these abilities from the start. Many beings of immeasurable power ended up succumbing to the demons of their own minds. Some never managed to cope with it, and contrary to what one might think, time is not capable of healing all wounds. Jake noticed a lot of melancholy in the viper's words. Now he seemed quite saddened. He told the boy that the road to power is extremely lonely. Family, friends, everything important eventually gets left behind. Jake stepped closer to him with some empathy, recognizing that the Viper must have made difficult choices. Placing his hand on his shoulder, he stated that hiding in that dimension wouldn't help at all. Cecil was horrified by how casually he touched the god. The Viper shook his head, saying that the young man wouldn't understand the situation. Jake said he ran because his strategy wasn't working. It was time for him to try something different. Cecil was now sure they would die a violent death. After hearing those words, the Viper looked firmly at the boy. Even though he was apprehensive, he waited for a response. The Viper joked about the situation, saying the young man was too emotional. That made him sympathize with the boy. Curious, Cecil wanted to know what the Viper thought of him, but the designer didn't even know he was there. They talked for a few hours. The Viper now knew his story, especially about Caroline. Cecil, who also knew the narrative, considered it a female archetype. The other two just stared at him as if he hadn't understood anything. They immediately burst into laughter at his comment, leaving Cecil quite irritated. Continuing to tease the little creature, the Viper said that Diabetes must have a lot of experience with women. Jake realized he must have ignored a notification earlier. A skill from his lineage had progressed. The Viper asked what it was. Apparently, his perception had doubled in capacity. The Viper was intrigued by the young man's lineage, saying it seemed very interesting. Seeing his reaction, Jake wanted to know if he knew anything about it and if he could teach him more. The Viper replied that the system did not react well to the sharing of secrets. This had been the case ever since a minor god destroyed a universe, assuring them it wasn't him who did it. Disappointed, Jake sighed as this was the expected outcome for his question. The time they spent together was very fun, but the Viper acknowledged that it was time for them to continue their journey. That encounter made him reflect a lot on life, praising Jake since it was uncommon for him to meet someone with such ambition. Excited, Jake wanted to know if he had passed his job interview, asking if he was now a true alchemist of the malevolent Viper. The god answered yes, and placing a hand on Jake's shoulder, he said he had something that would help him on his journey. A small thread of karma, and the boy's body began to glow. The Viper thanked them for their company, and Jake bid farewell, saying it was fun. Waving his hand, he hoped they could meet again soon. The god knew that his bloodline was very powerful and decided he should keep an eye on him from now on. Now he had other things to do. He agreed that he had remained idle for too long. It was time for the malevolent Viper to make his return. That man said it had only been a short time since they sent Lara to search for William. He was surprised to hear that because he hadn't found her anywhere. He only hoped she hadn't gotten lost along the way. Upon arriving at the camp, they were welcomed. The young man who received them asked what they thought of the new fence. Without answering his question, the group approached Casper with sadness in their eyes. He finally realized that Lyra was not with them. All they could do was apologize. They said they didn't know what had really happened, only that she had gotten lost in the forest. Casper was deeply irritated by that explanation. The group had searched for her for hours in the forest without finding any trace of her whereabouts. Given that, they didn't know what to think about what might have happened. Casper couldn't hide his irritation. This had to be a joke. The young man shook his head, signaling that it wasn't a joke. Lyra was gone, and they couldn't do anything about it. After hearing those words, the young man finally allowed himself to grieve. A week passed, and someone was presenting a report about William. During the past night, he had attacked yet another group of survivors. The chief assumed it was Hayden's group. His servant confirmed that was exactly the case, and Hayden's son had lost his life in the battle. This outcome made things even more problematic. But that wasn't all. William had also made a mark on the boy's head. He left them a message, saying that Ricardo was saying hello. Now it was only a matter of time before retaliation came upon them. They found some arrows on the camp's perimeter, and based on how they were made, they didn't belong to them. It was clear that Hayden was after the one responsible for what had been done to his son's body. Killing was one thing, but what had been done went too far. Protecting William was going to be more troublesome than beneficial. The servant was just waiting for the order. Once authorized, he would take care of everything. He already had 2 of his men spying on William as they spoke, but the chief asked him to remain in the shadows. He had seen many situations like this before. The boy was very skilled, even if he was arrogant. If he could be controlled, he could be very useful to them. Without questioning, the servant agreed with the chief's words. Going to William, they asked if he had made any progress with the stone-tipped arrows. The boy had finally finished all of them. It had taken longer than expected because he was still getting used to this new profession. The woman noticed that his body was covered in grease. That made her hug him, trying to wipe off some of the dirt. But he said there was no problem in getting a little dirty because of work. The man in the background said that was a sign of someone working hard. For the woman, it would have been better if he had taken up tailoring. Even working with leather would be easier than this. However, the boy enjoyed working with blacksmithing, and Smith had been teaching him everything he needed to know. Understanding that he enjoyed it, the woman asked him to be careful. With a smile on his face, he said he would. Watching them walk away, he recognized that this was getting too annoying. The impression he had was that Caroline thought she could tell him what he should or shouldn't do. He was sure that if she weren't so beautiful, no one would tolerate her irritating comments. Regardless, a war between Richard and Hayden was about to break out. And once he had taken down enough people and earned his bonus, he would be able to leave this place. While lost in his own thoughts, Smith asked the boy to help him with some boxes. Full of excitement, he went to the man to assist him. Elsewhere, The prepared arrows were being delivered. He just didn't know why Casper hadn't gone to pick them up himself. They could have used this opportunity to step out of the tent and clear their minds a bit. Casper revealed that he did not want to see that person. The man who came to deliver the arrows assumed he was talking about Smith. Only then did Casper say that the person he didn't want to see was William. The man knew that Casper believed the boy had something to hide about Lyra's disappearance, but he couldn't accept the boy's innocence. He was sure that something was being hidden. Besides, Jake would never trust him. After the brief outburst, silence took over the tent. Concerned, the man asked how long it had been since Casper last slept. Irritated, Casper told the man not to bother him, he was fine, and if he didn't want to help, then it was better to leave him alone. The man said that having some level of distrust was okay, and that he had never said Casper was wrong. Before continuing, he let out a long sigh. He commented on how Casper had been acting around the camp. It was clear that he looked at William as if he were a target, to the point that he was scaring the others with his attitude. They thought he might snap at any moment, and in a way, they were right. That was why the man wanted to know what Casper planned to do with all those traps, because they didn't look like they were made to capture deer. Casper replied that there were many terrifying things deep in the heart of the forest, and it was time for someone to start hunting those things. The young man continued doing an endless number of push-ups. Cecil interrupted his exercise routine, wanting to know if Jake was ready. Even so, the boy kept practicing. Realizing he was being ignored, Cecil wanted to know how long he had been training. Finishing his exercises, Jake said he had only trained for 30 minutes. Checking his status, he wished his progress had been greater but recognized that it wasn't bad for a month of training. Cecil warned him not to tire himself out yet because they had a long day ahead. Jake couldn't hide his excitement, as he was finally going to leave that damn cave. Seeing the boy's happiness, Cecil reminded him that he still needed to craft an antidote. The poison was spreading rapidly through his body, and its effects could be fatal. There was about a day left before he could deal with this problem, but Jake was confident that he would succeed in his actions. Inside the camp, William continued occupying himself with small tasks. He was interrupted by Caroline, who told him that Richard's armor would still take some time to be finished. But the woman hadn't come to talk about that. She was there to warn him about something happening. She told him not to go near Hayden's camp from now on. Playing dumb, he asked if everything was alright. But things were getting intense. Richard said he could still go hunting as long as he didn't approach the other camp anymore. Receiving the warning, William assured her that he would be careful. Caroline was relieved that the young man had listened. She tried to give the same advice to Casper, but he was still refusing to listen. William didn't understand why the guy would be heading toward enemy territory. Maybe it was to set traps. Lately, Casper had been living in his own world. That made her wonder how many tutorial points he had accumulated by now. After their brief conversation, William assured her that she could trust him. He gave her his word that he would stay away from the enemies. Returning to the chief's room, he wanted to know how the conversation had gone. Caroline had completed her mission. Now she was sure that William would follow Casper's trail. To Richard, this had been an excellent plan to execute. Even though he didn't like things to be this way, those two had been causing problems for the camp. William didn't believe he had a brilliant mind, while Casper seemed like he could burn the camp down any moment. To Caroline, the boy was simply going through his grieving period. Richard disagreed, pointing out that Casper had disappeared for days after learning about Lyra's disappearance. He had gone into the forest to search for the girl. Casper shouted desperately, hoping to find something or some sign. Near some creatures, there was a body lying by the riverbank. It was definitely Lyra. He drove the creatures away and approached the girl. Dropping to his knees beside her, he began to lament. Heartbroken, he wanted to know who was responsible for this. He couldn't accept what his eyes were seeing. Looking at the girl's abdomen, he started noticing the wounds. There was something there that caught his attention. She had definitely been wounded by a dagger. He wondered who might have thrown them at her. Still trying to process his grief, he heard someone calling his name. Casper responded by asking who was there in the forest. Once again, the voice called out to him. The mysterious entity wanted to know if he wished to bring the girl back. Desperate, he said yes. The voice told him to follow the sound, leading him to a hidden dungeon. A few days had passed since that happened. Casper returned to the camp completely different. His companions noticed that he had changed significantly. Richard knew that something outside had changed him, and now he struggled to trust him. Caroline cried over the situation because he used to be one of her friends. The tutorial was cruel, but it would soon come to an end. Once they returned to Earth, they could rest and rebuild their lives. She should be optimistic. Maybe Casper could kill William and return to the person he once was. Adam would definitely be very happy to have his friend back. That was the result they all wanted, and they tried to support each other, so that in the end, she and Adam could have their long-desired happy ending. Wiping away her tears, Caroline began to wish they could leave this cursed place as soon as possible. Richard smiled, thinking about how foolish people in love could be. Meanwhile, Casper was in the forest, apparently in a meditative state. He could hear movement among the bushes. As expected, the person he was waiting for was approaching. William walked up amicably, introducing himself in a polite manner. But there was a certain deception in his words as he said he knew he was being expected. Casper responded that the boy had arrived at the perfect time. They exchanged brief glances as if they both knew what was about to happen. A confrontation between them was inevitable. Caroline had warned him not to approach, but knowing the animosity between them, he knew they would face off. Acting cynically, William claimed not to understand the reason behind it. That only made Casper even more furious. He knew that William was responsible for what happened to Lyra. Even if he had done it, William said it wasn't something that mattered to him because Casper was much weaker than him and hadn't been earning tutorial points. Even after hearing that, Casper only became even more enraged. He remembered the day he met his friend. He had been very shy during that first encounter. The girl had liked his name because it reminded her of a movie. Casper thought his name was stupid, but Lyra strongly disagreed, believing his name was very cute. That was how she managed to win his affection. A week after they met, the two had grown closer. That was when Lyra asked if he would be interested in going out with her someday. It caught him completely by surprise. She apologized, saying she found him very interesting and didn't want to sound stupid in front of him. To her surprise, the boy confirmed that he would like to go out with her, but he worried that she had misunderstood and thought he also found her stupid, until she unexpectedly interrupted his explanation with a kiss on the cheek. Casper was truly devastated. He had lost someone he loved. William mocked him, saying the boy had lost his logical reasoning because of his emotions. Casper's fury grew even more. Losing the one he loved meant he had also lost his world, and now he wanted revenge on the person who did this. William stated that a fight between them wouldn't bring the girl back. Even if William didn't understand anything, Casper still wanted to fight. Love was too complex an emotion for an idiot like him to comprehend. William felt provoked, realizing that Casper's strategy was working. Casper knew the boy disregarded the emotions of others, and that was his greatest weakness. After hearing that, William said he was running out of patience. If Casper didn't do as he said, he would have to confront him. But the threat was only effective if Casper still feared death. Since that wasn't the case, William was determined to take his enemy's life. He threw several daggers at him. They flew through the air, only to be blocked by Casper's spear. William hadn't expected the boy to be so fast and agile. As he processed this, Casper was already prepared to counterattack. This time, he was the one who threw a dagger, but the blade missed William's face completely. William started smiling carefreely, stating that it hadn't even been dangerous, until Casper revealed that he hadn't been aiming at him. His dagger managed to cut a hidden rope. That was why he had prepared so many arrows. William was relieved to have some metal left with him. Taking advantage of the fact that William was distracted while defending himself, Casper launched a fatal attack against him. But none of his strikes managed to hit the boy. However, by forcing him to step backward, he made him step into a large trap. William had to use magic to free his own foot. It was in that moment of distraction that Casper's spear tip approached him. Even so, William had no difficulty dodging it, though his face was superficially wounded by the attack. He needed to create space in the fight. Casper was already a bit out of breath after launching so many attacks. William revealed his deception, saying that it hadn't been bad at all. Now it was time for them to take things a little more seriously. Using magic, he launched several more daggers. A large number of them appeared. Casper was not the only one who had prepared for the fight. William didn't believe the boy would be able to defend himself against that attack. Unexpectedly, Casper looked at him with a smile on his face. He said that he had met a man inside a dungeon. In the endless depths of his grief, he had been offered a deal. With open arms, Casper waited for the daggers to approach. They began falling to the ground, which left William completely shocked. In the deal, Casper would receive great power, and that power would be fueled by his own emotions. Energy gathered around his arms. It was the power that represented the resentment of the fallen. William couldn't believe this was real. It wasn't possible that he was experiencing this. Walking backward in fear, he stumbled over a rock. Revealing his terror, he begged to be spared, promising to leave the camp. To his surprise, Casper said that killing him wasn't his intention. It was only meant to be a witness. The power began to seep into the boy's body. Apologizing for the completely unnecessary fight, he said that after what William had done to Lyra, he needed at least one last hit before leaving. William didn't understand what those words meant. Casper bid him farewell, wishing that they would never meet again. The sphere of black energy grew monstrously. Then it suddenly disappeared in the middle of the clearing. William was now alone. Some moments passed, and elsewhere, a ritual was being performed. Casper appeared in the middle of the magic circle, saying that everything had been fulfilled. The mysterious voice praised his work. Although the ritual had been confusing, the master was pleased with his performance. A skeletal hand was revealed, asking the boy to stand. It was time for him to receive his afterlife. William still didn't understand what had happened. He was stuck in disbelief the boy had just ended his own life. Even so, the enchantment Casper had used was truly incredible. Power fueled by pure emotion. He didn't want to know what that meant, but he definitely needed to acquire it for himself. Meanwhile, Jake's time to cure the poisoning was running out, and he continued meditating. Cecil knew that the situation was getting worse. He could barely stand to watch his friend anymore. Jake was definitely in immense pain at that moment. If Cecil were in his place, he wasn't sure if he could handle his own fear. Even with his eyes closed, Jake told the creature to stop staring at him. Cecil was startled. He had no idea how Jake knew that while keeping his eyes shut. His bloodline worked even when he wasn't looking. He could sense everything. Cecil said he was worried. It seemed like he was the only one concerned about the time. He wanted to know how long Jake would remain still. The boy said he would stay that way until he was ready. Cecil warned him that he should be practicing. There was less than an hour left before the challenge ended. Back in college, many students panicked on the eve of a big test. He had learned very early on that in situations like these, the best thing to do was to relax. Like when preparing to shoot an arrow, the first thing to do was to take a deep breath. After that, he had to prepare his entire body and let all distractions begin to fade away until the perfect moment finally arrived. Only then should the arrow be released. Cecil asked if he had tried saying a prayer, but he knew Jake didn't believe in such things. He assumed it was a joke since, just last week, they had met a god. Jake said he didn't see things that way, even though he had received a blessing from that figure. Cecil was curious to know what it was, realizing that it was a huge status bonus that ended up helping him in some alchemy sessions. Knowing the Viper, he assumed that if he prayed to him, he would just be ignored. That wouldn't lead anywhere. Even so, he started his prayer, telling the Viper that if he died, he would haunt him even in the world of the dead. The tone of those words left Cecil completely terrified. He became so enraged that he started hitting him, saying that now the Viper might as well end their lives. Jake gave a wide grin, affirming that the Viper had liked that. It was as if he could feel encouragement from the god in some way. After that, his body started to tremble. It didn't take long before he began coughing as well, making Cecil very worried. Maybe the boy was wrong and that wasn't a sign from the Viper. Looking at the filth in his hands, which had come from his cough, he realized things were not going well. Standing up, he told Cecil not to worry. His story wouldn't end there. Not after everything he had been through. Jake had faced a great number of enemies. He had wounded his body countless times. He had even had to say goodbye to some friends. Everything he had gone through would be completely in vain if he couldn't overcome this challenge. Encouraging Cecil, he said they had a lot of work ahead. He started preparing his tools and ingredients. He needed to extract the juice from those rare mushrooms, combining it with a mixture of blood and aged moss. The process would take some time, but he couldn't lose focus. Cecil brought him more of the ingredients necessary for the antidote, and time continued to pass. While working, Jake adjusted his posture to maintain his stamina. If the potion was bubbling, it meant the process was going well. Now he needed to infuse his own mana at a controlled and steady pace. He had to continue this process until he reached the next stage. The system notified him that he had successfully crafted an antidote. Cecil wanted to know if the mixture would work, but Jake wasn't sure. The potion was extremely unstable. In a few minutes, it would lose its current form. He wasn't certain it would work and had only a few minutes to test its effectiveness. On top of that, the time limit to complete the challenge was almost up. Knowing he had no other choice, he prepared to drink the potion. Jake swallowed the contents of the bowl in one go. The process was more difficult than he had imagined. Once he had finished drinking, Cecil asked how he was feeling. Jake replied that he didn't feel any different. The time to complete the challenge had finally run out. An intense sensation of pain began to spread throughout his entire body. Cecil became extremely worried about what he was witnessing. Meanwhile, Jake felt the pain coursing through him. It was the effect of the poison becoming even stronger. He could barely breathe. Regretfully, he realized that the poison was spreading through his body, and gradually his strength began to fade. As the effects of the poison intensified, he started coughing up what looked like tomato juice. If the poison reached his heart, the outcome would be fatal. There would be nothing he could do to reverse the situation. Cecil rushed to the cabinet to grab some health potions. Thinking back on everything he had done, Jake didn't know where he had gone wrong. He had followed every step correctly, but he couldn't understand why he had failed. His heart felt like it was being consumed by the poison. Unable to stay on his feet, he collapsed to the ground, unconscious. His vision began to blur as Cecil begged him to hold on a little longer. Time passed, and his heart continued to weaken. He ended up seeing Adam in a dream. The man asked if he was really going to give up like that. Even without strength, Jake responded that he would not give up. That wasn't the choice he had made. Trying to get up, he declared that he would fight against the poison. And in this battle, he was certain he would emerge as the only victor. Jake stood up, filled with confidence. His heart was beating, completely revitalized. Cecil rushed to him in a panic, carrying several health potions. Jake seemed to have regained consciousness, even though he was still in great pain. Even Cecil himself didn't understand what he was witnessing. Breathing heavily, Jake assumed the antidote was taking effect. Seeing that the marks on his body were also disappearing, he confirmed that he must have passed the test. Despite the suffering, he was alive. Completely healed, the two began celebrating their excellent result. The Viper had seen everything they had gone through, realizing that the antidote could have been better, but the boy had endured the suffering with his willpower and vitality. What had saved him was his own perseverance. It seemed that trusting this boy had been the right decision. The system congratulated him on his success. The dungeon would close in the next few hours. That was the time they had to gather all their belongings. Jake didn't have much to collect, but Cecil said he had things too. The boy had assumed they would be leaving that place together. Cecil hadn't thought about it yet, wondering if it was Jake's wish for them to stay together. The boy said he wouldn't leave him in that defective dungeon. Cecil was still struggling to process the words he had just heard, but the truth was that they had gone through many hardships together, and because of that, they had become companions. Hearing it moved Cecil deeply. Jake couldn't hold back his laughter when he noticed the little demon was crying. But they were soon interrupted by multiple system notifications. A flood of messages appeared. It seemed these were the rewards he was receiving. There were so many things that he could barely keep track of them all. 4 points in every attribute, 4 additional points in vitality, new boots, and more storage space. Cecil wanted to know how he was feeling, and Jake replied that he felt incredibly strong. It was a relief to have his weapons back, since it had been a month since his last real battle. Cecil assumed he might be a bit rusty. That was possible, but at the moment, he was more concerned about his level. He had developed his alchemy significantly, but was still just a level 9 archer. Not knowing what the average level was in the forest, he assumed he had a lot of work ahead. Cecil didn't know what kind of help he could provide since he didn't have a level or any stats. If things got too dangerous, Jake could always put Cecil back in the necklace, but the creature refused. He had already spent a millennium inside it. He had no intention of going back. After their long walk, they could finally see the dungeon exit. Jake asked the creature if he was ready to breathe some fresh air. At last, the duo was outside. They were met with a magnificent view, far better than the dim dungeon they had been stuck in. Looking to the side, Jake spotted a dinosaur. It didn't take long for them to encounter hostile company. It would have been nice to have at least a little time to appreciate the scenery, but Jake considered the timing to be absolutely perfect. It was an excellent opportunity for him to put his skills into practice. The dinosaurs ranged from level 17 to 24. He was surrounded by 4 creatures, all of them stronger than him, but the danger he sensed was only moderate. He should be able to overcome them. The creatures began to charge, ready to make him their afternoon snack. His plan was to separate them and maintain the advantage of attacking from a distance. Dancing around them, he released several deadly arrows. 2 of the leading creatures died almost instantly. Their bodies hit the ground completely motionless. Cecil warned him about the remaining creatures approaching from behind. One of them had gotten too close too quickly. Jake managed to dodge the attack, recognizing the creature's speed. Immediately, he began to wonder if the lack of combat had made him slower. Cecil was already in complete panic. He was nearly becoming one of the creature's meals. Unexpectedly, the dinosaur halted its attack. Jake seized the opportunity to draw the sword he carried. The voracious creature immediately shifted its focus toward him. The boy hadn't even had time to properly unsheath his blade. Once again, he had to dodge at the last moment. Given the close distance, he managed to land a slashing blow. It was more than enough to end the creature's life. The dinosaur collapsed to the ground, still writhing in agony. Only one more creature remained to finish the fight. That was when his perception alerted him that something else was happening. There were other dinosaurs watching the outcome from a distance, and they had finally revealed themselves. Perhaps this was an opportunity given to him by the universe itself to test how far his abilities had evolved. Determined, he was unwilling to fail. The dinosaurs charged at him with incredible speed, but Jake's determination was far greater. He wanted to prove himself against any opponent. Moving much faster than the creatures, he cut down 3 of them before they even noticed. He would keep fighting until he became the strongest. This time, another creature tried to attack him from behind, but Jake had survived the dungeon challenge. That poor creature was no threat to him. Jake continued cutting down lives without stopping. Those beasts wouldn't be able to stop him. The remaining dinosaurs were now hesitant. Since they didn't continue their attack, Jake charged at them like a hungry predator. Placing his blade in position, he was ready to strike. Consumed by the battle's intensity, he let out an enraged shout. Standing on a boulder, Cecil did his best to stay away from the creature's jaws. At that moment, arrows began whistling through the air. The distracted dinosaur suddenly had its neck pierced, falling to the ground, completely unable to recover. The battle between them had been brief, and now no creatures remained alive. Now that the danger had passed, Cecil thought it might have been better to stay inside the dungeon. Jake acknowledged that it had been harder than expected, but since he was returning to battle, he assumed things would get easier from here on. Knowing his combat abilities were limited, the last thing Cecil wanted was to become dinosaur food. Then they were caught by surprise. Jake had received a massive amount of tutorial points. As a result of the battle, he reached level 13 as an archer, earning 4 attribute points. Seeing his remarkable progress, he assumed he had gained extra experience for defeating creatures at much higher levels. Cecil stated that soon he would surpass everyone else. He had also received a new skill, Power Shot, which increased the arrow's strength proportionally to how long it was drawn. The longer he pulled his bowstring, the more damage his arrow would deal, a perfect skill for ambushes. Something that would work very well with his alchemy skills, as he could use poisons. The combination of a powerful arrow with poison seemed incredibly deadly. Once again, he was caught off guard by his perception. Cecil noticed his friend's distraction, but Jake still needed to focus. He had sensed something. He didn't know what it was, but he knew it was miles away and incredibly powerful. Knowing this, Cecil suggested they avoid it at all costs. However, Jake disagreed. No matter how powerful it was worth fighting. Inside Richard's camp, Caroline continued brushing her hair. Adam finally arrived in the room and asked if there was any news about Casper. The woman replied that there was nothing new, but Richard would send a scout squad the next day. The young man couldn't hide the sadness on his face. Approaching him, she assured him that everything would be fine, though Adam remained worried about his friend. Everyone there knew that Casper had taken William as his target, and now both were missing. He asked if Caroline had heard anything from William before his disappearance. Lying, she said no and promised to tell him if she found out anything. She embraced him warmly, assuring him it was a promise. But anxiety began to show on her face. Inside what appeared to be a therapist's office, someone asked why William was there. The boy had been court-ordered to begin therapy. The therapist wanted to know if he was aware of the reason for his sentence. He seemed to lack empathy and had violent tendencies. The therapist asked if there was anything else as well. The boy fell into a deep, fearful silence. It had been a year since he had taken his own brother's life. A year ago, his father asked him if he was ready to meet his new sibling. Distracted by his phone, he casually said that he supposed so. His father wanted him to be a little more excited. It had been a long labor, and it would be good for them to cheer up his mother. The doctor approached them and asked if he could speak with William's father for a moment. There had been complications during childbirth. Everyone was safe, but the baby was under observation. William's gaze was consumed by coldness. With only a day of life, his little brother was already causing problems. He looked at the baby, observing how pathetic he was. Time passed and the baby grew. His mother asked him to fetch the newspaper, so he stepped outside to receive the deliveries. The boy began looking at what had arrived. One of the envelopes completely captured his attention. He had received a letter from one of the universities he wanted to attend. Returning home filled with joy, he told his parents that he had been accepted, but they didn't even know what all his excitement was about. That was when he told them which university had accepted him. He had chosen it because of its academic orientation, as he hadn't believed he would be capable. His parents wanted to know if the tuition would be expensive. The boy didn't know the exact cost. Even though the news was truly great, they couldn't afford that institution at the moment. William tried to emphasize that the university was one of the best in the world. They were very proud of him, but with a younger sibling that couldn't handle that kind of expense. Receiving this news left the boy completely devastated. He went to the baby's crib. The child appeared to have chronic health problems. To him, that small being didn't even resemble what a person truly was. A child who couldn't even breathe on its own had already become more important than him. To William, the baby was just a burden to his parents, and it was time for that little burden to do everyone a favor. It should disappear forever, he thought, as he turned off the machine that was helping the baby breathe. Immediately, the tiny child began gasping for air. It couldn't breathe properly. It didn't take long for it to lose consciousness entirely. His parents rushed into the baby's room, desperate, unable to believe what William had done. His mother shoved him aside to get to the child. William believed that this way he had solved their financial problem. His parents were in a panic. The baby was no longer breathing. William assumed that all of it was pointless. The child was ruining their lives. His father grabbed him in a furious rage, unable to understand why the boy had done such a thing. Once again, William said he had only done it to help the family. A year later, he was in prison. Introducing himself to one of the prison staff, he stated his name. He received the medication he had to take to maintain his sanity. Taking all of it daily made it difficult for him to think in a linear way. He had lost track of how much time had passed since he had been locked up. He didn't even understand why he was still there. William couldn't comprehend why his parents had abandoned him. Little by little, his mind collapsed, giving way to an even greater madness. It was in this state that he received a system notification announcing his transmigration. At first, he didn't understand what it meant, but now he found himself in the middle of the forest, needing to return to the camp. He had managed to fool them all. No one suspected anything about his true nature. The only one who doubted him had disappeared. William was determined to understand what that power was. He needed to have it for himself. First, he had to recover. Even though Casper hadn't intended to kill him, the residual energy from that sphere had nearly done the job. William was feeling an intense thirst. If he didn't drink water soon, he felt he might collapse at any moment. Coming across a massive lake, he thought it was his lucky day. However, he quickly realized he wasn't alone there. He hid behind a rock to see who was approaching. The figure that arrived seemed familiar. He definitely knew this person. A few moments earlier, Jake was analyzing the traces of the explosion and the residual energy left behind. It was as if a massive bomb had gone off in that place. It was possible that whoever was responsible was still nearby. If he acted quickly, he would soon find them. Cecil wished him luck as he was now returning to the necklace once again. Jake could hunt monsters as much as he wanted, but the creature wasn't interested in losing its life on its first day outside the cave. Jake agreed with his reasoning but told him not to complain later when he got bored. Placing his hand on the necklace, he stored the creature inside. Finally, Cecil was gone, but the creature claimed that even inside he could still hear what was happening outside. Smirking, Jake said he already knew that, but the truth was, he was lying. Now he stood at the riverbank, scooping up some water to drink. He asked if the little demon could sense presences while inside the necklace because someone was hiding behind a rock. But the creature couldn't sense anything. It could only see what was directly in front of the necklace. It asked if the person hiding was the one who caused the explosion. But that was unlikely. Even if this person was strong, Jake could tell they weren't that strong. He decided to pretend he knew nothing. He didn't want anyone discovering that he possessed magical items. Calling out to see if someone was nearby, William assumed he had been discovered. The boy revealed himself, saying it had been a while since he had last met someone. Jake said he had just left a cave and was currently exploring the region. William assumed he hadn't been recognized. Perhaps Richard had taken all the attention in the past. The two shook hands and Jake asked if there was any camp nearby. William said there were a few, and if he wanted, he could show him his. Intrigued to learn there was more than one camp, Jake wanted to know who the leaders were. William explained that one was led by Richard and the other by Hayden, and at the moment, they were at war. Jake was frustrated to hear that not only did they have to fight monsters, but they also had to deal with people. William said he knew all the safe routes and could take him to Richard's camp safely. Jake agreed it would allow him to learn about the other members of the camp, as it was possible he might know some of them. Finally, the two began heading toward Richard's camp. William was frustrated because he couldn't remember the boy's name. He had never introduced himself. Because of his perception, Jake knew that William was a summoned one at level 24. He couldn't trust this person, but he was confident he could react if William tried anything. At the moment, William was talking about Smith, who was responsible for crafting weapons. Jake wanted to know if there was someone named Adam at the camp. Without answering, William suddenly became alert, indicating there was some kind of danger nearby. Because of his refined skill, Jake could tell there was no danger in the area. William revealed he had an ability that allowed him to see hidden mana and claimed there was a trap in front of them. Not knowing what William was planning, Jake decided to act cautiously. Seeing that Jake was an archer, William suggested he move ahead stealthily to check for anything unusual. William would stay behind to provide cover if anything happened. The act was so bad that Jake had a hard time playing along, but he decided to go along with it anyway, stating that he was trusting William. William was now sure that this was the person who had ambushed Nicholas. Revealing his truly despicable nature, he prepared to attack Jake from behind. Because of his ability, Jake sensed the daggers approaching. He immediately turned his attention to them, raising his bow, deflecting all the blades with ease. Only a fool would fall into such a poorly planned trap. William said this tutorial was filled with fools, and now he would end Jake's life. But Jake started running toward the forest. William couldn't let him gain distance that would render his daggers useless. He kept up the pressure to ensure his target couldn't escape. After missing a few daggers, he realized his target was incredibly slippery, but Jake couldn't run forever. Suddenly, William was caught off guard by an attack that deeply slashed his abdomen. He still didn't understand what was happening or why his victim had stopped running. Jake was sure that his pursuer thought he needed distance to attack, assuming he was only an archer. But William should never have underestimated his opponent. This was a special dagger he had obtained in the dungeon. His victim would bleed to death. However, Jake decided he could end his suffering sooner. William fell into despair. He realized he wouldn't live much longer. Ripping his staff, he was forced to use an ability he had been saving for Richard. He activated the Shining Steel ability. Jake was caught off guard. A powerful luminous energy began to condense intensely. Exactly a week ago, William had gone to talk to Richard. He was having trouble rationing mana potions and was struggling to hunt. But given the situation with the other group of survivors, perhaps there was no solution to this problem. The boy wanted to take some potions from Richard's personal supply. However, Richard was firm if the boy needed them, he should ask someone else. Dismissing him, he stated he had other matters to deal with at that moment. William pretended to be disheartened by the rejection, but the truth was, it was all an act. Later that same day, while out hunting, he nurtured growing resentment toward Richard. He should try to steal all the potions from the camp. He couldn't wait to finally rid himself of all these people. All he needed was a bit more firepower and the right opportunity. Having defeated the creature, he received something from the system. That ability emanated an intense luminous energy, in addition to dealing damage proportional to the amount of mana he had consumed. Thinking about his newfound destructive power, William felt extremely motivated. He used his new ability against Jake. A small metallic-looking sphere appeared as a result. Jake felt an immediate need to get away from there. It didn't take long before the sphere exploded violently. It also released an intense burst of light, forcing him to shield his eyes. He tried to retreat while his vision was compromised. Due to the force of the explosion, numerous metal fragments scattered across the area. Some of them penetrated the boy's body. The impact was strong enough to send him flying. Though his wounds appeared superficial, he had no idea what kind of attack he had just been hit with. Even with his abilities, he had barely reacted in time. This wasn't the time to think about such things. The boy still posed a threat. Taking advantage of the moment, William fled as fast as he could. Jake knew he couldn't let him escape after what happened. However, his body had suffered damage that could hinder his pursuit. His necklace began to glow intensely. Cecil asked if his friend was alright, and Jake replied that he had managed to block the attack as best as he could in critical areas. It was better to let the boy escape. He wouldn't be able to fight in this condition. Jake felt like an idiot for being caught off guard. He already knew he shouldn't underestimate any opponent, yet he had been taken by surprise. Cecil wondered if William was responsible for the crater, but Jake wasn't sure. Having spent so much time inside the cave, he had no idea how strong the other survivors had become. If this was the power of an average person in this place, he would definitely have many problems ahead. Cecil suggested they find another dungeon to hide in, but Jake refused. It was time for him to level up. Meanwhile, inside the camp, the women were talking. Those gloves were very well made, and they had been crafted specifically to withstand pain. Since he had been working so hard, she wanted to give him a gift that he would like. Another woman commented that they made a beautiful couple. Seeing them reminded her of when she had first met her husband. She was soon comforted, as no one knew how the people on Earth were doing. Perhaps her husband was in another tutorial. progressing as well. It was even possible that the other tutorials were easier. Maybe he wasn't dealing with dangerous creatures like they were. The woman thanked Caroline, but what she truly wanted was to see her husband one more time. There were still 30 days left, and the number of survivors had already decreased significantly. Caroline believed that when all this was over, they would return to their normal lives. A man suddenly entered the room, asking if Caroline was there. Knowing he had been summoned, the messenger stated that it was an emergency. Richard needed her help immediately. She followed him, wanting to know if it was truly urgent and if all this commotion was necessary. Lying on a bed was William. His body severely wounded. No one knew what had happened to him. He had been found in this state, lost in the forest. The boy was nearly dead. They speculated that one of Hayden's men might have done this to him. Thanking the messenger for his service, she then asked him to bring a bucket of water. He left the room, leaving the others with the injured boy. Richard wanted to know how serious the situation was. Caroline had no idea how the boy was still breathing. He asked if she was capable of saving him. She was the best healer in the entire tutorial. Caroline could try, but knowing what they had planned together, she asked if that was truly what he wanted. Richard struggled with the idea of simply letting the boy die. Caroline confirmed that the poisoning was severe. There was no guarantee she would be able to do anything. William had already been causing problems for them. Perhaps they should take advantage of this situation. Richard had given Caroline a lot of autonomy, as she had proven to be a loyal soldier. But he was the one who made decisions there, and he had ordered her to heal the boy. And he expected her to do as she was told. With no choice but to obey, she would at least try to do something. Caroline placed her hands over William's chest and immediately began the healing process. It was even more complex than she had imagined. But little by little, the boy seemed to be recovering. Richard had no idea what might have happened. He began to wonder if it had been Casper's doing, but Caroline disagreed. Casper used magic and curses. What was in front of them was definitely poisoning. It could have been caused by a beast, but the cut on his stomach was made by a blade. They started considering the possibility that he had been ambushed, but they had never seen Hayden use such a powerful poison. It was possible that a new player was involved. Things were getting more complicated. Inside the camp, Adam was carrying some fabrics Joanna had requested. With a broad smile on her face, she thanked him for his effort. Seeing a crowd gathered outside the infirmary, he asked what was happening. She told him she had seen a scout looking for Caroline, claiming it was an emergency. Adam thought something might have happened to the hunting teams, but the woman said no one was sure, only that they had seen William being carried inside. Hearing this, Adam was immediately surprised. Outside, Richard was pushing away the onlookers. Meanwhile, Adam approached Caroline, asking what was going on. She said she had been on her way to meet him, but had been needed for this emergency. William would likely recover. She was going to leave him inside his cabin, as he might need privacy when he woke up. Adam said that if she needed any help, he would do whatever was necessary. Caroline assured him that wouldn't be necessary, saying they would meet later. Without another word, Adam simply agreed. But he thought that if William had run into trouble, they should at least know where Casper was. The more time passed, the less control he had over the situation. Even so, he couldn't let hope slip through his fingers. William remembered a therapy session from his life on Earth. It was a very strange feeling for him. The therapist wanted to know his opinion on the topic they had discussed, but the boy seemed to have forgotten what he had been asked. His mother felt she had lost both of her sons. The therapist wanted to know how he felt about that. But being compared to the sick child deeply insulted him, as if he were being betrayed. Once again, the therapist looked at him, waiting for a response. Feigning sincerity, he said he was remorseful, but the truth was that he didn't care at all. He was willing to say whatever they wanted to hear, just to get out of the situation as quickly as possible. Richard wanted to know if the medicine was working. William seemed to be waking up and saw that the man in front of him was not his father. His memories and reality were blending together. Once again, he saw the therapist. But this time, he heard her mention tutorial points. The woman asked if he remembered the other thing they had talked about, but he had no idea what was happening now. Once again, she insisted that they had already discussed it, the thing that was missing. The boy began to feel that eerie, terrifying sensation, and the therapist reminded him that they had talked about his immense weakness. He was definitely a pathetic boy, so weak and broken, incompetent to wield power. William didn't know who this grotesque figure in front of him was. Then he saw the person responsible for stabbing him. He was immediately filled with terror at the sight. Remembering the archer made him feel a deep fear. He was unable to escape that feeling. In front of him, everyone was smiling, as if he were a massive failure. It left him sinking deeper into despair. Finally, the boy woke from his dark nightmare, but he had no idea where he was. Looking at his hands, he realized it had all been just a dream. In front of him stood Richard and Caroline, waiting for him to wake up. Because now was time for a serious conversation. Now sitting up on his cot, Caroline approached him to ask how he was feeling. He woke up sweating and shaken. He said he felt fine but had no idea how he had gotten there. They informed him that a scout had found him unconscious in the forest. If not for that, he would have surely died. He started explaining that he had gone into the forest to look for Casper. Richard didn't believe that. He knew the boy had gone there to confront Casper and wanted to know exactly what happened. William was definitely a bit foolish. He had no idea how they had figured that out when it was so obvious. He had been allowed to roam freely because he was strong, but he lacked experience and had no subtlety in his actions. Visibly frustrated, he clenched his fists full of tension. Richard said he knew his type very well. He was a talented young man. He couldn't deny that. A potential in which Richard had a great deal of interest. Very deceitfully, William asked how he had been evaluated in such a way. He learned that it had been the same when they first met in the forest. To Richard, those were the eyes of a living weapon. Assuming that Richard wanted him as a soldier, William signaled with his hand that he wasn't just interested in that. But Richard didn't want him as just a common soldier. He wanted him to be part of his elite force. He said that he and Caroline would support him in the forest. What they were proposing was a partnership. Not feeling entirely convinced, William wanted to know what was stopping him from just killing them right then and there. Indeed, if he defeated Richard, he would earn tutorial points and level up, but in a partnership, he would be much more valuable. Immediately, William began to show a subtle smile. He had finally found someone who recognized his true worth. The two shook hands, celebrating the beginning of a rather suspicious partnership. As they left the place, Richard asked Caroline to accompany him, giving William time to fully recover. But William didn't like being left there without any supervision. He reminded them that they were now partners. He could do as he pleased, and once he had recovered, they could talk about who had attacked him in the forest. Knowing that this partnership would bring him benefits, he still had a hard time believing what had just happened. Outside, they commented that everything had gone according to plan. Richard boasted about his ability to understand young people who think they're too complicated. As long as you say the right words, they can be easily manipulated. An hour earlier, they had been discussing how to approach William. He understood Caroline's stance that they should get rid of him, but there were other ways to use him as well. At first, the woman was quite intrigued. But this boy was incredibly arrogant. He walked through the world as if no one could defeat him. And after being beaten like that, his confidence had to be shaken. She thought he might have matured, but Richard was certain his confidence would return. He would wake up vulnerable and susceptible to manipulation. That was when they needed to act. They would stroke his ego just enough until he lowered his defenses. But shallow compliments and praise, they could turn him into a loyal ally. Caroline feared that one day they might be betrayed by this boy. Fortunately, Richard had the tools to deal with that, a special ability. Caroline wanted to know what ability that was. Richard explained that he had acquired it a few weeks ago. It had been a reward for completing a mission. The system wanted him to unite the other survivors and eliminate any rivals that appeared in his path. As a result, he had received a very useful ability, one that allowed him to detect if any of his allies were being disloyal. Caroline was immediately concerned and asked what the system said about her. Richard assured her that she had been loyal since the day they met, and he had never doubted her for a single moment. While it seemed like this conversation was one-sided, Richard had already been manipulating William for some time. He had been using him to eliminate unfaithful members of the group. It was up to him to maintain his pace. This was what a true leader did. Outside, Caroline was still curious. She wanted to know what Richard's ability was saying about William. For now, the boy remained loyal. He wasn't a concern at the moment. His progress might not be linear, but Richard was confident they could get the job done. Caroline was uneasy about everything that had happened. She knew Casper wouldn't be coming back. That was when Richard reminded her that this wasn't about kindness. At the end of the day, William was just an animal. He was useful for now, but he was still just an animal. They could feed him and cultivate his loyalty, but Richard wasn't naive about the situation. As soon as William took down Hayden's leader and completed the system's mission, there would be no need to keep the dog by his side. Now Caroline understood Richard's plans. Currently, there were only a few members in the camp who weren't loyal. One of them was the blacksmith, who was still working. Bertrand was also one of the unfaithful members. And finally, Adam, who had been growing increasingly suspicious. Very soon, Richard believed he would be able to deal with all of them effectively. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, fully recovered, the protagonist was in the middle of a hunt. His target was an ostrich, completely oblivious to the fate awaiting it. Jake carefully prepared his arrow, channeling his new ability into it. Slowly, the power coursed through his hands. He needed just a bit more time, but the ostrich seemed to have a sixth sense. At that exact moment, the little demon appeared, announcing that she had brought some mushrooms. That made the bird realize that someone wanted to make a meal out of it. The creature began to run desperately for its life, but Jake had already gathered enough power in the arrow. The projectile tore through the air, charged with momentum, striking the creature in a completely fatal manner, while also destroying a tree in the process. Faced with the destruction, the imp was impressed. Jake explained to him that this was his fully charged ability. He suggested that he should have used it against William. Only then did the young man reply that despite its power, that attack has its flaws. While charging, he has to remain completely still, and it takes a few seconds before he can deal considerable damage. This attack took 12 seconds to charge. He felt as if his arms were about to fall off. It could be useful for a stealth attack if he prepared an ambush. No one would expect an attack like that. The system informed him that having defeated the creature, he had leveled up once again. His progress was slowing down more and more, and he presumed that the other survivors must have already defeated the more powerful creatures. All that remained for him were those beasts that did not yield much experience. Suggesting something he did not wish to do, the imp said that they could venture deeper into the forest. And the truth was that despite the dangers, Cecil was absolutely right. The problem was that he might end up running into the other survivors. The outcome could be even worse, discovering that there was no one left there at all. He decided they would explore further into the forest, but would avoid any camps as he did not want to get involved in conflicts that did not concern him. Cecil agreed with the young man's limitation, but deep down, he knew that it was not conflicts he truly wanted to avoid. The morning unfolded and they continued hunting. Jake even managed to collect some eggs, and in the lake he struggled to catch some fish. Until, in the early afternoon, he discovered a new dungeon within the forest. That entrance was quite familiar to him. Cecil noticed that this time there were fewer mushrooms. The notice stated that he could enter and leave whenever he wished. It was definitely less dangerous than the challenge dungeon. Since he needed to gain a few more levels, perhaps this was the only option he had left. Finally, they entered the dungeon, their goal being to defeat the place of boss creature. Entering and defeating a creature seemed too simple, even if it was a bit risky. It did not take long before he encountered a giant badger. Cecil was apprehensive but understood that Jake had found the creatures he was looking for. Because those badgers were much stronger than the creatures in the forest, concerned for his life, he decided to retreat into the necklace, making it clear that he could be called if needed, but he preferred to remain in the safety of the necklace. Since there were only 2 creatures, Jake was confident that he could handle them. After all, they were merely small, ferocious animals. It did not take long for him to launch the first arrows. The first creature had its life swiftly taken, but he failed to hit the second one with his arrows. And now he had no time to dodge the attack that had reached him. He needed to prevent that dangerous jaw from hitting a vital area of his body. Using his forearm as a shield, he received a painful bite. That was definitely not a pleasant sensation to experience. Seizing the opportunity, he had the creature exactly where he wanted it. Drawing an arrow from his quiver, he plunged it into the badger's chest to reap its life. That was what he had intended to do from the start. Since the creatures were high level, he ended up receiving a large amount of experience. As a result, he leveled up once again. Now he was not as interested in defeating the boss. It would take a few hours to defeat more creatures. He was fully engaged in leveling up, and now he knew that most of the danger came from the poisonous bite. However, since he had some benefits as a malevolent viper alchemist, the poison was not an issue for him. That way, he could focus on taking down the creatures without the risk of being poisoned. After some time, he felt that he had exercised quite a bit. This place was fulfilling its purpose. From within the necklace, Cecil asked if his friend had seen that. It had been a long time since he had come across an item like that. A treasure chest was hidden in the dungeon. It was about time he found some good items. With the chest in his hands, he opened it. Inside was an icy wind dagger capable of dealing ice damage. When attacking an enemy, the victim would start feeling chills. Right after that, he also received new abilities as an archer. Twin Fang style, which granted a good boost to agility and strength when he wielded a suitable weapon for it. He had already tried using 2 blades before, but the second one was one of his arrows. Perhaps the system is aware that he is now more capable. That dungeon was proving to be very useful, even though he had not yet encountered the boss creature. No sooner had he said that than a great roar began to echo inside the cave. That could only mean one thing. It was the boss. Deep within the cave, he spotted a creature that he presumed to be the source of the roar. That was definitely the Nest Mother. The system did not indicate what level she was at. There was also no further information about the creature. That could only mean that her level was extremely high. Cecil said he had already had enough fun and should consider leaving the dungeon now, but the boy did not want to. He remembered that when he was brought into this world, Ale had mentioned something about a creature called the Lord of Beasts, and the one before them certainly fit that description. Cecil wanted to know what made him think that. Since the creature was too strong for its level to be seen, that had to be the case, at least according to standard video game logic. He could start the attack with a poisoned arrow and then follow up with one of his charged shots. He could not afford to miss this opportunity. At times like this, Cecil deeply regretted abandoning the library. Now properly positioned with his bow, he wished to end this with a single shot. The energy finally began to charge, and the creature seemed completely unaware of what was happening. Jake focused with all of his concentration, counting the seconds to know the exact moment to fire. As soon as he reached the limit, he released the arrow toward the target. It was visibly more powerful compared to the first time he used it. Unexpectedly, the creature sensed the approaching danger. That made Jake very worried. As a result, his arrow failed to hit the target. However, it grazed one of its legs. It was possible that the poison would still spread. Knowing that it had been poisoned, the creature did not hesitate to tear off a piece of his own body. Repositioning himself with his bow, Jake realized that Lord of Beasts was truly a formidable opponent. The creature was already closing in on him while Jake prepared another arrow. This time, the arrow he fired was completely normal. The creature let out a thunderous roar. The sonic waves were so devastating that they completely shattered the projectile. It also began to affect the boy's hearing, as he had not expected the creature to have some kind of sonic attack. Distracted, with his hands covering his ears, he ended up being slashed by the creature. The wounds seemed extensive, as he even spat out a bit of blood. He quickly realized that he had been poisoned. He had assumed he was immune to its venom as well, but he was wrong. The creature knew it still needed to eliminate this threat. Jake started running. He needed to gain distance from the creature so he could attack. He asked Cecil if there were any health potions left, but all he had were vials of poison. Immediately, he thought that might actually be exactly what he needed. Stopping his retreat, he began drawing the creature's attention. From within the pendant on his necklace, he retrieved one of the vials of poison. Meanwhile, the creature kept trotting in his direction. Throwing the vial at it, he prayed that his strategy would work. He hoped it would defend itself from the projectile as it had from the arrow, by unleashing its sonic attack, because that would cause the vial of poison to shatter completely, leaving it vulnerable to the liquid, which would continue on its path. And things happened exactly as he had planned. The creature's eye was severely affected. Even wounded, it began to scream uncontrollably once more. But this time, Jake did not understand what had triggered it. From various parts of the dungeon, badgers began to appear in droves. They were coming from every possible direction. The massive creature was already entering the arena, ready to turn the player's body into their meal. Jake was completely surrounded by them. The reinforcements had answered the dungeon boss's call. Reaching for the dagger, he had hoped to test it on another occasion, but it seemed he had no other choice left. And since he now wielded two daggers, the twin fang style was immediately activated. Thanks to that and the newly acquired item, the creatures posed no threat to him. They were being slaughtered as if they were mere stuffed animals. Even so, he did not emerge from the battle unscathed. Though he was taking some damage, the creatures continued to be overwhelmed. One of the badgers managed to bite him once again, but everyone who gets too close has their lives taken. Several of them try to surprise him from behind. Unfortunately for them, Jake noticed them all. With that, all the creatures summoned by the dungeon boss were properly annihilated. Now there was only one creature left to deal with. Taking the initiative in the attack, Jake wanted to end this quickly. The creature was not intimidated either and began charging toward him. But as soon as it got close enough, it suffered a grievous cut. Since he had defeated a level 68 creature, earning a massive amount of tutorial points, not even Cecil believed the boy would be capable of that. He was already out of strength, letting his daggers fall to the ground. His eyes closed for a brief moment, and unexpectedly, Jake began screaming uncontrollably. For having completed the dungeon alone, he would also receive an additional reward. Cecil observed that the place was now a complete mess, while Jake said he needed to take a nap. Shortly after, he realized that he had also leveled up as an archer. For defeating the dungeon boss, he gained 6 levels at once. Stretching his body, he decided he should leave before more creatures appeared. Before he could even move, the system surprised him with another notification. He had not expected to gain yet another skill. It allowed him to become one with the shadows, but could only be used while walking in a straight line. From the description, it seemed familiar to him. He was certain he had read that name somewhere in the library. If he remembered correctly, that was a name that referred to one of them. Cecil hoped that the Viper would not be offended, as that would be blasphemy. Jake figured that the god was not that kind of being. Besides, that skill was too good to ignore. An hour later, they were already walking outside the forest. The boy was hanging from a tree branch, completely enveloped in shadows, until he suddenly disappeared. Reappearing atop a large rock, he asked Cecil to watch as he jumped toward the tree. Once again, the boy vanished. Upon emerging before the tree, he ended up hitting his head. Annoyed at having his concentration interrupted, he said he really liked what he had seen so far. Jake held his head, feeling considerable pain. Approaching him, Cecil said it was good to know there was something the boy wasn't good at. He imagined that in a few days, Jake would master the skill, as the concept behind it was very simple. It was like accelerating a motorcycle. There was a bit of thrust involved, but he would soon get used to it. Cecil, however, thought it resembled teleportation more. It was hard to put into words, but he essentially became a shadow as well. The shadow jumped from one place to another in a straight line. Now the question was whether or not he could pass through solid objects. Cecil was disappointed as now there were no grand heists in their future. Jake kept insisting that the skill was still in its early stages. Once perfected, it might become incredibly powerful. Meanwhile, in the Hall of the Malevolent Viper, a woman was performing a ritual. This had been happening for entire generations. No matter how many ages passed, their hope was eternal, just like their conviction. Yet all that remained of them now was a single temple. The woman awaited the Viper's return and wished for a sign. Opening the hall doors, a man entered to speak with the master of the place. Irritated, she hoped that something important was the reason for interrupting her meditation. The messenger said that the Lord Protector demanded her presence immediately. That was definitely urgent, and she began to think that something might have gone wrong. But the messenger had no further news regarding the matter. Having received the message, she started making her way there. This would be only the second time in her life that she would see the Lord Protector. He had made a brief appearance on the day of her consecration as master. He had not even attended the funeral of the previous masters, which made her both worried and anxious, for it could mean that something had finally happened. With many thoughts in her mind, she stepped through the portal. Presenting herself before the Lord Protector, she stated that she had come as soon as she knew she was required. The man urged her to enter quickly. As soon as she saw him, she was about to ask if everything was alright. But she immediately noticed that the obelisk was glowing intensely. That could only mean one thing, a sign that the malevolent Viper was approaching. After several eras of waiting, he will return to elevate their order to its lost glory. The woman knew that her faith had not been in vain. This was excellent news. But soon, anxiety took over, for there was much to prepare. The temple had to be in its best condition, and she needed to speak with the other leaders. She only hoped that the Viper would not arrive too quickly and would take a few more days. Lost in her anxiety, she noticed that the obelisk was shining brighter and brighter. A peculiar voice greeted the little ones. The Viper wanted to know if they had missed him. The Elder could not believe that his lord had finally returned. The Viper apologized for the wait, but he embraced the Elder, thanking him for everything he had done. The woman did not understand such kindness, nor the Protector's tears. She had dreamed of this day for as long as she could remember, but it was not happening as she had imagined. Wanting to know who the woman was, he learned that she was the last remaining master, currently the highest-ranking disciple. Asking for her name, he learned that she was called Viridia. She felt deeply honored to be one of the people receiving the Viper back, apologizing that she had not done so in the proper manner. The Viper asked her to relax as he had only asked for her name, not for her to bow. In truth, he should be the one apologizing, but since he had already apologized to the Elder, he would not do it again. It was not in his nature. With calmness, he said everything was fine, and it was already impressive enough that the order still existed. The woman was embarrassed to have her head patted by the deity. The Elder wanted to know what had brought the Viper back, but wary of the answer, he claimed he was only curious. The Viper was uncomfortable with such excessive caution and formality. Perhaps they could have a drink. The Master said she would arrange that immediately, and the Viper acknowledged her enthusiasm. Answering the Elder, he stated that his return was related to the universe. He asked if the Elder remembered the dungeon he had created in the Second Era. It seems someone had finally cleared it. That was truly incredible. The Elder wanted to know if the Viper had gained a new follower, but that was not what he had achieved. As improbable as it seemed, he had made a friend. In the middle of the forest in front of a campfire, Jake was reflecting on what was worse. The fact that he had been eating mushrooms for weeks, or that he was starting to like it. Cecil stated that it was far better than moss and dust. Jake recalled that Earth had a vast variety of steaks. He missed them dearly. He asked if his friend missed anything from his home planet, but there was nothing specific that came to mind. The young man had already noticed that Cecil was always cautious about that subject and had never explained how he had ended up in the pendant. Since it was a long story, he preferred to tell it when drunk. Jake noted that, at the very least, Cecil knew about alcohol. In the middle of their conversation, his perception picked up something. He ordered his friend to return to the pendant immediately. Seeing that he had not understood the command, he had to be more emphatic. Cecil still did not understand a thing. Stepping out of the center of the clearing, Jake told the intruders that he could sense them. They then revealed themselves, asking who he was and what he was doing in those lands. Jake said he was just an archer, that he was not dangerous, and that he had just finished a hunt. The woman with the scepter wanted to know if his name was Jake. Confirming it, he asked how she knew his name. A large block of ice was summoned in that place. She said she was doing it in memory of Mickey. Dodging the attack, he had no idea who that person was. He said there must be a misunderstanding. He did not know that person, and there was no reason for them to fight. The man with the sword ordered them not to listen, claiming that Richard had said the archer was dangerous and had nearly taken down the metal mage. They were definitely talking about William, and now Richard must have put bounty on his head. There was no possibility of reasoning with these people. And the truth was, he would have preferred to resolve everything peacefully. Unfortunately, these 5 clowns would have their lives cut short. The warriors charged at him full of confidence. Jake dodged the first executed attack. The warrior raised his massive battle hammer again. Meanwhile, the swordsman believed he had caught up to him. But that mysterious archer had disappeared before their eyes, and had already reappeared behind them. An arrow began whistling through the wind. That was a sign that they had an archer of their own. The tree was completely destroyed by that impact. That archer also possessed the same ability as him. Since he knew the skill, he knew exactly how to counter it. But his arrow was blocked by an ice barrier conjured by the sorceress. To his frustration, that team was attacking in a coordinated manner. And now, another empowered arrow was heading straight for him. Thanks to his ability to move through the shadows, he managed to dodge it. This situation was going to be a bit more troublesome than he expected. The warriors took the initiative in the attack once more. Jake realized he would not be able to rely on his bow, drawing both daggers to defend himself. With them in hand, he blocked the incoming attacks. A hidden assassin was waiting for the perfect window opportunity. Jake felt that he was being increasingly pressured. Completely cornered, he had no idea what to do. One of the warriors knew that he would disappear and reappear again, trying to anticipate his position, only to be surprised by the archer's resolve. He let himself get hit by the blade. This left the warrior defenseless. The hammer-wielding fighter wanted to end the battle quickly. His abdomen was already getting far too familiar with the dagger. Seeing his companion being eviscerated, the warrior grew worried. Even the sorceress had not expected casualties. Without even showing any signs of pain, Jake wanted to know who would be next. Weeks before, he had asked the Viper how he managed to deal with it. He was asking about taking lives, clarifying that he did not want to be misunderstood. He had no desire to do this to innocents. But over the past weeks, he had changed. He had gone from being an office worker to becoming a fierce warrior. He did not regret the fights he had been in, but he would be lying if he said he did not think about them constantly. The Viper then said he would tell this little child a story. Before he became a god, he had just received his humanoid form. He thought it would be nice to try to adapt to the civilized world. Before that, he had been used to dealing with beasts. They could attack, and they could be lethal. But at least they did not lie, something that was not common among sentient species. Deceitful and lying people were the true monsters he had yet to encounter. In less than a year, he was betrayed by someone he had considered a friend. He had given them his trust and in return had everything stolen from him. In his innocence, he gave them the benefit of the doubt, only to be betrayed once again. The resulting battle was so violent that it led to the destruction of 9 planets. People might say he had overreacted, but the truth was that since then, very few had dared to cross him again. Jake was curious to know how he had destroyed 9 planets, but the Viper said he would tell that story another time. What he wanted to teach him now was that the young man should act without hesitation and never show mercy, because those who sought to harm him would never do the same. The sorceress was horrified to witness one of her companions being brutally put to sleep. Jake declared that his name was now Morpheus, and he would put the rest of them to sleep as well. The warrior, who had been acting arrogantly, was now far more hesitant with his sword. Summoning her courage, the sorceress told her companions not to be afraid. Focusing her power, she ordered them to keep him distracted, as she was about to finish everything. Seeing that this was her most powerful spell, the knight knew he needed to buy as much time as possible. Charging forward for an aggressive attack, his blade was properly parried by Jake's daggers. He had to reposition his sword to continue his assault, but that archer was not going to fall behind. Both began exchanging a rapid series of strikes. Even so, the warrior felt that his opponent was growing increasingly precise. Meanwhile, Jake was struggling to find an opening. With his peripheral vision, he noticed something approaching. Another power charge arrow had been launched. The impact proved to be incredibly devastating. They realized he had vanished into the shadows. He needed to be found immediately. Even with the assassin's heightened perception, it was as if his target had become completely invisible. But his worries soon faded, because worry was something for the living. Jake had already taken down another enemy. The sorceress warned that her spell was almost ready to be cast. The enemy archer started hearing very suspicious sounds. He ordered the warrior to pay attention to his surroundings. The poor man had already turned into campfire material. Unfortunately, he had not been able to warn his companion in time. Now he was truly enraged by the outcome of the battle. Preparing another of his arrows full of wrath, he began to taunt his target. But he was caught off guard by an attack. His head ended up divorcing his body as they did not have a healthy relationship, having made the terrible choice of trying to attack the protagonist. Stained with blood, the sorceress knew she was in trouble. The human bowling ball hit the ground, bouncing softly. The final blow was executed. The sorceress had charged her ability only to achieve absolutely nothing. Jake warned her that the train to her next life was arriving. She could answer a few questions and be spared, or she could find out if God existed. He wanted to know why Richard and William had sent that team to capture him. It was about revenge. Jake did not understand. Everything he had done so far had been in self-defense. The woman believed he was the one who had taken all those lives, making him responsible for the start of this war. He recalled that William had mentioned an ongoing conflict. The sorceress had little time left before boarding the train. But since he was a man of his word, he handed her a health potion. The sorceress threw the vial into the air. She preferred death over living by his mercy, yet she still answered everything he had asked. Jake was shocked by such a foolish act. Life was slowly leaving her body. Her body finally fell to the ground, lifeless, before a very confused Jake. He revealed a pendant hanging from his necklace. Cecil wanted to understand what was happening, but Jake knew as little as he did. He had not started this war. It was hard to believe that all of this had been a huge misunderstanding, but Jake knew they had all been manipulated. Someone in that forest wanted to frame him. He would not sit idly by. With the battle over, they built a large bonfire, all of it to cremate what was left of their adversaries. Cecil wanted to know if he had any words for the funeral, but the young man simply stared at the fire as it burned. He apologized. If it had been up to him, none of this would have happened and no lives would have been lost. He did not know how those 2 villains had managed to deceive them all, but he swore that for their memories, he would put an end to it all. Cecil also wished for them all to rest in peace. After all of his adventures in the forest, he was finally level 31. Receiving those system messages made him feel dirty. It was as if he was stealing everything those people had fought for. Cecil tried to console him, saying that he had earned those rewards, but to Jake, achievements were what he gained by defeating monsters. That dungeon boss had pushed him to his absolute limit. He had given it everything he had. But when it just happened now, it had no meaning at all. Cecil said that he had already received the points and that was irreversible. Now he needed to decide what to do with them. Looking at his hands, still stained with blood, he became contemplative. He could not just march into Richard's camp and demand justice. Even if he was strong, he could not face an entire army. Then his friend reminded him that perhaps not many people were left. But in the worst-case scenario, there could still be hundreds of them. At that moment, Jake needed to force himself to think rationally. He wondered what Adam would do in his place. Richard and the others had gathered in the middle of the forest. Adam was surprised to hear what they were saying about his friend, Jake. The elder could not believe that a lone archer was taking out entire squads. Richard warned that Jake was not an ordinary archer. He believed Jake was trying to clear the tutorial. The system encouraged them to pursue the greatest rewards, and that could be exactly what he was doing now. Hayden wanted to know if Richard believed this archer was the one responsible for his son's death. The man stated that it had not been his men who attacked Hayden's squad. They had seen the bodies. None of the soldiers could have inflicted that kind of damage. Even so, Hayden demanded to know how they knew this mysterious person. Adam explained that Jake was once his companion, but he was not so sure that Jake was responsible for this. His friend was a lone wolf. He was not the kind of degenerate who would do something like that. When they entered the tutorial, Jake had proven to be a skilled fighter, but they had already seen that many among them were also incredibly talented, and he believed that somewhere in that forest, a third force was acting among them. Richard did not like the direction the conversation was taking. Adam continued defending his friend as there was still no reason to believe that things had happened that way. Richard asked the man not to listen to those words, claiming that Adam was still too attached to the memories of his friend. The evidence pointed to Jake as the main suspect. Trying to convince the old man, Richard said they needed to be realistic and do something about it. Assuming he believed Richard's words, Adam wanted to know what they intended to do. Richard proposed that they work together, forming a squad to search the forest, find Jake, and put an end to him. Hayden was still somewhat hesitant about the idea. Even so, he agreed to a temporary alliance until everything was resolved. Adam was furious as no one had listened to him. He had come to try and find another solution, but all he saw was the two men finding a new target for their problems. Meanwhile, the real villain continued to live peacefully. After defeating a few monsters, he assumed the meeting must have ended by now. He was certain that soon his enemy would be completely defeated. Because of what he had done, he received tutorial points, and with that, he obtained a new unique ability. Now he could summon an iron spear, which excited him greatly. A creature emerged from the bushes, a perfect opportunity to test his new skill. The poor dinosaur charged forward, unaware that it was running toward its doom. The deceitful liar prepared to throw his spear. He hurled it with all his strength, striking the creature directly in the neck. That new ability proved to be very interesting. He knew he had been completely defeated the last time he encountered Jake, but now he was much stronger. He began handling what was left of the creature. Holding its head in his hands, he believed that he would be the one to win the tutorial. The temple master was surprised to hear that the viper had made a friend. It was unheard of for a primordial existence to befriend a mere mortal, especially one who had not even completed the tutorial. She held the highest title within the order, and this man could pose a threat to that. One of the priests arrived as he had been summoned by her. After such an eventful afternoon, she needed him to gather some information for her. She was searching for records, all the records possible. The man wanted to know if she was looking for something specific. Her objective was clear. She wanted to know more about the man called Jake Thane. It was necessary to find everything that existed about him, as she would be meeting with him soon. Deep in the forest, the protagonist searched for Caroline and Adam, but he did not know if there was anyone left in that place. Then a movement in the bushes caught his attention. Unsure of who it could be, he ordered them to come out cautiously. It was Casper, badly wounded, who had found his friend. Collapsing to the ground, he said he no longer had the strength to keep walking. Immediately, Jake asked who had done that to him, learning that William and Richard had attacked the entire camp. None had been spared. All had lost their lives. Jake began to imagine the scene where all of his companions were no longer alive. Desperate, Casper wanted to know why Jake had abandoned them, for it was his abandonment that contributed to their downfall. Jake shot up in terror. It had been a horrifying nightmare. He looked at his hands, only realizing then that none of it had actually happened. Cecil told him that he should start cutting back on the mushrooms. They were probably affecting his brain. Maybe that was true as his nightmares were becoming more intense. Cecil mentioned that dreams were a way for the mind to deal with unresolved problems. Maybe his friend needed to let go of some things. Perhaps Cecil was right. Jake wondered what nightmares his friend had been running from. Confessing that sleeping was all he did when he was trapped inside the pendant, Cecil said he had already lived through his worst nightmare. Jake was tired of wandering around those bushes. Then he made a proposal to Cecil. He would tell him about his dreams, but in return, he wanted to know how Cecil had ended up imprisoned. With little else to do in that place, Cecil agreed. Jake said that his dreams were always related to his old friends. He had arrived in that place with his coworkers. Some were his friends, while others he barely knew. At work, he was just a guy who did the bare minimum, barely capable of talking to other people. But upon arriving in that forest, things changed quickly. He felt like he could have a fresh start in his life. He was wrong. His friends wanted to survive while his desire was to start a new life. This led to heated arguments breaking out, which caused him to take his own path, leaving his friends vulnerable to untrustworthy people. And in those nightmares, he always found his friends lifeless. It was always a different person telling him what had happened, but there was one constant element. They all felt abandoned by him, claiming that the blame for everything lay solely on Jake. If he had stayed and protected them, maybe he could have changed things. Perhaps his friends were right. After hearing the story, Cecil tried to comfort him, saying that it was a heavy burden to carry. Now it was his turn to explain how he had ended up imprisoned in that pendant. He wished it were a better story to tell, revealing that in the past he had been very much like Jake. Several eras ago, he had been one of the lowest-ranking members of the cult that worshipped the malevolent Viper. He had been a laughingstock. Even the newcomers had managed to look down on him. But he had a small group of friends. They always treated him well, and in return, he helped them test new enchantments and potions. Looking back on it now, he felt more like a test subject than a friend. until one day they asked him to test a pendant they had made. And just like that, one thing led to another. He was completely sucked into that empty dimension. Fortunately, he was able to observe what was happening outside. He saw the panic on the faces of his former friends as they tried to free him, until they simply abandoned the pendant on the ground and left him behind. He remembered the dust that slowly accumulated over the pendant through the years. Sometimes people would pass by wondering where he might have gone, but eventually they accepted the idea that he must have vanished. No one ever truly came looking for him. He had simply been abandoned inside the pendant. While the imp had been abandoned, Jake had abandoned his friends. But Cecil said that Jake was not a monster. Not everything in life happened as one wished, and it was not the abandonment that had made him bitter. It was the way his so-called friends had simply accepted the worst had happened and moved on. That was what unsettled him the most. Until, eventually, he became nothing more than an old memory. That was where Jake could be different. The problem was that Jake did not want to find out that his friends might not be alive anymore. Cecil told him he could deal with that when the time came, but there was still hope. His friends might need him. Jake remembered when he had told them that he had his own objectives in that place, advising them to stay together to increase their chances of survival, and telling them not to worry about him as he would get in touch when the time was right. Remembering these things made him start to feel remorse for his actions. Standing up, he said that Cecil was absolutely right. He had been running from his problems for too long. He decided that he would find Adam and resolve things once and for all. As soon as dawn broke, they would set off. Cecil wanted to know if he even had a plan for which direction to take. They had been walking for hours, and all they had found were a few creatures. Very hungry creatures at that. Jake told his friend to stop complaining. He had received a health potion and would be fine. But that was incapable of healing emotional trauma, which made the young man burst into laughter. The truth was, he had no idea where the camp was, but if they followed the river, they would eventually find it. That place was used for fishing, and for washing clothes as well. Besides being a source of drinking water, every civilization needed a water source. Cecil remarked that his friend was starting to sound like a real hunter, but after a month in that place, it was impossible not to learn a few things. The little creature was curious to know if his friend had already prepared a speech. Before that, they would need to scout the camp for a while, because Casper had been setting up traps before he left. And if he had progressed as much as Jake had, things could be problematic, since they would be walking into a minefield. Cecil reminded him that despite the difficulties, he was going there to talk to his friends, he should focus less on conflict and more on dialogue. And indeed, some of those people were truly his friends, while others, they were worse than enemies. If he got the chance to talk to Adam, he might be able to set things right. After all, he was being accused of something he had not done. The problem was, what if he was not lucky in his endeavor? Then, he would have a much bigger issue on his hands than just a few traps. It was up to them to simply hope for the best. In the middle of the journey, he suddenly stopped. Cecil asked what had happened, but the young man told him to be quiet. Pointing in a direction, he asked if he could see it too. It was as if there was an invisible curtain in front of them. It was slightly translucent, as if made of water, but the young man insisted that it was magic. His vision became distorted when trying to look through it, a sign that it was a magical barrier. It had been placed there to keep invaders out, or, in the worst-case scenario, to keep something trapped inside. At the moment, they did not have the answers they wanted, but eager to find out, he decided he would cross the barrier. Cecil stopped him from doing so as they did not know if it was possible to get back out. He could end up trapped inside and never find his friends. Taking a deep breath, the young man acknowledged that this was also a possibility. He decided to focus on finding his friends first and solving the mystery of the barrier later. He was very curious about what lay beyond, imagining it to be some monstrous creature. Finally, he managed to find the camp. Cecil praised his friend's perception, as from where he stood, he could see absolutely nothing. What he could observe, however, were several people complaining about their morning routines. The houses were very well built. It even seemed like they had a blacksmith. Looking toward a table where a few girls sat, he was quite impressed. There was no way he was really seeing this. Jonna's leg had been completely restored. According to what he had told Cecil, she was also an old friend of his. He had been there when she was ambushed on the first night of the tutorial, because he had been unable to save her in time. Yet Caroline had found a way to heal her. Cecil was happy to see his friend smile. It was good to see familiar faces. If she was alive, then it was possible that the others were too. All he needed now was to find Adam. The young man had just woken up and was still drowsy. He figured he wouldn't wake Caroline just yet. There were only 25 days left until the tutorial finally ended. He believed that when the time was up, life would return to normal. He had a hunt to go on in a few hours, and he considered visiting the blacksmith before that. Outside, he saw that everyone was already awake and working. He hoped this day would be a peaceful one as well. His gaze was suddenly caught by something unexpected. An arrow was flying in his direction. It landed right at his feet. Noticing that there was a rolled-up parchment attached to the shaft, he immediately picked it up. Reading the contents of the message, he was surprised. It was a message from Jake requesting to meet with him. The young man received a system notification that he had defeated a colossal bat. Now several of those creatures were chasing him. He managed to take down a few more and remained engaged in the fight. With his new spear, he was able to defeat the creatures with ease. They were being subdued as if they were weak beasts. proving that he was completely unhinged. He greatly enjoyed what he was doing. The creatures' bodies fell to the ground, utterly lifeless. He spent the entire morning hunting creatures and testing his new ability. Despite the hardships, this was the life he had prayed for. Covered in the blood of the creatures, he had never felt stronger than he did now. In the past, he would have washed up before returning to camp, but now that he had Richard's support, he no longer cared. It did not matter if he looked a little terrifying. His naive act no longer fooled anyone. And now he also had immense power. Inside the camp, he started wondering where everyone was, as there were usually plenty of people around. It seemed like they were all gathered inside a cabin. Something was probably happening in Caroline's tent, but he did not need to act as if he cared just yet. If it was something interesting, Richard would inform him. Inside, they were all holding a meeting. Placing the arrow on the table, one of the young men said that someone had tried to attack Adam. But Adam clarified that it was not an attack. It was a message in which Jake requested a meeting. Richard picked up the arrow to examine it. He said that his intuition told him this could be a trap. But if Jake had wanted to kill him, he would have done it already. Adam truly believed that it was just a conversation, an attempt at peace negotiations. Richard found that hard to believe. It was possible that Jake knew he was being hunted, which was why he wanted to talk. But it was Richard who wanted to hunt him down. He figured the boy was trying to make the first move. The woman did not want things to come down to violence, and someone said that it was the boy who started it. She did not know him very well, but she had never felt that he was a bad person. In fact, on the first night, he was the one who had managed to protect her. Caroline, however, did not believe he was saving her. He could have simply been looking for excitement. Richard respectfully asked her to leave the cabin. Jonah and Bertram were valuable members of the camp, but many people there could make that conversation difficult. He wanted to keep the discussion between himself, Caroline, and Adam. Adam agreed with this, but stated that he would still keep his friends informed about the matter. Finally, they were alone. Even though they were friends, Richard could not risk losing his best healer. Then Adam declared that he would go to the meeting alone, but Caroline said that he would not. Either they would go together or he would not go at all. Richard did not want to let them walk into what could be a trap set by the young man. Adam was a role model for the others in the camp, but he was not a killer. He was not suited to dealing with someone who could take out entire squads by himself. They could meet near the camp. If things got complicated, he could escape. Richard called him a fool for putting his life at risk for a coworker, but Adam knew his friend well, and he had contributed to the camp. That was why he simply asked for an opportunity and a bit of trust. Knowing that both of them had helped since the beginning, Richard had even suspected that Adam might be an enemy as well. Caroline stepped between them, asking them to calm down. She asked Adam to go outside and reassure the rest of his friends. The truth was the young man also needed to calm down. He was visibly shaken. Agreeing with her, he decided to leave the cabin. His friends wanted to know how the conversation had gone. He said it had gone terribly, but he was going to meet Jake anyway. Bertram was worried about him, as he also thought that going into the forest alone was too risky. But he had known his friend for years, and something about this situation did not feel right. They had seen what Jake was capable of since the first night, and he had already taken down dozens of Richard's men. But if Adam truly trusted him, then they should believe what he said about Jake. Caroline stepped out of the cabin and announced that they could meet Jake the next day. She had managed to convince Richard. Adam had no idea what she had done to achieve that. As the best healer in the camp, she had certain privileges. Either they went or she would leave. Adam was very impressed that she had negotiated like that. She might have had a falling out with Jake, but she did not believe he was a degenerate either. And if this was important to him, then it was important to her too. Extremely grateful, Adam felt happy now. Hugging him, she said she would stay with him until the end. Richard was dying of jealousy because deep in his heart, he dreamed about the blonde every day. The question was, which blonde? The next day was going to be beautiful. Along the path, there was a large rock. Beyond it, a small stream, and a cut tree stump. Jake believed he had arrived at the right place. Cecil wanted to know why his friends had chosen that spot. Most likely because they did not want to stray too far from the camp or wander too deep into the forest. They were probably also thinking that they could be attacked and wanted to have an escape route. That was when Cecil pointed out that being pessimistic was his job. His friends should try to be more positive. Jake knew he could trust his friends, but he could not deny that they had been inside Richard's camp for quite some time. Long enough for others to stop trusting them. His friends might have already chosen a side. Cecil hoped not, as that guy was a lunatic of the worst kind, besides being dangerous. Jake told him to stay inside the pendant, as he did not know what was going to happen and could not guarantee his safety. Cecil agreed, but he only hoped his friend would not die and leave him trapped in there again. Touching his friend's hand, Jake assured him that he would do his best. Finally, Cecil returned to the pendant. As they walked through the forest, someone asked Adam what the plan was. First, he warned the young man not to grip the hilt of his sword. They were not going there for a fight. He apologized, saying they were just a little on edge. Adam said he would lead the conversation and keep everything civil. No one was to draw weapons or cast spells. This was just a conversation between coworkers. Jake was already at the designated location. It was time to start the conversation. They approached the young man, who seemed quite mysterious. Jake pulled back his hood and greeted them with a broad smile. Adam apologized for the delay, noticing how much his friend had changed. Jake said he had been getting some exercise in the meantime. Even though he was stronger now, he felt that his friend was still the same bundle of nerves. Getting closer to him, they began talking casually, but there was still a lot of tension in the air. Jake also wanted to know how their friends were doing. Adam said that everything was fine in the camp. Meanwhile, Caroline felt that everyone had been acting a bit strange, and since she had been called there, she wanted to know what was going on. Jake explained that he had been approached by people in the forest who were accusing him of things he had not done. Interrupting the conversation, Caroline asked how many people he had already sent to the other world. Adam did not like that, but she insisted that Jake answer. The truth was there had been many, but not enough to start a war. Bertrand was also uneasy and wanted the archer to be honest. Jake then declared that everything he had done was in self-defense. From what they could see, he did not seem anything like William's description. They had expected him to be deceitful and violent. Gradually, they were starting to realize that William was a massive liar. Jake wanted to know what that clown had said about him. They knew that both of them had returned. Jake said that Idiot had tried to retrieve him when he was about to meet them. He advised Adam not to trust him. The guy was completely insane. Adam had already been suspicious, suspecting that William was the one who had killed Casper. Hearing this, Jake was deeply shaken. That was what they believed. They were surprised that Jake had not known about it yet. Every night he checked the number of survivors, wondering if his friends were still alive. But he had felt great relief when he saw Jonah still alive while observing the camp. He had figured that if she had survived, then perhaps the others had as well. With tears in his eyes, he had not expected that Casper was already gone. Even though he was emotional, he made a point to say that he was still okay. Caroline now regretted coming. She thought this had been a terrible idea. Adam wanted to know what was wrong. She said that he should have stayed at the camp, but now it was too late. Jake sensed that there was someone else there with them. It was possible to hear rustling coming from the bushes. He reached for his quiver to grab an arrow. With his bow drawn, he warned that there was no point in hiding. He already knew they were there. Adam tried to stop his friend, but Richard had already revealed himself, acknowledging that the young man's perception was extremely sharp. With his sword resting on his shoulder, he said he was happy to see him. Furious at the sight of him, Jake asked if his friend had set him up, but Adam denied it. Richard confirmed the young man's words. He had known nothing about it. He could not count on Adam for this, as he would have ruined all of his plans. Adam immediately realized that his companion had actually been a traitor. She tried to apologize, but he was completely enraged at having been deceived. If he had listened to the stories, he would have doubted Jake as well. Everyone had been saying that he was a monster. He had heard everything they were saying about him, yet he had chosen to trust his friend. But this mediocre woman had chosen to trust others instead. Richard ordered Jake to come with him so they could resolve this situation. If he had done nothing wrong, they could put everything behind them. He could even forget that Jake had killed his archer when they first met. With his instincts sharpened, Jake could sense the malice in this man. He was absolutely certain that he was lying. He ordered him to tell his men to leave. Only then could they have a conversation. Adam had not realized there were other people there. Hayden revealed himself along with his men, praising the hunter's skills. Both of them had been working together on this little project. The whole meeting had been a trap, and Adam felt completely used. They were surrounded on all sides. Jake was furious for allowing himself to be cornered like that. Richard said he would only ask one more time. He wanted to know if the archer would surrender. Jake had no idea what to do. There was no escape route. Hayden had already lost his patience and decided to cast a spell. A blazing fireball was launched straight at the archer. A massive explosion followed, but he had managed to dodge it. As soon as he landed back on the ground, he fired his first arrow. It whistled through the air, heading straight for its target. But the mage was able to conjure a shield. Richard ordered the warriors to stay back. Meanwhile, the elder instructed the mages to surround their target. Placing their hands on the ground, they began preparing a large spell. Jake felt the earth beneath him breaking apart. This situation was definitely terrible. Hayden declared that Jake would not escape this time, launching another attack. A massive explosion erupted, but Jake had vanished as if he had teleported, reappearing on the broken tree stump. Adam pleaded with Richard to stop the attack, but for the stubborn man, this was the only way. He tried talking to the woman he could no longer trust, hoping she would do something. At this rate, they would end up hurting their own comrade. Caroline said there was nothing she could do now. The archers were already preparing another wave of arrows, and the mages showed no sign of stopping their attacks. Their goal was to wear Jake down. They should use everything they had to bring him down. Richard also encouraged his men to do the same. Inside the pendant, Cecil was growing extremely worried. His friend needed to get out of there immediately. There was not much he could do. There were too many attacks to dodge, and one of the mages was blocking his ability to move through the shadows. The noose was tightening, and he could not use his teleportation. That was when he noticed that one of his feet was already trapped. The situation was getting worse by the second. Richard commanded the archers to fire. Arrows soared through the air. Jake could not evade all of them. One struck him. Another pierced through his leg. The young man was now wounded and completely immobilized. He screamed furiously, demanding to be freed. Richard prepared to finally end his life. Adam desperately tried to do something to save his friend. Cecil was also in a panic as the events unfolded. Standing over him, Richard declared that it was all about to end. Jake struggled to break free from his bindings, but he had no strength left. The sword was about to become very familiar with his neck. Jake was almost ready to accept his fate. There was nothing he could do in that situation. Even after all the battles he had won, or the monsters he had slain along the way, he had not been able to overcome a betrayal. He only hoped that someone would find the pendant and free his friend inside it, because it seemed that he had met his end. Then suddenly, the system announced that he had unlocked Primal Hunter's Moment of Bloodline ability. He looked at the message, not understanding anything, but he had undergone a human evolution. Feeling his body changing, he had no idea what was happening. His heart was beating faster and faster. His instincts were taking control of his body. That single moment he was experiencing stretched into an eternity. Now he could sense all the mana around him. It was as if an immense pool was filling inside his core. And now there was only one thing he could do. Let all that power find its way out. A shockwave erupted, blasting the fools away from him. Richard was among those hurled across the battlefield. Jake roared, his body radiating immense energy. The onlookers could only stare at what was happening. Hayden began to suspect it might be some kind of magic. Jake was now able to break free from his restraints, and finally he stood up. Adam was astonished by what he was witnessing, but he no longer knew what his friend had become. Caroline, who at this point should be banned from having an opinion, was now fully convinced of the rumors about Jake. He really had become a monster. Richard told them not to be afraid. One man alone could not be a match for all of them, ordering his men to attack immediately. The small army of expendable fighters charged toward their inevitable demise. Jake slowly unsheathed his daggers. He took a deep breath to regain his composure. His movements were so fast, they were barely visible. The first grunt had already received his ticket to the afterlife. The second had also been granted a seat on the same train. The third did not even realize his chest had been sliced open. All of this had happened so quickly that they were only now realizing that they were no longer among the living. Seeing that he was next in line to die, one of them ordered his men to form a defensive line. Expendable soldiers armed with swords and shields obeyed the command. Jake, however, passed over them without any difficulty. Carrying vials of poison with him, he dropped each one on the extras. They were severely affected by that poison. They began to suffer from the effects of that substance while the Primal Hunter struck his heroic pose. The poison was truly powerful. The men were melting like plastic soldiers under the sun. Adam started to feel terrified by that disgusting scene. None of the men that were able to stop him, they were losing their lives for nothing. Hayden, full of ignorance and courage, believed he would be able to stop him. He wanted to keep that spell hidden for a moment of emergency. Creating wings like those of a disease-ridden pigeon, he recognized that he had no more options. Charging into the attack, he said he would not allow Jake to escape from there. The hunter realized that this mage was really fast. It was necessary to take some evasive maneuvers. Those wings were now truly dangerous. If he hadn't dodged them, he would have been in serious trouble, perhaps even missing limbs. The old man said he couldn't run and should give up as soon as possible. Indeed, his speed was not enough to keep up, and reinforcements would soon arrive to interfere with the fight. His only chance to get out of there was by using the Path of Shadows. This time, he hoped that ability would work. Cecil had warned him that there was some kind of barrier in that place. Finally, the hunter realized he had been contained. He had no idea who was doing it, but there was an apology. Caroline was truly a pathetic traitor. She had no choice now, as she had compromised herself too much. She would not let him escape from there. Adam tried to get Caroline to disguise the barrier. Jake was worried about his friend's situation. Adam tried to reinforce the idea that it was unnecessary to do that. He tried to convince Caroline, but in a completely unconvincing way, she simply ignored him. Someone ended up hitting the young man on the back of the neck. Richard was the one who did it because he knew there was no way to convince him. He also said that it was an impressive maneuver. He really thought they would lose him at that moment. But in the end, it proved to all of them that they were right. He was too dangerous. The only choice they had was to finish him. He asked Hayden to do the honors and end him, something the old man would do with great joy. Once again, the young man found himself cornered with no way out. If he could charge one of his arrows, maybe he could break the barrier. He had only one opportunity to attack and needed to make sure it worked. Hayden advanced toward him to avenge his own son. His powerful attack completely shattered the barrier, striking the Primal Hunter in the chest in a brutal manner. Joy and rage were evident on the old man's face. His victim had nowhere left to run. A red liquid began to pour from the hunter's mouth. The mage believed he had finally managed to end the fight. There was red liquid everywhere. He only wished for his victim to die slowly because he wanted him to feel a lot of pain. But if that was how his life was going to end, then he would make sure to take the old man with him. Feeling his skin burn, he realized there was something in those hands. Jake had spent several weeks perfecting that poison. He had managed to coat his hands with it while charging the attack. Due to his resistance, he hadn't felt anything. But for that poor old man, he would be melted down to the bone. He realized he needed to get away immediately. Dropping his weapon, that's exactly what he did. Jake was now trying to remove that thing from his chest. He screamed in agony as he did it. Finally, he had freed himself. The old man said it didn't matter because he must have been too weakened to continue fighting, and he would finish him off since he had the advantage of distance. Indeed, Jake was in no condition to fight, and now, a gigantic attack was heading his way. However, he had managed to make sure that the two of them were alone. The wave of destruction occurred in an unforgiving manner. The others approached the old man, wanting to know what had happened, because there were no signs that Jake was still there. Richard was enraged as there was no body left, and the old man confirmed that their victim had escaped. Walking in the shadows, he had managed to escape, but he could not let his pursuers find him. Cecil was desperate, worried about his friend. The young man told him to stay inside the necklace because they were not safe yet. He needed to find a safe place to rest and recover. Meanwhile, all the extras were searching for him in the forest, for this is their only chance to find something. Richard was a daemon. It was necessary to end his life. Jake knew they were getting closer. It wouldn't take long for them to find his trail. Cecil warned that there was something ahead of them. It was that barrier they had encountered before, but they didn't know what was behind that barrier. If it was like a dungeon, it would prevent low-level players from entering, which would keep him protected. The problem was that he might be heading toward an even greater danger. Unfortunately, that was a risk he had to take now. Jake finally entered the inside of the barrier. He began to take his first steps inside the place. His perception didn't detect anything unusual. It was possible that the place was safe. Finally, he had a few seconds to rest, but it didn't take long for him to be immediately surprised. There were several creatures in that place that didn't seem friendly. It was unfortunate, but that was how things were. This would be a terrible way to lose his life. Unfortunately, the bleeding had been intense, causing him to lose his strength. He was attacked by the creatures but could barely feel the pain. He was sure that now his life would end, at the hands of creatures he could have defeated if he were healthy. Useless creatures that wouldn't even grant him much experience. The Viper said it was very rude to enter someone's home without announcing oneself. Jake was completely healed. His life had been hanging by a thread, and he didn't remember what had happened. The Viper wanted to know if he remembered the blessing he had received the last time they met. Jake wanted to know what it meant. It was a two-way street. They were connected. He just didn't expect the boy to appear suddenly. Realizing that his body had no wounds, he was afraid that the Viper might have summoned him. It had only facilitated the transition, but it was the young man who had initiated the process. Jake wanted to know where they were, and the Viper said it was like its room or headquarters. The young man felt that the phrase seemed humble, but one had to be egocentric to be a god. The Viper asked him to sit by its side. Jake realized he didn't have his necklace, immediately becoming worried because his friend was inside it. The Viper said the necklace was on his real body, meaning he must have freed Cecil before losing consciousness. Sitting beside the Viper, he asked if he was really there and where his real body was. He learned that he wasn't dead yet, but he also wasn't alive. Jake wanted to go back because his friend was in danger. The Viper told him to calm down because his body was healing, but it was best to avoid stress on his soul. That whole conversation didn't make any sense. The god said that astral projection was a difficult concept to explain to him. His soul had come to that place because his subconscious imagined it as a safe location. It was a very risky maneuver, but knowing that his life was at risk, his instincts had made the right decision. Indeed, they had been emerging frequently lately. The Viper said that danger had a way of making these things happen. Now, if he wanted to know how to return to his body, his soul would naturally return when he was healed, but he had to hope that no one found his body. The young man wanted to know what would happen if someone found it. The Viper confirmed that he would end up ceasing to exist forever. Cecil was dragging his friend's body to a safe place while that area was far too dangerous. It was a shame that no one ever listened to his advice, but you should be grateful that he had freed him before losing consciousness. Even though he had been abandoned in the middle of several dinosaurs, he had done his best to drive the creatures away. They were lucky that he had been able to drag him into that cave. Cecil began to sigh, deeply worried. He didn't know what to do without his friend and hoped he would wake up soon. While they were talking inside the room, the temple master was spying from outside. She wanted to know who this person was who spoke so casually with a malevolent Viper. It might be a test, and the Viper wanted her to defend its honor. Imagining that was the case, she forced her way into the room, announcing her presence to the Viper Mauer. But she quickly realized she was interrupting a moment between friends. The Viper told the young man that this was Viridia, the one responsible for the mortals in that place. Finally, the woman met the Viper's friend. His presence was much stronger than that of an ordinary mortal. She didn't know how he endured the aura of a god. With a smile on his face, Jake said it was good to have met her. The woman apologized for interrupting, and now the atmosphere felt very awkward. The Viper invited her to join them since they were about to discuss the time her ex-boyfriend tried to end her. Jake felt like the whole situation was a bad taste misunderstanding. But what was done was done. Jake had been too naive, and now he had to collect his sweet revenge. The young man tried to justify himself, but the Viper told him he had thought wrong and that he was too weak to afford making mistakes. The woman believed in the guidance of her patron. Whatever he said must be correct. The Viper said that followers were nice, but they were terrible conversation partners. Stoic decided to ask what its friend truly desired in the depths of his heart. The young man wanted to return to his body and continue living. The Viper asked him to think bigger and try again. That wasn't exactly what came to his mind, but he wished to clear things up with his friends, and to take revenge on the old man who had pierced through his chest, and to take the lives of Richard and the boy William. But above all, he longed to fight intensely. He wanted to face challenging opponents to experience the thrill of defeating them. His intention was to become stronger and stronger, so that in the end he could do whatever he pleased. Indeed, freedom was a goal worth pursuing, but those who were free could not be chained by their past. There was no freedom without power, and power was never cheap. He had to make sure he would never be trapped again. And when it happened again, he needed to crush the traitors like ants. Eventually, he would find himself standing atop a mountain of corpses and had to ensure he was the only one left standing. That was the Viper's concept of what it truly meant to be free. But one had noticed that the Chosen One had started to glow. It seemed like his soul was beginning to return to his body. Seeing that it was time for farewells, the Viper wished to meet its friend again. Taking his hands, it thanked him for the pleasant conversation. The Viper asked the woman what she thought about it. She couldn't deny that she was completely captivated. That man was truly remarkable. Inside the cave, the boy continued his exercise, revealing a physique chiseled by Trembolone. It seems someone had been taking the venom. Cecil woke up to the sound of the young man counting. He remained focused, doing his sit-ups with unwavering determination. He had already done countless repetitions. Cecil was impressed that his friend was alive. Finally, he received a cheerful good morning from a smiling Jake. They embraced each other full of joy. Cecil had almost believed he would never see his friend again. Jake apologized for making him drag his body all the way there. He owed him a favor now. Cecil admitted he was annoyed at first, but then he realized something. He had been freed before Jake lost consciousness. He wasn't sure if his friend had done it consciously, but that was what had saved him. Had Jake lost his life, Cecil would have been trapped in that necklace forever. In his last moments, he had freed Cecil. Perhaps he would never be able to repay such kindness. But he didn't need to, because that was what friendship was. Speaking of friends, Jake asked if he wanted to talk about what had happened, but there was nothing to discuss. He had made a mistake and needed to learn from it. Cecil apologized because he was the one who convinced him to do it. But the mistake wasn't meeting with them. The mistake was being weak. If he had been strong enough, being cornered wouldn't have been a problem at all. He was tired of treating the tutorial like a game. It was time to take things more seriously. A system window popped up indicating he had many unread messages. Since he hadn't checked anything, he decided to see what he had received. There were so many notifications that he was startled. He had received experience points from the players he had defeated. One in particular made him think. He hadn't realized he had defeated Hayden, the old man. It wasn't possible that the poison alone had been enough to kill him. As if that wasn't enough, there were several messages indicating that he had defeated other players. It was possible that another player had done it, but he quickly realized it was Richard. He had merely been a pawn in Richard's plans. The rage he felt for that bastard now was immeasurable. At the very least, he had gained some points for participating in it. The system informed him that he had met all the requirements to evolve his class. Seeing that it came from a golden screen, it was likely something very special. The system wanted to know if he wished to begin the evolution process. And if he wishes to continue surviving, getting stronger is the only solution. His class was now Ambitious Hunter, at level 25. He really liked the new name. His class always seeks true challenges. Focusing on agility and strength and power is inevitable if he survives. He was pleased to have received a bonus to his perception and the damage he could inflict on stronger opponents. This would help his progress in catching up with the others. Picking up his cloak from the ground, he said he had no more time to waste. There were 25 days left until the tutorial ended, and in those days he needed to hunt everything worthwhile in that forest. Caroline was desperate because Adam refused to talk to her. She said she acted with their best interests in mind as she couldn't trust Jake. But he hated being used by her and hated that she had lied so that an innocent man's life would be taken. She tried to say again that she did all of this for them. But after what happened to Casper, she had to be completely mistaken. She tried to say that he still had her and Bertram. But the young man was now unsure if he could continue trusting that woman. Apologizing once more, Caroline wanted to know what he wanted her to do. He just wanted to be alone because he needed time to think. After the argument, he walked away from the woman. Richard had been there, listening to the entire commotion. After everything she had risked, she ended up losing everything, and they still failed to finish off Jake. Richard reminded her that they were pursuing something much greater than that. He had allowed Hayden to use his best spell because it would drain his resources. That had left him vulnerable and at a disadvantage. If not for that, he wouldn't have been able to defeat him. With the old man out of the picture, his entire camp was now in disarray. Caroline wanted to know why they were still fighting. Richard said it wouldn't be long now, soon he would put an end to all of his enemies. But that didn't make sense since Jake was still alive. None of them had expected that. The boy had managed to escape twice. Even so, they weren't wrong because that explosion confirmed that their fears were real. Even though he hadn't done anything wrong, nothing would stop his revenge now. But they would be ready when that day came. It had been 2 hours since William started working at the forge. If he had arrived before Jake's hunt, he would have been able to take part in the ambush. He was very upset that Jake had managed to escape alive, but there would be an attack to wipe out the remnants of the enemy camp, and that would be the opportunity for him to vent his frustrations. The blacksmith appeared to check on his progress. William said he was just keeping himself busy, all the people there. The blacksmith was the one he hated the least. The man asked him to follow him to his cabin because there was something he wanted to discuss. It was a bit strange since William had never seen the man's cabin before. He kept to himself at the camp. Upon seeing the house, William noted that the decoration was very simple. But the man never saw a need to make the place more comfortable. William asked what was going on. The man asked him to be patient, then found the object he was looking for. Placing the dish on the table, he said he wouldn't like anyone overhearing their conversation. A blue glow began to emanate from the object. Now the two of them were inside a magical dome. The man asked William not to panic. It was a soundproof barrier that would prevent anyone from eavesdropping on their conversation. William didn't care how he managed to do that despite not being a mage. It was a skill granted by his profession. He could perform small enchantments. William wanted to know what he wanted and why a barrier was necessary. They were having this conversation because of a mutual contact they had. At first, William thought it was Richard, but it definitely wasn't that person. The man confirmed that what they had in common wasn't a person, it was a god. It might be completely unbelievable, but he had been speaking with gods, and these beings were interested in those going through the tutorial. By observing mortals, they could grant rewards that would otherwise be completely unattainable, a way to gain even more power and influence. He had come into contact with one called Kamicus, the god of forges. William still didn't know what that had to do with him. That god had an ally, the god of metal, Feroras, who was very interested in William as he had apparently rejected him when he offered him a class and William didn't accept. The truth is that he didn't like the name, but he was very pleased with the ability he had gained. Even so, he ended up accepting one of the god's abilities, and now they were linked. William didn't like the idea of being a follower of anything. The man told him that he wouldn't be able to clear the tutorial alone, and that he could forge equipment for him that would make him even more powerful. Far more powerful than Richard. William was surprised that this person was mentioned specifically. The man explained that he hadn't arrived there alone. He had come with his son and daughter-in-law. He had promised to protect them in the forest, but he had been unable to keep that promise. And it was Richard himself who had committed that atrocity. William felt sorry for the tragic story he had just heard, even though he thought he didn't care at all about the suffering of others. The blacksmith said that his son was the same age as William, and that he and his girlfriend were deeply in love. That's why he wished to take revenge, but he wasn't strong enough to do so. Even so, he saw an opportunity in William. It was his God who had guided him to William, and now he had a chance to fulfill his dreams. Love was a word that made the boy deeply thoughtful. He remembered when Casper had once said that to him. William had never lost anyone he loved. Unfortunately, those words were starting to make sense to him. So he asked what the blacksmith wanted him to do. Raising his hands high, the man told him to step back. William started to feel uneasy about all of it, because he had no idea how this man was capable of doing all of this. Without understanding what was happening, the blacksmith explained that he was summoning his own forge. It was far superior to the ones they used in the camp. Trying to comprehend what he was witnessing, William asked what exactly the man was doing. He said that a great battle was approaching, and the boy needed to be fully prepared. It had been a long time since he started observing that work. He could no longer even measure how many hours he had been there, yet it felt like only seconds had passed. The hammer's strikes were hypnotic. It was a full suit of armor, beautifully crafted, the best he had ever seen. Outside, everyone else was preparing to attack the enemy camp. Even the traitor was ready, and there he was, witnessing the work of a true master. Finally, the man reached the conclusion of his work. He wanted the boy to try on the armor. Holding it in his hands, William realized that it truly was incredible. The system stated that it was crafted for someone talented and would help absorb and store mana. He was intrigued by the diffusion of kinetic force. The man explained that he wouldn't turn into a pile of flesh when hit by a crushing blow because the force would be dissipated. He would be able to take a few hits without suffering any damage. William didn't even know what to say after receiving such a gift. Somehow, he started to feel grateful, and he wasn't sure if he had ever felt that way in his life. But they still needed to move on to the second part. There was information about the armor. He hoped the boy would understand more about it, but he asked him to listen to the message only after they finished everything. William didn't quite understand what he meant. The man wanted to know if the boy would fulfill his promise and carry out his personal revenge. William confirmed that he would. He had hidden his name from everyone in that camp, and now he felt like he could trust the boy. His name was Hermann Schmidt, his son's name was Gunnar, and his daughter-in-law's name was Corinne. The woman had been pregnant with his grandchild when she lost her life. William began to experience emotions he had never felt before. The man's body started to glow, hopeful that his selfish wish would be fulfilled and that his memory would be honored. Only William could do that for him. The boy couldn't understand what that light was and began to ask questions. The man said goodbye to him, wishing him happiness in this new world and hoping he could come to understand himself better. The light became more and more intense. William started shouting Herman's name. Seeing his body collapse to the ground, he grew worried about what he had done. Fear started creeping in, but he couldn't explain what was happening to him. Finally, the man's body began to disappear, and from William's face, tears started to fall. He didn't know why he had started crying. Not even his most dreadful memories had ever made him feel anything. Maybe now he felt what his parents had felt in that moment, something he had never been able to feel until now. After all this time, he was finally able to understand, but he wouldn't let this sensation start to distract him. He turned his attention to the armor in front of him. As he picked it up in his hands, he saw it begin to liquefy in his arms, that belonged to him and no one else. He could feel his strength growing. The armor was granting him power. This was an epic tier item infused with the blacksmith's dreams, only usable by a person chosen before the creator's death. That masterpiece was his complete legacy. William was determined to show Richard what the two of them would be capable of. On the ground, he spotted a small note. He had almost forgotten about it. It seemed to be enchanted with some kind of spell capable of storing audio. He brought the paper close to his ear. Hearing the message, he looked visibly surprised. That person was truly cunning. Later in the forest, Jake continued hunting. That day had been very productive for him. Cecil warned that his friend was becoming terrifying. It would be awful to have to fight him. It seemed that with every level he gained, he learned something new about archery. He was level 46 as an alchemist and level 38 in the human race. Satisfied with his progress, he hoped to reach level 50 before the tutorial ended. Cecil wanted to know how much time they had left. There were only 22 days remaining, but something seemed wrong. The number of survivors had dropped drastically. It kept decreasing in real time. Jake realized that something massive was happening in the forest. Hours earlier, on that same day, the warriors had been preparing. Their swords were already sharpened for battle. Their enemy had already been defeated. All that remained was his subordinate, Desmond, who was likely seeking revenge. They had given them a chance to surrender, but they refused, and they wouldn't allow them to start another war. That night, they would end the conflict once and for all. The enraged mass of extras was eager to head into battle. Richard was very pleased with what he had accomplished there. He carefully examined his system. He was close to completing his personal quest. It wouldn't be long before he finally cleared the tutorial. Soon, the only person left to defeat would be that troublesome archer. William would also be a thorn in his side since he was no longer loyal to him. Once he finished using him to eliminate his enemies, he would get rid of him. Approaching the boy, he asked if he had seen the blacksmith. William replied that the man wasn't a fan of combat. The only thing he cared about was his forge. A shame, because he would have been formidable in battle. At least they could count on William, who was a great friend. But William struggled to hide the rage he now felt toward Richard. Finally, the army was ready, and they arrived at their destination. Seeing a massive wall erected before them, they began provoking the enemy forces. On the other side, there was only a single mage. He waited patiently for his enemies to advance. Richard declared that he would lead the charge with his army. Immediately, he positioned himself for battle. His shield began to channel a blue energy. From it, a powerful burst of energy was projected forward. William found the move truly impressive. Looking through a gap in the wall, he confirmed that only one man stood on the other side, and he was already prepared to retaliate. He instantly fired his own spell. Richard tried to warn his men to shield themselves. A strong magical barrier was raised, protecting the entire army. This time, more mages gathered, preparing to strike again. Caroline knew that barrier wouldn't last long. Richard warned that they would attack soon. He ordered his troops to advance immediately. Meanwhile, the mages on the other side began retreating. The biggest fool started anticipating that this would be easier than expected, until he was caught off guard by a massive explosion at the rear of his platoon. He turned to see what had happened. His army had been completely surrounded. There were archers positioned behind them. His soldiers were beginning to grow fearful, but he gave the order. They had to kill them all. War was, inevitably, a complicated situation. It wasn't a contest of trained individuals measuring their skills. It was nothing but meaningless violence. The first targets in the battle were the mages on the battlefield, as they were the most vulnerable. After that, the archers began to fall. Meanwhile, the healers were heavily protected. But in the end, the result was the same. Nothing shines more intensely than a skilled knight. When the conflict ended, the number of survivors had dropped significantly. He asked Desmond to surrender, but the young man refused. Faced with those words, Richard would do as was indirectly requested. But the ground around the mage began to tremble subtly, until his body started to glow intensely. Expecting the worst, the fool had already shielded himself with a protective barrier. Caroline said that nothing would get through that barrier. He was waiting to see what that would lead to. Hearing the sound of blades, he caught the weak voice of Caroline. She had been stabbed by William. Mysteriously, she still had the audacity to ask why the boy had done that. The truth was, she deserved it. Her lifeless body had turned to stone. William said that they were all a bunch of fools. The body of a foolish and easily manipulated woman lay on the battlefield. Healers would always be the first targets of an attack. Seeing that, the extras began to react in shock to the betrayal. One of them charged toward William to take his life, but the boy had already summoned multiple daggers. Eliminating his opponents was not difficult at all. They were taken down like the expendable extras they were. Only one target remained now. Richard appeared to be quite exhausted from the battle. Even so, William advanced toward him mercilessly. Trying to feign ignorance, Richard asked what the boy was doing. This was something he should have done a long time ago. He knew he couldn't afford recklessness in this fight. Even though he had been strengthened by the armor, his opponent was still a skilled warrior. If he wasn't careful, he would undoubtedly be defeated. So far, their battle seemed to be well matched. Richard warned him that he would be nothing without his help, but William was too focused on the fight. Once again, he was reminded that he would have been eliminated on the first day if Richard hadn't intervened. Everyone had seen his mediocre performance, but Richard had recognized his potential, and he didn't appreciate being repaid in such a way. William managed to find an opening in the warrior's attack, executing a strike that intercepted his blow. Now the fool was wounded and lying on the ground. William said he was no one's pawn and that he had better not be underestimated again. Richard seized the moment to grab a handful of sand, throwing it toward the boy's eyes. Even though he was injured, he wasn't out of the fight, but his attack was completely blocked by the boy. The longer the fight went on, the stronger William felt. And it wasn't just the armor making that happen. There was something else fueling this sensation, but he couldn't quite identify what that feeling was. Richard now realized he was in serious trouble. He decided to use his persuasion to end the conflict. He managed to buy time to unleash his full potential. This would not be the place where his life would end, much less at William's hands. Biting down on his fingernail with great force, he shattered it between his teeth. William definitely knew what that was. It had to be some kind of hidden ability, just like Herman had. He must have been sacrificing part of his life force to gain temporary power. Completely enraged, Richard charged at the boy. It was too fast. There was no way he could dodge in time. Plunging his blade into the boy's chest, Richard believed it was over. William began coughing up a massive amount of crimson liquid. He admitted that the attack hadn't been bad at all, but it was already too late for Richard. Taking advantage of their close proximity, William used one of his secret techniques. The swords scattered on the ground began to rise. Then they started to align themselves in the air. Richard was shocked to witness what was happening, as he was suddenly struck by all of those blades. That was the boy's secret move. This attack would end him once and for all. Surrounded by rapidly flying swords, he was completely trapped. William then gave the order to the swords, which began to rush toward Richard. The dome of swords was so massive that it began to engulf the forest, until all that remained was a devastated clearing. With only one eye left on his face and divorced from his arm, he couldn't understand what had driven the boy to take such an action. Everything had gone exactly as William had planned. People were nothing more than pieces on a chessboard to him. But the true reason was to avenge his friend Herman, who had lost his life at Richard's hands. It was Herman who had crafted this armor for him. And finally, they had managed to defeat all their enemies. After this, he would return to camp and build a great pile of corpses as a tribute to his friend, to signal that they had finally won. Then he would go after the archer, and by finishing him off, he would show the system who the greatest in that place was. But the boy's body no longer had any strength left. He too collapsed unconscious. That whirlwind of emotions had been something truly fascinating, a gift from the system to one who had always wished to understand others. The floodgates had been opened. William had thought that his lack of emotions made him superior, but perhaps it was emotions that would lead him to an even greater place. The mysterious figure said that the boy did not yet have permission to die. Forcing his heart to resume functioning normally, it commanded him to rise once more. His first job was at the age of 16 as a student monitor. He was basically a babysitter for grown people. One of those schools was a particularly difficult place to work. It was in the slums of the city and was full of juvenile delinquents. Fights among the kids were a common occurrence. In the hallways, the delinquents were already settling their disputes with their fists, but he was never intimidated by it, always making the students stop fighting, even if he had to use a little force to do so. The problem was that sometimes he ended up getting hurt in the process. He always returned home with a new bruise. His father had begun to worry about it. He asked how he got injured, and Adam told him it happened at the school where he worked as a monitor. It could have been worse, and soon he would be fine. The truth was, the boy hated that job and desperately wanted to work at his father's company. Anything to get away from those ill-mannered kids, but his father didn't approve of that mindset. Those children lived a harsh life that he would never understand, because his son had received everything good from the moment he was born. He never had to worry about clothes or his next meal. His father wanted him to learn a few things about life so he could use his privileges for a greater purpose and hoped he could change those children's lives. His true wish was for his son to become someone worthy of being followed. Adam took that advice deeply to heart, and the next day, he had a talk with the kids. It wasn't easy, but he managed to make them get along. As soon as he graduated, he was offered a job at his father's company, but he ended up refusing. He wanted to find his own place in the world, so he started as an intern. Soon after, he became a full-time employee, and eventually he became the manager of that company. He had a natural talent for dealing with people and leading his team, a leader worth following. But in this place, he was neither strong nor particularly skilled. He had tried everything he could, but the tutorial had stripped him of everything he had. No matter what he did, his friends kept disappearing, and he was completely incapable of protecting them from the worst, not even the woman he loved, who was no longer among the living. Looking at her body, he felt a deep sorrow not knowing who had done this. The last time they had spoken, it had been a fight. He never even got the chance to say goodbye to her. His friend said he'd have found someone among the bodies. It was William, and then he immediately realized who was responsible for all of this. Filled with hatred, he should have already expected that William was the one behind this catastrophe. Even though he was still breathing, his body had suffered severe damage. His comrade wanted to know what they should do now. The only desire Adam had was to end him. Without hesitation, he drew his sword. After everything that boy had done, ending his life would be doing the world a favor, because he was, without a doubt, a monster. But his hands began to hesitate. He couldn't bring himself to use his sword for this. Even he didn't understand why he couldn't finish it. His rational mind told him that he should. If William survived, he would come back for revenge. The problem was, he simply couldn't do anything against the boy. That place had managed to break everyone who had entered it, turning them into killers. With tears in his eyes, he refused to let himself be broken as well. He wouldn't allow hope to be lost. Finally, the system notified him that he had evolved his class. Adam was astonished by the message. He would become the Augur of Hope. His mission was to help others understand their own destinies. But he didn't understand that message. He began receiving messages from various gods, but he wasn't able to comprehend any of them. Bertram asked who they were from, but Adam couldn't say. He just had a feeling about them. And so he started selecting one of the names. Each of those invitations carried a very clear intent. His friend wanted to know what he would do about it. He wasn't sure if this was what he had been waiting for in his life, but he had a chance to make this time the tutorial meaningful. An opportunity to find his place in the world. A golden invitation appeared. The Sacred Mother had invited Adam into her realm. He was impressed by the nature of the invitation, and because of that, he decided to accept it. Adam was transported to a completely different place. He had no idea where he was now. For a moment, he wondered if he was in paradise. He was immediately greeted by a woman with golden hair. Her beauty was so overwhelming that the young man felt slightly embarrassed. The woman knew that he was impressed by the overwhelming radiance of health she exuded, and indeed, what he was witnessing was truly magnificent. Pointing to a type of sofa, she invited him to take a seat. She also offered him some tea, which he accepted immediately. Knowing he must be very confused, she was grateful that he had accepted her invitation. Since many deities had shown interest in him, she had been watching him ever since he associated with the sage. Not to mention that he was also connected to the Viper's chosen, a hunter. Adam hadn't imagined that others had been through this. Many evolved their classes, but not everyone reached encounters like this. His connection with others had been just a minor factor. Her true interest lay elsewhere. Only one person throughout the entire tutorial had never taken a human life, and that was exactly what she had been searching for, a merciful shepherd who could reach the hearts of humanity. He didn't know who the hunter or the sage she had mentioned were, nor whether he was being recruited into a religion. The sage had caught the attention of an old friend, while the hunter had drawn the interest of the Viper. Even though she could not approach the hunter due to the Viper's interference, she knew they were friends. Adam began to wonder if she was talking about Jake. He wanted to know what it meant to awaken the Viper. She explained that the malevolent Viper had existed since the beginning of time. It had remained in seclusion for many eras up until the world's integration. Most likely, it was his friend who had triggered this movement. Adam asked whether this was a bad thing or if it was good that the Viper had returned. The goddess responded that only time would bring that answer, but she was happy that it had emerged from his mausoleum. The way she spoke was too enigmatic, he could barely keep up. He imagined it would be too arrogant to ask, like he wanted to know if this was something good or bad. The goddess told him that he cared too much about the concept of right and wrong. That would depend on what he did in this place. But since he had chosen her, she was certain it must be for the good. The young man wanted to know what he should do and why he had been brought here. Standing up, she said she wished to give him both a gift and a responsibility. Unfolding her wings, she revealed that the gift was her blessing, and the responsibility was to serve her, spreading her word across the universe. The sight before him was truly majestic. Adam wanted to know what words she wanted him to spread. The purpose was very simple, to serve her and the sacred light. Her teachings were about hope, justice, and righteousness. To be fair to one another and to learn to love one's neighbor. To punish those who are evil and help people become the best versions of themselves. Intrigued, he asked if she was God. Indeed, she was, but not in the way he had always heard. Even he could one day step into the divine realm. It might take countless years, but as long as he followed her, she would help him on that path. Now he had a lot to think about. A system window warned him that his time was running out. Knowing this, if he agreed with her, he would receive her blessing and return to the tutorial. She couldn't hold him there for much longer and wanted to know his answer. Adam assumed he had understood everything. All this time he had been a wanderer without purpose, and the tutorial had nearly driven him to insanity. If he could be guided back to where he truly belonged, he would accept that invitation gladly. The goddess was truly pleased by his decision. Placing her hand on the young man's forehead, she bestowed her blessing upon him, hoping he would fulfill his destiny and purpose. Now he possessed a bit more intelligence and willpower. Back in the tutorial, his friend was shaking his body, extremely worried. Adam had returned to his body, wondering if all of that had been a hallucination. Then he saw the system window before his eyes. It was real. He had indeed met a god. But he was stunned to see that he could no longer perform any attacks. He had lost all his combat abilities. However, he would receive something in place of them. Everything was being properly replaced. He received a legendary ability called One More Light. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Jake seemed to be searching for something. The number of survivors had decreased drastically. In just a matter of minutes, around 200 survivors had ceased to exist. Cecil wanted to know if his friend was worried. He couldn't deny his state of mind. Everyone except Adam had betrayed him, nearly costing him his life. He couldn't make that kind of mistake again. He needed to become much stronger, and now he would do the only thing he could. He would take down another Beast King. Once again, he received a system warning. He was about to enter a dungeon. Inside, he realized the place was massive. It didn't even look like a dungeon at all. He had expected to find another dark and dangerous cave. But this place was truly a marvel. His mission here was to defeat the Great White Stag. It was definitely not the most intimidating creature he had seen, but his friend reminded him that antlered animals were dangerous. He told Cecil to stop that train of thought. Then he asked him to look at the creatures drinking water. They must have been servants of the great stag. At level 65, it was certainly formidable, but he had been expecting something even more challenging. Feeling the ground begin to tremble, he started to worry. Massive hooves stomped against the earth. It seemed he had been very wrong about the difficulty of this place, because he had finally encountered the dungeon's boss. Knowing he needed a closer look, he began approaching. Cecil immediately wanted to retreat into the necklace. The creature was drinking water. It was by far the largest he had ever seen. Beyond that, its presence was truly majestic. Looking at the smaller creatures nearby, he assumed they were its personal guards. This place might truly be worth the effort. Distracted for just a moment, he accidentally stepped on a twig. The sound immediately put the animals on high alert. One of them began to charge up a massive energy ball, which it fired directly at the source of the noise. A completely devastating attack. That was far too dangerous. He needed to be more careful moving forward. Dealing with all of them at once would be impossible. Afterward, the animals calmly resumed feeding. 30 minutes later, Jake had formulated an interesting strategy. He hadn't realized it until he fully focused on his thoughts. This place had 7 lakes forming a large circle. At the center was an 8th larger lake. This was where the dungeon boss resided. It never strayed too far from its place of origin. The real problem was the other deer. Every few minutes, they rotated between lakes, moving clockwise. That was the moment when he could ambush one of the groups without alerting the others. The lakes would be his attack zones. He had to take advantage of this window of opportunity. Now that he understood everything, there was no need to wait any longer. It was time to test whether his theory was correct. One of the deer was drinking water, completely unaware. Meanwhile, the hunter was preparing his most powerful arrow. It was always best to use his strongest attack on larger creatures. The deer was struck before it even realized what had happened. Jake immediately drew the daggers he carried. He knew he had to move fast. There is a little more than a minute left for the next group of creatures to appear. There is no margin for error in your strategy. You need to take down those creatures with a single strike. Finally, he thinks he had completed that attack. Cecil praised his performance, saying it wasn't bad at all. The hunter was curious to know why they gather around those lakes. Since he still has a few seconds to investigate, he decided to look at the water, realizing that it was indeed very interesting. It is not possible to see from the surface, but there are holes at the bottom of these lakes. It is likely that they are connected to the larger lagoon, but he can't imagine why the lakes are shaped this way. His perception alerted him that something was happening. The creatures he had defeated were still alive. He is sure that the attack he delivered was completely fatal. They must certainly have some healing ability, as the damage is almost no longer apparent. He needs to finish off that creature before it alerts the dungeon boss. Since it moves too fast, he might not be able to hit his target. His time was running out, so he decided he would shoot anyway. As expected, he was not able to hit his target, causing massive destruction by hitting a boulder. This put the stronger creatures on high alert. The dungeon boss also noticed what happened. Now the hunter had put himself in a very dangerous situation. Without wasting time, he started running from that place to find shelter. He managed to enrage the entire herd. Cecil was also very worried about what had happened. Jake said he panicked. He wasn't prepared to shoot an arrow so quickly. Now he is having to dodge the creature's attacks. He better be fast, as attacks are coming from all directions. Cecil wants to know if he managed to attract the dungeon boss's attention. The creature remains in the central lake, calmly drinking water, as if it had ordered its minions to handle the situation. Jake hopes there is somewhere he can hide. Looking up, he saw that the creatures had stopped chasing him. He just doesn't know what motivated them to stop. They must certainly have a good reason for halting the hunt. The young man asked Cecil to come outside because he wanted to confirm something. Since the creature can fly, he asked what she was seeing. Everything looked like a vast plain. He also wants to know how the creatures are doing. He learned that they are all returning to the lakes. This is a very interesting observation. He might be wrong, but the lakes form some kind of boundary, and the beasts cannot leave there. As long as he keeps a safe distance, he won't be pursued by them. Seeing the young man climbing a wall, Cecil wanted to know what he was doing. Jake wanted to test something, but needed a higher place. His maximum reach with the bow isn't that great, but from that distance, he might be able to get a clean shot. If they cannot go beyond the lakes, he might be able to take down the creatures from afar. If he is wrong, he will put all his strength into the first arrow, infusing it with his most powerful poison, along with a new skill he had received. All this because, in the worst-case scenario, he only has this one chance. So his target will be the strongest of the creatures. He is now fully prepared and has his bow in position. The creature is now on the other side of his sight. A lot of focus is needed so he doesn't miss the shot. With his skill fully charged, he releases arrow. It flies through the air unstoppably. It's time for him to use his new ability. In midair, the arrow split into 2, allowing him to take down 2 creatures from a safe distance. The dungeon boss quickly realized that something was approaching him. Without leaving his place, his eyes began to shine intensely. He had protected himself with a great magical barrier. The arrow was not able to break through that protection. However, the projectile ended up veering off its trajectory, hitting one of the creatures that was peacefully passing by. Its companions noticed what happened, but the dungeon boss remained intact and safe. Jake realized that this creature was only interested in protecting itself, not caring about its subordinates. Because of this, he will continue shooting from a safe distance. It might not have worked the way he wanted, but for all intents and purposes, one of the creatures is now lifeless. He can worry about the boss later. Now, he will practice his aim. The day remains very bright, and his arrows cutting through the wind like lightning. The creatures are completely unable to dodge, and Jake keeps taking them down one by one. His prey cannot see the danger approaching. From that position, everything around the lake is within his reach. His arrows continue flying throughout the day, defeating the creatures efficiently. Cecil stated that there isn't much poison left. Using that ability for so long is more exhausting than expected. It took an entire day to finish off those creatures, and now only the dungeon boss remained. It's even strange to imagine that the dungeon boss didn't care about what happened to its companions. Knowing that this is very odd, he assumed the creature was planning something. But since it didn't react to the attack, Jake wasn't going to worry about it now, as he needed to rest for a bit. He said he was going to start a fire, and that's when Cecil told him he should see what was happening. The dungeon boss had started doing something different. It had moved to the center of a lagoon, and its horns began to glow. Immediately, all the other lagoons also started glowing, even the bodies of the defeated creatures that didn't seem interesting to them at all. Markings started appearing on the ground. They spread across the entire plain until a massive magical formation was revealed. Jake knows he needs to act immediately. He asked his friend to stay on the rock, but Cecil is very worried about him. Looking closer at the lagoon, the water is very agitated. The more time passes, the larger the dungeon boss becomes. He needs to act before that creature grows to the size of a skyscraper. He realized their ritual is in progress, but he doesn't know what to do to stop it. The creature must be channeling the power of the lagoons as if it were recharging its batteries. If he destroys those lakes, he might be able to stop it from energizing itself. The problem is that he might not be able to do this in the time he has available. The hunter needs to come to a quick conclusion. He remembered that there are holes that keep the entire place connected. That is the solution he has. If all the water is connected, he doesn't need to destroy each lagoon. All he needs to do is poison a single one. The problem is that he used most of his poison to defeat those creatures. Luckily, he had saved something powerful for an emergency. The venom gland of the creature he had defeated in the other dungeon. It's strong enough to bypass his poison resistance, and far more powerful than anything he could create in that place. He knew that collecting that gland would be useful someday, and the moment had arrived. He destroyed the gland to access the poison, letting the liquid fall into one of the lagoons. Immediately, the poison began spreading through the water. In the larger lagoon, the dungeon boss is diving. The poison had already spread significantly, so much so that the color of the water also began to change. Jake is waiting to see if his strategy was correct. He started celebrating, imagining that he had thought the right way, and the magic circle that appeared began to disappear. Cecil is surprised that his friend was able to break that ritual. The dungeon boss's eyes began to glow intensely. The hard part had been solved. Now they could move on to the fun part. Due to the poison, the creature began to grow extremely furious. Jake is advancing toward it, wielding his daggers. He cannot defeat it with arrows alone, much less in a prolonged battle. He is determined to end this fight quickly, preferably executing a single strike. The intensity of the moment caused his bloodline to activate. His quick reflexes allowed him to react swiftly, avoiding the creature's attack, giving him the opportunity to slash it from below. Jake managed to execute a clean and extensive cut on the creature's body. The system notified him that he had defeated the great deer, earning tutorial points for it. Thus, the main objective of that dungeon was completely accomplished. Cecil is very surprised that his friend defeated the creature with a single strike. Jake acknowledges that if he had been half a second slower to react, he would have been hit by those dangerous horns. He only managed to win because of the poison, which must have weakened the creature as well, slowing the monster down enough for him to get close without being in too much danger. Jake is happy that he managed to defeat another dungeon boss. Looking back, he saw that the carcass had begun to glow. A type of crystal was hidden within its body. Corrupted lunar fragment, its energy is highly volatile and it won't last many months. Perhaps the ritual was producing that fragment. Cecil was curious to know what his friend would do with it. He still doesn't know, but he is sure it will be useful in the future. The system notified him that the King of Beasts had taken notice of him, but he needs to defeat 2 more dungeon bosses. The existence of a king captured the hunter's curiosity. That was more interesting than he expected. Meanwhile, other players arrived at that abandoned battlefield. One of them began approaching the bodies scattered on the ground. He decided he would collect equipment since their owners wouldn't need them anymore. Seeing William's body, the boy really liked that armor. He asked his friend to help him carry it, but it seemed stuck to the ground as they couldn't lift it. They did everything they could to move the boy's body, until William suddenly woke up. Now, a few more survivors had been exterminated. William is walking, but he is still injured. He was barely conscious when he finished them off, and it seems he is still in the forest. He is so weak that he can barely feel his own legs. But that doesn't matter because he is alive. He should have died, but that didn't happen. He is certain this is his destiny, and somehow he was chosen. Maybe his happiness, and he is surprised by the emotions he is feeling. He knows what emotions are capable of doing because he remembers very well what Casper did. But he also saw how they can corrupt him, a curse so brutal that it makes him wish for death. That will not happen to him again because he will be the victor, and the true manifestation of perfection. Back at the camp, people are asking more about Adam's experience. He wishes he could say more, but he barely understood the experience he had. What matters is that it offered a path of hope. The warriors, just like Richard, were no longer there. Now they only had each other and needed to start learning to trust. He promised that if they trusted him, he would lead them out of that place. That made some of the people start to feel nervous. It was madness even for him because he had no tools to make them believe. Jonah said she believes in her friend. He has guided her since the day they arrived in the forest. She doesn't know anything about these gods, but she knows that her friend's heart is in the right place, and if he says there is a way, there is no reason not to believe him. The others began talking about it. Slowly, some decided to believe in him. If he was really going to put an end to this, it would be worth following him. Very grateful for everyone's trust, he said he would not fail. Finally, it seemed that his efforts were being rewarded. Now he finally had a purpose in that place, and the system was giving him rewards for what he had done. He had gained many levels in just a few days, a sign that he was on the right path. He had even completed the first mission he received after speaking with the goddess, hoping that the reward for it would be something that could help everyone. Nothing would be easy until they returned to Earth, but he believed they would achieve that goal. Looking into a deep hole, Jake realized it was indeed very large, but it was probably no more than 10 meters deep. Cecil couldn't see the bottom and wanted to know how his friend could. He said it might be a dungeon. To clear this doubt, he decided he would jump, much to Cecil's complete despair. His friend shouldn't be heading into another dungeon so soon. They had barely survived the last one, but they only had a few days left in that place and few people remained. The beasts in the forest were now completely irrelevant. The only thing left for him was to hunt the remaining dungeon bosses, because a king was waiting for him, and a hunter could not ignore such news. Cecil wished he had found a human lazier and slower than his current friend. Since there was no time to waste, it was time to enter that hole. That dungeon was called the Forgotten Sewer. The place was indeed very strange inside. Jake hadn't expected a structure like that to exist in the tutorial. It seemed that for the system, anything was possible. The entire place was coated with magic. Cecil could barely see anything. Before he could finish his sentence, he hit his head on a post. Embarrassed, he asked his friend to pretend that didn't happen. But it's not his fault. Even with his perception, it's difficult to walk in that place. It feels as if the entire place is immersed in mana. Jake started focusing a little more to see if he could sense or perceive anything. Slowly, he was gaining an awareness of that environment. He managed to hear water dripping on a brick wall that had been destroyed, but there was nothing unusual inside that sewer. He asked his friend to return to the pendant, as it might be dangerous to explore without knowing what could happen. It seemed like some kind of labyrinth, and he couldn't tell which paths he had already taken. Wherever he looked, everything seemed identical. Cecil wanted to know if there was any news. The feeling he had was that he had been walking for an eternity. He was already wishing to leave that dungeon when his perception noticed something. Cecil became worried about what might have happened. With his bow in hand, he told his friend not to worry, because there was something behind that wall. Knowing he needed to prepare, he began gathering his arrows. He should have realized it sooner, but the mana in that place was too dense. The creature initiated the attack. He needed to act fast. He managed to hit it with his arrow without much difficulty. The creature fell to the ground and was even uglier than expected. It looked like a mole, the ugliest creature he had seen so far. At least it was defeated, but his perception started alerting him to something. There were several other creatures in that place. It was time to make his bow sing the song of his people. Another mole was exterminated. Since it was difficult to perceive things, one of them managed to bite him, but it was immediately finished off with one of his arrows. That wasn't going to break his focus. He kept defeating the creatures. Despite his effort, he managed to take down all of them. Cecil knew his friend was exhausted. He hoped he had dealt with all of them. But the young man knew there was another creature there. Somewhere behind that wall, he could still feel him. He had the sensation of being constantly watched. The creature began speaking to him, wanting to know why this human had killed the others. Realizing that it could talk, he wanted to know who this creature was. The creature didn't answer, but emanating a threatening aura also said it wanted to know who this person was. It wanted to know if he was an envoy of the king and why he was there. It was definitely referring to what the system had mentioned. So he explained that he was there to defeat the dungeon boss and then take down the king of the forest. The creature said he was just a cub. The king is strong and that human is completely weak. Jake could feel the creature approaching. He was already able to perceive things better. Drawing one of his arrows, he joked about being called a cub, because he was about to show that he was nothing of the sort. Shooting an arrow toward the creature, he felt a blade being wielded. With a single strike, it managed to cut the arrow midair. That creature was a nest guardian, and once again it stated that the human was weak. Meanwhile, the camp was completely overturned. William walked through it and saw that there were no guards. Things must have gotten bad after Richard left. He also had no idea where everyone was. Soon, he came across Adam, who immediately noticed that he was still injured. He had been in terrible condition the last time they saw each other. William wanted to know if he had really gone to the battlefield. He had, but he wasn't talking about his physical wounds. The young man seemed troubled, yet he still managed to do what was right. Those words left him very confused. William imagined he was being persuaded not to finish him off. Adam, on the other hand, wanted to know what he meant by that. The boy had already chosen his path, and he couldn't be convinced with mere words. A bit more convinced, he asked if Adam would do him a favor and stop living. But first, he wanted to know where the others were. The others had already found their places, and soon Adam would find his as well. Consulting the system, he realized that there were 4 survivors left in the tutorial. Thinking that Adam had finished them off, he said that the young man was the real psychopath in that place. But that wasn't what he had done, and he invited William to see for himself. Seeing bodies lying on the ground, he was shocked by the scene. Adam wanted to know if the boy now understood what had happened. They placed their trust in him so they could be sent to the sacred land, a burden he would gladly carry. Those words sounded like madness to William. Perhaps they were, but they could only fight against fate, and having hope was enough for him. Uninterested in continuing the conversation, he revealed that he had wanted to do this for a long time. The two young men positioned themselves as if they were making a prayer. William decided he would attack them both, separating their heads from their bodies. What was left of them fell to the ground, completely lifeless. Immediately, what remained of Adam began to disappear. William didn't understand what that meant. He assumed it was some kind of spell since all of their bodies were vanishing as well. Now he was curious about what that sacred land could be. Either way, he wished them fun. Finally, he had resolved his matters in that place. Now there was only one archer left to be finished off. That threatening creature was still advancing toward Jake, and the young man realized they would no longer be talking. The force of its strike was enough to destroy the ground. But Jake was skilled enough to dodge it. Even so, he barely avoided the impact. With the sword resting on its shoulders, the creature once again said that the human was weak. The hunter noticed that the impact of that sword was extremely strong, and that its wielder was incredibly agile. There was no way he could maintain his distance and rely solely on his bow. He had only one option left for the fight. Seeing that he was wielding daggers, the creature found it interesting. The hunter knew he would have to close the distance to defeat that monster. The two of them began running toward each other, determined to discover who was truly weaker. The blades clashed intensely, producing sparks. Jake also felt that the creature possessed great strength. That moment of tension activated his bloodline. The primal hunter was now able to exchange blows with the creature, managing to land a few cuts on it. Receiving some cuts in return, the fight between them grew fiercer, and their strikes came ever closer. Despite the difficulty, he didn't seem afraid. The creature prepared a powerful slash. Its attack was blocked. It was as if the two were evenly matched. All that excitement made the primal hunter feel even more challenged. The same could be said for the creature, which also showed no hesitation. Once they distanced themselves, it acknowledged that the human was stronger than it had thought. Even so, the king was far stronger than him, because the king was the true apex predator. Jake sensed from the way the creature gripped its sword that an attack was being charged. That was the opening he needed to use his bow. The creature declared that their battle would now be decided. Jake was very curious to see if it could do that while charging its most powerful attack. The masses of energy clashed between them. Both were intensely focused on the moment. After the impact, a red liquid began to pour out heavily. The creature had lost one of its limbs in the exchange and believed itself to be the victor. But upon realizing the extent of its injuries, it knew it had been defeated. Jake approached it, saying that the battle had been interesting and that his opponent had fought well. Terrified, the creature asked if he truly intended to defeat the king. Jake said he would either do it or perish trying. It admitted that it had been imprisoned there by the king and hated him for it. If spared, it would help him seek vengeance. A long time ago, it had created a curse. It would now hand over to the hunter so he could defeat the king. It wished to be avenged in doing so. Jake, still hesitant, promised he would make that happen. As his body disappeared, it thanked the hunter for his promise. For defeating the Nest Guardian, Jake received multiple tutorial points. Cecil said that this last fight was absolute madness. That small sphere was made of dark mana, the last hope of its creator to take revenge on the king of the forest, containing all the resentment of that nest. Knowing he owed something to his adversary, Jake said he would find a way to use that item. Finally, they made it outside and could see the sunlight once again. Stretching, Jake said he could rest for a while now, but he was suddenly struck by a strange sensation that made him draw his daggers. He wanted to know who was there, and a voice greeted him. It was William, who had found him and asked if his rival had missed him. Completely enraged at the sight of him, Jake demanded to know what the boy was doing there. That question could only be a joke, but he didn't understand what William meant. He should know very well what it meant. There were only two survivors left now, a battle between them to determine who was the true champion. Jake, still confused, asked what the boy had done. Only then did he realize that there were only two survivors in the tutorial. It was too shocking for him and hard to believe. Grinning maniacally, William laughed at the boy, who hadn't even looked at the number of survivors until now, revealing that he had finished off Adam the day before. That revelation made Jake seethe with rage, and he went on to say that he had removed the boy's head just as he had done with all the others. Before he could finish speaking, Jake had already grabbed his head with his hand. It was time to make that twisted boy stop breathing. Jake hadn't had many friends growing up, but he had made one close friendship. That boy's name was Patrick. They were connected by common interests and liked to read the same things. The Tomb Dancer was their favorite story. That edition sold out quickly, but his friend managed to buy one, meaning they both got a copy. They shared everything they had in common. Even their meals were shared. They also liked wearing the same clothes, and their interest in games was perfectly aligned. When he asked to borrow his magazine, it made sense to lend something in return. A week later, he asked for his game back. Patrick asked for a little more time, seeming uneasy. Jake wanted to know if something had happened, and the boy replied that he just wanted to play a little longer. Since he was traveling that day, he wanted to have a game with him. Patrick said he didn't have it at that moment, so he couldn't return it. Jake said he could go to his house to pick it up, but he noticed his friend was acting strangely. Finally, Patrick admitted that he had broken the game. Jake took a long time to believe it, and his friend apologized. It might seem silly explaining it now, but they didn't speak for 2 weeks. Until one day during the holidays, Patrick said he had something for him. But when he went to meet his friend, he had disappeared. Strangely, he later found out that Patrick had been transferred to another school. It took him years to discover the truth. His game had been stolen from his friend. Some idiots took it on the very day it was supposed to be returned. Patrick had even saved up money to buy a new copy, only to be robbed again. That time, the boy was beaten so badly that his parents decided to send him away. Maybe he had wanted to hide the truth because if he told his friend, he would have gotten involved in the mess. The strangest thing was what Jake did after learning all this. He never did anything about it, never even tried to reach out to his friend. He never apologized for abandoning him, or said he admired what he had tried to do. He just moved on with his life, pretending nothing had happened. That's the kind of person he was. Jake had become someone who simply accepted his own problems, a coward who ran from any difficulty. But now things had changed, and he was a completely different person. Consumed by rage, he began crushing William's face. His blows were so powerful that their impact echoed through the ground. Even Cecil was starting to worry about what he was seeing. But the young man was already out of control, and he continued pounding that wretched boy's face. Noticing the blue glow in Jake's hands, Cecil couldn't tell what it was. The fight that was supposed to happen ended before it even began, because it was nothing more than a completely one-sided massacre. It was as if something inside Jake had finally found its way out, in a violent and intense manner. At that moment, Jake was surpassing all his limits, and the price for that was being paid by the unsuspecting fool before him. His blows could be heard throughout the entire forest. The animals could hear it. The ground trembled under the force of the strikes. Jake's hands began to be stained with blood. Cecil had to warn his friend that what lay before him was just a lifeless body now. He stepped in front of Jake to bring him back to reality. It was over. There was no need for him to continue. Shocked, Jake asked what he had done. He was quickly overtaken by sorrow, because now none of his friends were alive anymore. They had all perished in that place. Adam, Casper were no longer there. Even Caroline, who wasn't missed, was gone too. Everyone was gone. Jake was completely alone. Cecil said they should keep moving. Staying there wouldn't do his friend any good, but Jake revealed that he didn't feel like moving. Cecil told him he couldn't stay there forever. Before his friend could touch him, time had stopped. The leaves that were about to fall to the ground froze in the air. Walking beside William's body, the man said that everything was a mess. He said he was very disappointed with what had happened. Placing his hand over the boy's face, he said they would try again soon. The Viper said that stealing was ugly. It was there to prevent that from happening. Velastromo said that it didn't matter at all, and he was to blame for it because the Viper had told him not to touch his chosen one, yet he lost his own anyway. Approaching him, the Viper said that taking that body would have consequences. The old man wanted to know what he planned to do with it, but that was up to his chosen one to decide. And if it was up to him, then it was up to the Viper as well. The old man wanted to know what the god desired. If he took the body, he would owe the god a favor. The old man said things weren't that simple. He said he would compensate the Viper's chosen one, but the god would not allow the old man to get close to him. Either he left the body there, or he would owe the Viper a favor. The man said that everything that happened there was his responsibility because his chosen one had ruined the tutorial. Losing patience, the Viper said he wouldn't repeat himself. Seeing that he wouldn't be able to convince him, he preferred to owe a favor to the god. And he once again touched William's body. Finally, time started moving again. Meanwhile, the Viper muttered that all of this was too tedious. Jake asked who that was. The Viper found it interesting since time should have been frozen. But his bloodline was still activated. He had been able to perceive everything. The Viper told him to keep that a secret. Bloodlines were rare and his seemed exceptionally powerful. But that wasn't what Jake wanted to talk about. He wanted to know who that old man was and what he had done with William's body. He was a god called Eversmile, a maniac, who now owed him a favor. Jake didn't like that he had taken the body of the one who had exterminated his friends, but the Viper said that a favor from a god was no small thing. And if it was any consolation, his friends weren't dead. Some of them were, but somehow Adam, Bertram, and even Casper were safe on the other side of the tutorial. The young man didn't understand how that could be possible. When it came to powerful classes, Adam was truly exceptional. Being an augur, he wasn't easy to kill. As for Casper, he would have to see for himself. Meanwhile, William would end up being revived as he was also a god's chosen one. The Viper said it had done everything it could to ensure his chosen one got his revenge. It was the one who made them meet, and it was definitely not disappointed by the outcome. Jake had thought the system didn't like interventions. The Viper revealed that it tried to make as few interventions as possible, and so far, it had worked. The young man wanted to know what that old man had meant about them ruining the tutorial. It seemed the boy had many questions. It would be easier to show him everything at once. As he was touched on the face, his vision was illuminated. This was a story of two protagonists, one who entered with friends and one who entered alone. The solitary one quickly discovered a way to eliminate the others. The other had a harder time as his group was attacked on the very first day. Two of his friends perished that night, Jake and Jonah. But that wasn't what happened. At least that was what should have happened. While dealing with grief, Adam ended up aligning himself with Richard and Nicholas. That Archer was defeated by Jake. That was when the boys started changing the course of the story. Naturally, a web of manipulation unfolded, which would eventually lead to Richard's downfall. Nicholas was skilled, but too weak in direct combat, which made his rise to power much faster. In time, he would end up doing everything he did until only he remained. There would be no one left to stop him, and Eversmile would have had the most powerful disciple. But that wasn't how things played out. The course of fate was altered because of a single variable. A hunter who awakened a bloodline no one knows, surviving a battle he should have lost. That is why, for Eversmile, this tutorial was ruined. But in both universes, Jake's friends were finished off. He shouldn't blame himself for it. Angrily, the boy said he could have done things differently, but the Viper revealed that he could have been finished as well. What the boy wanted was at least to try, but he had been nothing but a coward. However, the Viper told him he had done nothing disgraceful. All he had wanted was to stay out of other people's problems. But that wasn't how the boy saw it. That weakness wasn't his responsibility. Intrigued, Jake said he wouldn't give in to madness and ignore those who were important to him. No one was his responsibility until he chose for them to be. Jake said he didn't want to leave with the Viper, sad and lonely until the end of time. Those words made the god reflect for a moment, but there was something Jake still wanted to say. If one day he dies in battle, he hopes things remain that way. Cecil didn't understand that statement. Jake, on the other hand, affirmed that if he were revived, it would be meaningless. He didn't want a divine card up his sleeve. He wanted his fights to be real, to have something to lose. And now he still had a dungeon boss to defeat. Cecil tried to intervene, but the Viper told him to be patient. His chosen one had been through a lot, and from now on things would only get worse. Cecil didn't understand those words. The Viper planned to keep it to himself as his chosen one wouldn't understand. But as a god, he could alter fate slightly and foresee the future. When he made the two meet, the outcome of that battle was already predictable. But he was also able to see a little beyond that, and he saw more than enough. Jake would fight the king of the forest before the tutorial ended, but he was destined to lose that battle. The master of the temple knew the tutorial was almost over. She wanted to know how the chosen one was doing. He was doing well, in some ways. She didn't understand what that was supposed to mean. After what he had done to the other chosen one, things were a bit different now. The boy was much less talkative, and was finishing off far more creatures, accelerating his encounter with the final dungeon boss, who was no match for the boy. The Viper didn't completely disapprove of that, but he noticed that his chosen one was becoming increasingly cold. He was visibly apathetic, as if he had become a machine with a single purpose, to achieve all his objectives, and now only one remained, the king of the forest. There were only a few hours left before the tutorial ended. Cecil wanted to know their plan for the next day. Jake said it was the same as always. The king of the forest would appear. Defeating him was all that was left. The little one wanted to know if his friend was worried about something. Jake stared into the fire, deep in thought. He could confide in his friend. It was obvious he wasn't okay, even if he claimed otherwise. Everything in this tutorial had led to this moment. If he defeated the king of the forest, it would all be worth it. Confident that he wouldn't lose, Cecil fell silent, because he knew what would really happen. Needing rest, he wished his friend a good night. Trying to find the right words, Cecil said he was very grateful for everything Jake had done. Jake didn't understand the gratitude, but if it weren't for him, he would still be trapped in the pendant. And worse than that, you would still be completely alone. Thanks to Jake, you got to spend a lot of time with a good friend. Even knowing that things weren't easy, he owed everything to him. Now he would let his friend rest. Jake was also grateful to have him as a companion. Once again, they bumped fists, but Cecil couldn't forget what he had heard from the Viper, that his friend was fated to lose the battle. He deeply wished the god was wrong. The next morning, they heard the sound. Jake didn't know what it was yet. It was so powerful that it felt like an earthquake. He needed to find out what caused it, which made Cecil very worried. His instincts led him to the right place, and he was certain it was something enormous. His eyes beheld something grand. Before him stood the king of the forest. The king said he recognized him, because the hunter had reached a place beyond what was expected. But this is the place where his journey will end. A mission was given by the system. The chosen one could decide how his story would conclude. He could leave the tutorial, retaining everything he had gained, along with an additional 50 million tutorial points. The second option was to fight the king of the forest, but he could be finished off in the process. If victorious, he would receive 300 million tutorial points. Jake realized that he could leave safely, but he could also fight that creature for an even greater reward. This wasn't even a choice. He would never refuse a fight, but he wasn't an idiot either. Even without his abilities, it was clear that this creature was immensely dangerous. Now the hunter was faced with a great dilemma. He began remembering what he had said the night before, and the overconfidence he carried. He couldn't deceive himself, and so he made his decision. He told the king of the forest that he had only one request, the king decided he would listen to the young man. Jake asked that he take one of his arrows to determine the true gap in power between them. The creature found that fascinating as the boy wished to perceive the majesty of a king. It said it would do exactly as the hunter requested. This wasn't a trick. He wouldn't unleash some random attack. But the young man felt he needed to test his limits. His most powerful attack, combined with his most potent poison. This was the pinnacle of his development, his ultimate strike. It could take down anything, even the king of the forest. His arrows soared through the air. The king of the forest was intrigued by that attack. The impact was powerful, causing a massive explosion. The dust cloud forced the young man to shield his face. He observed the resulting shockwave, only to see the king of the forest standing completely unscathed. That was not what he had expected. The creature had caught the arrow with its fingers. It said that was an interesting attempt, but everything was utterly useless when it came to the king of the forest. Even so, the creature admitted it was impressed that someone as weak as that human had managed to touch its body. One attack was what he had been granted. It was unfortunate that the hunter had wasted his chance, for he had been given an opportunity to surrender, and now he had sealed his fate. The creature attacked, launching a projectile meant to make him suffer. Jake knew he needed to prepare or he would be finished right there. The primal hunter emerged. He was surprised that his bloodline had activated at that moment, but it allowed him to dodge the attack, taking the opportunity to counterattack. The king of the forest warned that he would need to be much faster than that. Jake had no chance to strike. He had to focus on defending his life. His body slammed into a boulder with devastating force. He was already suffering internal injuries. As the crimson liquid trickled from his mouth, the creature scoffed, saying it was a disgrace. It was no fool like the beasts he had fought before, and it had expected more from a mere hunter. Jake yelled for the creature to shut up, while the king of the forest was eager to see if he could evade the next strike, unleashing the same attack once again. All the hunter could do was move through the shadows. That way he managed to disappear before being struck. He needed to keep his distance from that creature. This time, he successfully shot a few arrows at it. Seeing the attack, the king of the forest said it wouldn't save him. Clapping its hands together, it deflected the arrows, advising the hunter to think harder. In fact, the shockwave was enough to destroy the arrows midair. Nothing he had tried so far had been effective. He realized that using his bow wouldn't work. He needed even more distance to come up with a plan. The king of the forest declared that fleeing was the ultimate sign of cowardice, but the hunter wouldn't be able to hide from him. Explosions began erupting throughout the forest. Cecil moved to higher ground, hoping he was safe atop that rock. But hearing the detonations echo through the forest, he grew increasingly worried. What he was hearing was definitely no joke. His concern for his friend's life became immense. Jake knew he had to figure out a way to deal damage to that creature. Otherwise, he had no chance of winning. The creature surely had some kind of armor, considering even his most powerful attack had done nothing. The king of the forest said he already knew where the hunter was hiding. He just didn't understand why he kept running from the inevitable. Finally, he noticed something that could change the course of events. The creature kept provoking the hunter, saying he was clinging to empty hope and that the future could not be avoided. He could not be defeated. Then he realized that the hunter had fled once again. Preparing his attack, he began bidding farewell to the human. New explosions erupted throughout the forest. He believed that not even the hunter could have escaped that. Now all that remained was the true king of the forest. At the epicenter of the explosion, a black sphere remained. It began to crack from the impact. Full of curiosity and arrogance, confident in his overwhelming strength, the king of the forest approached it. Shadows started to envelop him intensely. That was the item given by the resentful creature. It had taken a long time to craft that option. Its only wish was that it could be useful in this battle. The king began to complain as he felt his body burning. The mole said he was no longer a king. The creature had no idea how that had happened. The outer layer of the king's body was melting. This might be the hunter's only chance. Finally, the creature realized its opponent was formidable. He needed to end this before it became too dangerous. Jake's bloodline activated, and he sensed that his adversary had become noticeably slower. Now he could see its movements clearly. That gave him a glimmer of hope. He could see his victory. This time, he would use the lunar stone fragment against him, an item he had obtained after defeating one of the dungeon bosses. A highly unstable and immensely powerful artifact, one that had been crafted through a ritual. The fragment managed to pierce the king of the forest. Jake pushed even harder to drive it in completely. He poured everything he had into determining the outcome of this fight. For the first time, fear could be seen in the creature's eyes. A massive flash of light erupted in the middle of the forest. Cecil had no idea what had happened. The light was so intense that he couldn't see anything. After it faded, a dense cloud of dust rose. Even though he was wounded, the king was still standing. Jake couldn't understand how the creature remained intact. Now he was furious. The pathetic beasts and that inferior human were detestable. He was tired of this game. He would not allow this farce to continue much longer. It was time to end his enemy's life. The creature didn't understand how it had been made to feel pain. It should have been impossible for a mere human to accomplish all of this. He had always been the king, superior to all others since the day he was born. The system had placed him in this forest to fight against the dungeon bosses, and he had defeated them all. None of the creatures had ever been able to surpass him. After defeating them, he became the undisputed king of the forest, and consequently, the final boss of the tutorial. Yet that insignificant human was giving him so much trouble. That human had forced him into a position of negligence, and in a way he was grateful because he hadn't planned to use this. The king had no other choice. He told the hunter that this was a victory he should take pride in. Jake didn't understand what that energy was, but he assumed it was an attack. Something strange happened to the creature's mask. The king had never intended to reveal his true identity, as it was not something easily done. But against this opponent, it had become necessary to show him what true superiority meant. Jake tried to look, but the wind was too strong. His feet were being dragged across the ground. And then after seeing the true face of his enemy, he felt himself being struck by a mental attack. A searing pain shot directly through his head. It was as if his soul was being torn apart from the inside. Not only he, but every living being nearby felt it as well. Even though Cecil was far away, he could feel the attack's presence. Even at that distance, he was affected. He knew his friend couldn't endure this much longer. Jake clutched his head, groaning in agony. It was as if he were being consumed by pure madness. A desperate sensation coursed through his body. The king said that the hunter had fought well, but now he had finally met his end. Jake refuses to give up. He had endured too many trials to reach this point. He must win, no matter the cost. But his body had already collapsed. His wounds grew more severe. The king of the forest began bidding farewell to the hunter. Jake fell to the ground, unable to move. The vision the Viper had seen had come true. His chosen one was destined to be defeated in this battle. The outcome of this fight had been decided before it even began. Remembering what happened with William, the system began a countdown. There was something inside the hunter, and it had finally broken free, as if something inside him had ruptured. The countdown continued rising. Jake was slowly surpassing all of his limits. His fingers began twitching slightly. Meanwhile, the menacing creature distanced itself from its defeated opponent. Glancing back, it realized that something had happened. The hunter's body was no longer on the ground. He had awakened yet another new ability. His eyes were completely transformed. Jake had broken past his limits and struck the king with brutal force. Even without an expression on his face, it was clear that the creature felt pain. The sheer impact of the blow sent the creature flying far away. Jake did not stand still to see what would happen next. The king noted that his opponent's speed had increased immensely. Yet he continued being relentlessly struck by the hunter. No one had ever survived after witnessing his true form. But he was wrong. This hunter had not survived. Because what stood before him was no longer a normal human. It was a beast driven by pure survival instinct. This was truly impressive, because his enemy was a real monster. Jake stood over the lifeless body of the creature. His face remained expressionless. His hands were still stained with blood. With the fight concluded and his strength completely drained, his body collapsed. The tutorial had finally ended. In the divine dimension, a god wondered if the hunter had succeeded. It was unbelievable that the boy had altered fate itself. The Viper cheerfully celebrated, even had doubted, but its chosen one had done the impossible. The woman asked if he was still alive. The Viper confirmed he had died. It was his new ability that had allowed his body to keep fighting. The woman thought that meant he had fought for nothing, until the Viper said that everything had been at stake in that moment. His chosen one had proven himself, not just to those inside the tutorial, but to every being across the multiverse. It was a shame that he wouldn't be able to claim his rewards. The woman asked if the god wasn't going to revive his chosen one. The god said no, that had been the boy's choice, but the system might have other plans for him. His body lay motionless in the devastated battlefield. Ever since the battle had ended, he hadn't moved. His eyes were shut, his body completely still. It took a long time before something happened. Suddenly, his face twitched. The hunter's consciousness was elsewhere. Finally, he managed to open his eyes. He was sitting on a chair in front of a table. He wasn't sure if he was alive, but it seemed that he had survived, even if he didn't understand how. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tob's channel.